Chapter 3251, A King and an Emperor, 4. The first was a time-stop ability. While useless on Leonel, that didn't mean it was so on his summons. The second was a powerful telekinesis ability, one that went beyond just controlling things with his mind, but could take Gervais's imagination and force it to become reality. Not only were both of these shockingly powerful abilities, both of them were at the savant level. Leonel had only just had this thought when a third ability index came. Chains manifested from the depths of the second dimension, swirling with auras similar to that of a regulator. Leonel had never seen an ability index like this one, but he was truly shocked nonetheless. An ability index capable of mimicking a regulator. Just how powerful were the trump cards his grandfather had on hand? Leonel had no choice but to be quick on his feet, swapping out his bow for his spear once again. His wrist flickered as he fell back, clanging against the surging chains that threatened to suffocate him from all sides. Unfortunately, Blackstar and the Sea Goddess weren't so lucky. Leonel only diverted his attention for the most insignificant of split seconds. And yet there was a fourth ability index that almost did him in right then. The chains suddenly exploded in weight and density. It was an ability index that reminded Leonel of Noah's, but simply on a completely different level. A normal amount of weight wouldn't throw Leonel off, but it felt like an entire universe had just been thrown at him. He clashed with a chain and spear bent into a U shape, nearly snapping back on him. A sickening crunch came from Leonel's arm as he tried to maintain his grip. He succeeded, but at the cost of his forearm bending in the wrong direction. The pain didn't reflect in Leonel's eyes by much other than a flickering light. Someone else would have used the momentum of the blow to try and make some distance, but Leonel had already regained his focus. He realized that this was exactly what Gervais wanted him to do. "All right," Leonel said lightly. "Since you seem to really want to kill me, if I keep treating this like a joke, you just might think that I'm some sort of pushover, huh, Gramps?" Leonel's liquid divine armor spread over his skin and robes, snapping his forearm back into place. His King Force Dharma took shape above his head, and his body seemed flooded with the Force in an instant. His gaze became a deeper hue of purple, and his hair looked as though sparkling amethysts were hidden within. His body spun instead of retreating. Clang, 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 clang. With his grip on his spear tightening, he unleashed a torrent of cyclical blows that almost shattered the regulator chains. By this point, Gervais had already appeared high above the chained Blackstar and Sea Goddess. His hands were rapidly forming their own seals, his scepter floating about them. Leonel only needed a glance to know that rather than killing him, Gervais wanted to take them for himself. Overestimating yourself. Leonel's eyes unleashed a glow, and at that moment, Blackstar and the Sea Goddess broke free of their time, freeze, and the regulator chains. Gervais's eyes narrowed, realizing that Leonel had just done something quite profound. He was breaking the rules of summons, using his King Force to give them abilities they shouldn't have. With his connection with them, he had linked their Dream Force to his own, allowing him to bestow his abilities onto them. This was King Force, a force truly fit for a king and his subjects. Roarara. Blackstar slashed out. Gervais was still in the middle of his seals and couldn't easily back out without causing backlash to his Dream Force. Leonel thought he had him when a fifth ability index activated. Gervais split into two perfect clones. Blackstar's claw broke through one of them, shattering him into a rain of blood and showering the now murky emerald waters below. However, the second Gervais didn't even react. What? Leonel was truly speechless this time. He had never seen an ability index like this one, something that was suddenly becoming a running theme. If he had to call it something, it would be Schrodinger's ability index. The clone Gervais had formed wasn't a clone at all. It was him, 100% him. However, the laws of reality couldn't decide which one was the true Gervais, and it wasn't confirmed until after one of them died. But the thing was, Gervais seemed to have manipulated the scales somehow. With yet another savant ability, he was able to decide that whichever died was the fake one ahead of time. It was an ability that even Leonel had a hard time wrapping his head around. This was beyond just being powerful, it was practically rewriting reality. Gervais raised his scepter high. There was a pulse of light and a huge accumulation of force gathered, forming an enormous star above his head. He looked like nothing more than a tiny shadow beneath its enormous body. Leonel knew that it was yet another ability index, one that seemed the simplest of them all, and yet held a profound ability hidden away in the shape it took, that of a star. Leonel took a breath and exhaled. He had already said that he would get serious, but even then, he found himself holding back somewhat. Somewhere deep inside, he felt that his grandfather was still weaker than the demoness. If he couldn't defeat him while messing around, the odds that he could defeat the demoness would be next to nothing. A mixture of familial ties and a small strand of doubt buried deep within himself mixed together to disrupt his better judgment. Leonel looked up to gaze into his grandfather's emerald eyes. This time, he didn't speak. The light faded from his eyes and he seemed to become a cold, calculating machine. Slowly, he raised his spear, his royal crest dharma, and his violet star, appearing to finish off the trifecta of his three dharmas. Leonel vanished just as his grandfather sent his attack down in a slow arc. Chapter 3252, A King and an Emperor 5. Chapter 3252, A King and an Emperor 5. Leonel raised a palm to the skies, appearing beneath the star his grandfather sent toward him. It looked like a simple ability index this time, but it was truly anything but. This ability index was capable of causing a perfect fusion between star force and any other force, thus giving it the ability to accumulate a large amount of force in a short period of time. Stars across existences were responsible for the existence of force to begin with. It had to be remembered that Earth force was only responsible for forming the anchor that force attached themselves to. It was stars that truly produced them in large quantities. So just what kind of concept was it to be able to form a star of any force you already had control over? It was like Gervais was his own walking generator, having access to an infinite supply of force. But it wasn't just a matter of quantity, or even just quality either. Both were off the charts. But what was truly shocking was the speed with which Gervais could accumulate both. This scale of attack was simply too shocking. It should take several minutes or even hours to accumulate this much force. Otherwise, one would have to rely on a large-scale formation or something of the sort instead. Yet, all Gervais had done was casually raise his scepter into the air, and he had already accumulated enough energy to feed over 10 God Realm worlds in a single breath. There wasn't a single one of Gervais's ability indexes that wasn't broken beyond reason, and Leonel had no reason to believe that these were the last of them. He had already come to understand just how his grandfather had done this. This was obviously the product of an evolved form of assimilate, where Gervais was able to take the ability indexes of his summons for himself. Over the years, Gervais had secretly accumulated the broken ability of several targets. Back on Earth, he had even had an entire prison of savants to keep in check. Who was to say that he hadn't also gotten more abilities from them? Indeed, the foundation that Gervais had built for himself gave him the right to be arrogant. It gave him the right to look down on the world and proclaim himself emperor. It gave him the right to ask this foolish grandson of his just who he thought he was. He was born the genius of a generation, and maybe even that wasn't enough to describe just what level he stood alone at. He was so feared by the enemies of his 09052 family for what he might grow to be in the future that they sacrificed billions of lives just to destroy the fox before he had a chance to rise up. But now he had. He was no longer that little boy who could only watch everything be destroyed in front of him. He was Gervais Fox, emperor of this world. And even his grandson didn't have the right to stand in his way. The eyes of both men flashed at once, roars leaving their lips as they clashed. Leonel felt an overwhelming might press down on his palms, and he was almost instantly sent flying back. But the issue was that the star followed with him, sticking to his hand and suffocating him from above. It was so mind-numbingly large that the idea of sidestepping it before was impossible, let alone doing so now. However, there remained a blazing intent in Leonel's eyes, a strong sense of duty, respect, and most of all, unbridled arrogance. To form stars was nice. To create them was another matter entirely. These seemed to be the same things, but as a sovereign of creation, Leonel knew the difference well. Leonel's arm pulsed, and all at once, a force art raced across the body of the star. In one moment, it looked like a star of emerald flames, and in the next, it was suppressed by a cage of complex violet runes. In an instant, Leonel had drawn a force art to cover the body of a star as though it was as easy as flipping over his palm. A natural force art. No, an anti-natural force art, one that bent creation to such an extreme that it became no different from destruction. In what felt like a distant past, Leonel had faced off against the spirituals of the dimensional verse, and they had a huge natural force art net over their entire planetary system that had almost cost him his life. Back then, he had been fascinated by their methods. They were able to tune their natural force art to the resonance of their solar system, allowing them to gather power from it directly and even help individuals to display more strength than normal. And here, Leonel had just done the same. His grandfather's ability index was powerful, but it automated too much. The only reason it could work was because it relied so heavily on the laws of the world and the natural abilities of Starforce. That was precisely where its strength came from, but that also meant that it had the same vulnerabilities of other stars. If you knew what you were doing, then its strength could become your own. Leonel swept his spear backward, one hand still on the falling star as his violet hair danced in the wind. The pressure of the gravity threatened to rip him apart, but as far as he was concerned, this star was already his. Ing! The howl of spear force sang through the air. The violet rune-covered star pulsed, and then the violet star hanging behind Leonel's head rotated just a single time. And then, Gervais's star suddenly vanished. An enormous vacuum appeared in the space it had left behind. For such a large object to suddenly disappear left a black hole-level force of suction in its wake. Winds howled, and space shattered, collapsing in itself. Even Gervais couldn't help but also be sucked in, while Leonel himself didn't fight against the current in the slightest. Instead, he held on to the very spear he had swept backward as his body began to glow even brighter than the star that had just disappeared. That was when it all sank in for Gervais. Leonel had taken the power of the star for himself, and he was concentrating it all into a single attack, concentrated into a region that wasn't even fraction the size of the original star. Blaring warning signs of danger filled Gervais's mind as his aura solidified. His body stabilized in the air as Leonel shot toward him like a rocket out of orbit. Gervais unleashed a roar, his robes shattering to pieces to reveal a body pulsing with a shocking vascularity. At the same time, the echoes of his heartbeat and the raging blood through his veins began to boom across the air, seemingly having been suppressed earlier by his now shattered robes. He held out his scepter in his hands and then pulled it back as well as though he was getting ready to thrust a spear. The head of a dragon wrapped around the pearl, making it look as though the emerald beast was trying to swallow it whole. Gervais's golden band crown cracked beneath the pressure as the illusory green dragon around his scepter suddenly exploded in size, and then doubled again, and then again. By the time it doubled once more, Leonel was there. Their gazes clashed in the air, and space shuddered and cracked. The churning waters below had been blown so far apart that one could see clear to the bottom of the ocean, and even that wasn't enough as its moist earth exploded and shattered beneath the pressurized waves of their accumulating attacks. Blackstar and the Sea Goddess vanished just as the two unleashed everything they had, spear and scepter meeting high in the skies. The clash was so shocking that their auras met several kilometers apart, so powerful and reverberating that they fought for dominion over large swaths of land. However, in the end, you should have spent more effort learning to craft, old man. Crack. Gervais's scepter cracked. Its pearl splintered as a fissure appeared on its surface in a single instant. Bang! The dragon head shattered with it and the scepter was blown away. Gervais's arm snapped backward, a rain of blood bursting from the limb as a pressurized wind tore it apart. But that was only the wind itself. Soon after, the force came. Gervais was swallowed up whole, and his body seemed to vanish under the enormous current of violet energy. A silence fell for but a moment before the green waters that had been sent soaring off in tsunami-like waves came crashing back, filling the hole left behind by the two. Leonel stood in the air, gasping for breath, a tingling discomfort coming from his mind as he looked up. Chapter 3253, A King and an Emperor, 6. Chapter 3253, O King and an Emperor. 6. Gervais stood high in the skies, seemingly half dead. He was missing an arm, and even extended from that, large swaths of skin and flesh had been seared off from his body, making him look like half a skeleton. Even half of his face was gone, leaving nothing but a green eyeball on one side of him. And that psych ball continued to carry a cold light as it stared down at Leonel. Leonel stared back at him, not moving as he took deep breaths. He could feel that there was still a very potent danger coming from Gervais, as though the man was staring at him now only to try and figure out what method of murder he would like to choose. However, Leonel wasn't someone who would casually lose out in terms of momentum. He too was injured, but his injuries weren't nearly as severe as his grandfather's. The one that had come out on top was clear and obvious, at least for now. A flame suddenly flickered in Gervais's eyeball before it expanded, and suddenly swallowed up the fleshless parts of his body. The green flame danced, and Leonel sensed pulses of Dreamforce as one summon after another was silently killed. In the next moment, the flames vanished, revealing an indifferent and perfectly healed Gervais. Leonel watched silently and still didn't say or do much of anything. It was as though it didn't matter to him whether the Emperor healed or not, or maybe he knew that there wasn't much he could do to stop it in the first place. Gervais grabbed at the air, and another scepter appeared. "Is this necessary?" Leonel asked indifferently. This time, the amusement in his eyes had long vanished. Or maybe it had already vanished after he realized that Gervais was truly doing his best to kill him. He was accepting of that. It was fine enough. What he wasn't accepting of was someone that didn't know when to accept a loss. The scepter Gervais had just brought out was weaker than the last one, and it didn't even matter that he had been able to heal himself, because the price for doing so was heavier than not. Gervais had definitely sacrificed those summons, and in order to heal himself from that level of injury, they had to be powerful as well. That meant that they had powerful ability indexes, which meant that Gervais had also lost a significant portion of his combat prowess as well. Without those ability indexes, he would be more predictable. Though Leonel had been training all of his senses on his grandfather, he knew that his mental capacity had already surpassed that of Gervais's own. If Gervais had fewer trump cards to pull from, then he would only continuously be outmaneuvered by Leonel. To make matters worse, his main weakness, his lack of support from his weapons, would only be exacerbated now that he was being forced to use an inferior weapon. Leonel was already a league beyond him, but now it was even worse. In a fight that Leonel had no intention of making life and death, he didn't want his grandfather to do this. This sort of effort, scraping at the bottom of the barrel for the slightest chance of survival when the battle was already decided, was something that you would only do if you felt like you were facing off against a real enemy. Was it worth it? Even now, you are still so naive. I thought you would have grown up. Gervais's voice remained calm and indifferent. You've done enough, Leonel said as the anger in his voice could no longer be hidden. Do you think I don't have methods of restraining you without killing you? Do you think you have the ability to force me to make a martyr out of you? Leonel felt like he was being insulted. If he was still being treated like a child at this point, then what had he been fighting for all this time? Or could it be that he had just overestimated his grandfather and his mental fortitude? Gervais met Leonel's gaze calmly, the reverberating beat of his heart still echoing with great force. You can't always have everything you want in life. The hardest things to control don't come from yourself. Leonel's pupils trembled. As much control as Leonel liked to have, as much power and authority his ability index gave him over his own body, it was only that, his own body. This was the hardest thing for a leader to grasp. Juggling one's own emotions was hard enough without also having to consider how everyone else felt. Goggles had taught Leonel this intimately. Leonel had given him everything, trying to treat him like he was the same Goggles he was when he first met them. But a person's experience shaped as much of who they were as their natural dispositions. The Goggles that Leonel knew died that day in the battle against King Alexandra. He was never going to come back. The only way he could accept the things that happened back then was by also accepting that the Goggles he was forced to kill was a completely different person. You could give a person the world, you could do everything for them, you could even have their best interest in mind every step of the way, but what you could never control was how they reacted to your love. Gervais was a man of great pride. He was an emperor who had dedicated his life, given every ounce of blood, sweat, and tears he had to reach this stage. What was he supposed to do now? Just accept things in stride? Would Leonel have just casually accepted it if he had lost? Or would he have fought to his very last breath for the last chance to grasp the fate he wanted more than even his own beating heart? Leonel wanted to build a world for his family. He wanted his children to be able to frolic through the fields and for his wife to be able to pop out as many of those little munchkins as she wanted. He wanted his grandfather and grandmother to live in harmony, for the Fox family to bloom the way his grandfather wanted, and for his grandmother to finally find the peace and security in herself that she had always been looking for. He wanted his brothers to find the loves of their lives, or marry the ones they had already chosen. He wanted them to grow their own families, to feel what it was like to smile and laugh without a worry in the world. He wanted humans to have their place in the world again, for the races to live in harmony, to form a world where one's talent didn't have to decide the quality of life you would live. He had wanted all of these things for so long, even though he had never said them in so many words. Or maybe he had, and they were just often marred by hatred, anger, or even his own insecurities. If he thought about it, would he allow his grandfather to stand in his way if he had lost this battle? Would he truly have been able to accept it in stride? Naive, indeed. The reality was that Leonel had never considered the possibility of losing, so he hadn't spared a single thought of it. He could split his mind billions of ways, and yet not one had gone down this line of thought, and maybe neither had his grandfather until they were both forced to face this moment. Leonel's gaze never left his grandfather even as the man raised his scepter. At that moment, he could see something that had always been there. The mountain of weight that they both shared. Large and looming, the mass pressed down onto Gervais's back, almost forcing his back to round over and collapse. Gervais seemed to barely be standing at all, but he continued to do so. Until the moment he breathed out his last, he wouldn't allow this weight to fall. Unshed tears accumulated in Leonel's eyes as he seemed to see the world for the first time. The last thin barrier of something he hadn't even known was holding him back broke apart, shattering to pieces. The three dharmas to Leonel's back cracked apart, falling in a rain of violet. The violet condensed, the aura of a forming idol causing the world to shake and rumble. A tear fell from Leonel's eyes as the violet condensed to his forehead. All three of his complex dharmas formed an idol so simple that it was hard to believe it had come from them. It was a single thin band of violet gold across his forehead. It perfectly mirrored the now cracked green-gold band of his grandfather, except it was whole and complete. Leonel raised his spear as his aura seemed to vanish. The world could no longer seem to measure him. "I understand," he said calmly. "Then, come." Chapter 3263, Thronebearer. Chapter 3263, Thronebearer Aina found her control of life force being constrained by the Thronebearer's domain of thorns. Her own bloodied roses dimmed as a large amount of the blood she had gathered was sucked away in the blink of an eye. Before she could handle this situation, though, Lorith's arrows sealed off her exit routes, and Mixor's fist had flashed before her face, reflecting a subtle crystal bed of scales on their knuckles. Aina struck out with a palm in retaliation, but the moment their fists connected, she felt a great deal of her power turned back on her. She arm-shot and the bones of her wrists almost shattered. Bang, bang, bang! Twin arrows bombarded her from the side, and she managed to use her roses to block. But they only lasted a single exchange before they fell in a rain of crimson. Too weakened by the Thronebearer Lorith's domain, they were already at a tipping point of fragility, and none of this stopped the Regentrix's second fist. Mixor erupted with a combination of attacks, becoming a fierce tanker while taking advantage of the Aderna family's powerful defenses. Not only was he practically indestructible, but her forced Aina to endure what felt like over 70% of her own power, reflecting it back at her. His naked body became coated by reflective scales, finally covering up some of his decency, but they still blinked in and out of existence. Aina was on her back foot, forced to retreat again and again. She tried to take advantage of it to make some distance between herself and Ivan's arrows, but the Dreadarch didn't even bother to move from his position in the air. His range was existence itself. What would a few hundred meters do? Bang! Ina suffered a blow to her chest, her ribs rattling. She had tried to dodge, but Lorith's domain bound her feet, slowing her reaction time. By the time her blood roses shredded the restraint apart, the fist was already too close to dodge. But she grabbed onto Mixor's wrist. As blood fell from her lips, her inner organs rattling beneath the strain, she released a delicate roar, her wings flapping. A surge of strength pulsed through her body as she raised Mixor up, flipping him through the air and slamming him to the ground. Mixor's body swatted a golden arrow out of the air, the sparks of light spreading across his body like flames dancing across marble. Ina raised her foot high in the skies, ready to levy an axe kick right to his head without regard for the damage she would suffer. But the throne-bearer's bed of thorns sucked the Aderna head into its soft folds, and Ina hit nothing but this bed of thorns that was anything but soft to her. Poison thorns pierced into Ina's foot, ripping through her armor and releasing a pulse that almost sucked her body dry of blood in a single instant. It would have worked, too, had Ina's blood force not been at a practically unachievable level. But not only did she manage to resist, but, for as long as she could remember, she had always been impervious to poison. Bang! A large portion of the throne-bearer's domain was shredded to pieces. Her brows shot up in shock, but she realized what happened instantly. She hadn't managed to take up a large amount of Ina's blood, but she did take a few droplets. Just when she thought she would be able to easily refine it, Ina's control won out. Lorith realized then that Ina could have probably stopped her from taking any blood at all, but she didn't precisely for this opportunity right here and now. There wasn't enough time to rebuild the domain. Ina appeared before Lorith, her eyes flashing a bloody red. Bang! Vines to Lorith's back exploded just as she tried to retreat. Her body was sent flinging toward Ina's fist. Ina's power erupted, her hair dancing in the wind as feathers fell from the skies. She drove a fist right through Lorith's chest, shredding her heart to pieces as she tore through her spine. The throne-bearer shook, her body convulsing. Several arrows stuck out of Ina's back, and blood leaked from her lips as well. She had tanked several of Erevan's arrows just for the sake of this chance, and she had grasped it perfectly. Ina coughed, blood coming from her lips, but the sharpness in her eyes was only growing. A deep battle lust erupted from her, and her blood began to heat up. It seemed that, she was only just getting warmed up now. For a long time now she had been in mother mode. She had forgotten the thrill of battle, that rush of adrenaline, that love of the feel of an enemy's blood running throuch hair through her fingers. Bang! The situation changed. Lorith's body collapsed into several vines and reformed in the distance. A bloody hole still remained in her chest, and the pain that twisted her gaze was very much real. However, she wasn't dead. A hand suddenly grabbed Ina's ankle, clamping down on it with great power and shattering it to pieces. The Regentrix. He had been beneath the bed of vines, but even after Ina destroyed them, he seemed to have buried himself even deeper into the ground. Ina fell to the side as she lost her balance. An arrow cut through the skies. Without a choice, Ina could only ignore Lorith and Mixor, training her attention on the lethal oncoming arrow. At the same time, Lorith summoned her manifestation. However, rather than a humanoid, it was a throne wreathed in wild plant growth. Her open wound wiggled and twisted, vines coming out of it and weaving into one another to close it up. The arrow pierced through Ina's forearm, her defenses almost giving way entirely. It jetted through her flesh and bone, the tip just barely stopping before it pierced through her throat. Mixor pulled hard on her leg, ripping her foot off of her ankle and Achilles. Blood splashed in all directions. At that very moment, the throne-bearer finally recovered. Spreading out her arms, the plants of the world writhed. This time, she was truly infuriated. Chapter 3266 Relief. Chapter 3266 Relief. Ina's pupils trembled violently, pulses of red peeling out from her. She could feel the changes immediately. She didn't need to think about them. Her clairvoyance was already able to pick up on every little thing. She had already used all 9 of her rebirths, but the end result wasn't as great as she wanted. As great as it was to rely on clairvoyance to get through everything, there was a limit to what her ability index was capable of. Ultimately, the life tablet only rated it as gold. The real reason Ina was so powerful wasn't because of her clairvoyance, but because she had 2 forms of it, one for her body and the other for her soul. Together, they were able to fuse and work off of one another, forming a resonance that was akin to something the life tablet would rate at the life grade. This was great. In any other era, this would be enough to protect her own little corner of the world. But in this era, it was far from it. Not if she wanted to stand by her husband's side, not if she wanted to help him hold up the skies as well. It wasn't enough. If she wanted to reach the level those ancestors stood on, that Gervais stood on, that Nilrem did, that her husband did, that the demoness certainly did, relying on innate talent wasn't enough. She had to break past it, she had to form her own comprehension or soar beyond what mere intuition could give her. But by the time she realized this, it was far too late. Or more accurately, it could be said that all this time she had no choice but to keep doing things this way. If not for her clairvoyance, how could she have ever kept up with Leonel's footsteps? She would have been left behind long ago, and the pain of experiencing such a thing would have killed her slowly. Now that she stood near that peak and could feel the enormous gap, she felt that sort of despair once again. She knew that her husband had allowed her to come here only because he had perfect control of the situation, because he was confident that should things not go the way she hoped, he would be able to interfere. However, that sort of realization only made her feel more helpless and powerless. She wanted to really push herself, to give it her all, to break through one final time and reach the same platform as her husband, 10,009. But in the end, it was her father that gave her that chance, unwilling to see her suffer one final time to grasp what she needed. Shackles that held Ina down shattered one after another. She gained the benefits of her father's deep, diligently laid out foundation to match with her overwhelming talent. As her power swelled, her eyes brimmed with tears that seemed to refuse to fall, almost as though she knew that the moment she shed that first tear, it would mean that he was really gone. She had already felt his soul blink out, but maybe denial had set in more fiercely than anything before it. A trepidation, a feeling of guilt that weighed on her soul and made her wonder if she was too cruel. But then she felt her father's smile. It wasn't one of subterfuge or even just one of kindness, it was one of relief. The relief of a man who felt that he had given his daughter the final push she needed. The relief of a man who trusted his son-in-law. The relief of a man who was happy to have gotten the opportunity to be a true father at least once in his life. If he had waited any longer, he knew his daughter would have found her path to break through on her own. He believed in her more than she knew, and he had watched more of her childhood than she knew as well. He knew his daughter had a grit and determination few could match. She had the heart of a lioness and the pride of a queen, the regal temperament of a goddess and the grace of a mother. Elis' daughter had grown into every bit the woman his wife had once been, stepping into all the potential her mother had once had that he stripped from her. The last fading of Miel's consciousness reflected a clear image both daughter and father shared, the image of a woman tied to a stake, her flesh rotting and a pained smile adorning her once gorgeous features. Even while experiencing pain, a mortal woman like her should never have to endure. She wanted them to live on without her, not for revenge, but to find happiness. Even in those last moments, she never blamed a single one of them. It was the last flicker of humanity she had left before the pain rotted her mind and consciousness. What happened afterward, Ina never thought about normally. But in this moment, she did. She had watched as her mother lost her sense of self, as the pain corroded who she was and corrupted her very being, how her attempts to remain the loving, caring mother and wife crumbled before their eyes as her screams tore through her throat like pale hands clawing up from moistened soil. By the time she had died, she was no longer the mother Ina remembered, and that was what was the most unforgivable to her, the most unforgivable to Miel, the one thing neither of the two could ever forget. Miel let go, allowing his daughter the grace of this revenge herself. He didn't deserve it. And in the end, Ina stood in silence, her aura dimming down and her hair darkening to its jet-black hue, her golden eyes piercing through the veil of space and time with the ferocity of a burning sun, her crimson pair of wings spread out in a sudden flap, feathers cascading down from their wide bodies. This little hint of red, she would hold on to it not for the sake of the Brazingers, but for the sake of her father. Chapter 3254, A King and an Emperor, 7. Chapter 3254, A King and an Emperor, 7. Gervaise's attack came swift and heavy, but a flicker of Leonel's wrist deflected the scepter. Clang, 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 clang. The Emperor stumbled backward, his wrist shaking beneath the impact, but his gaze remained firm. Leonel's senses picked up something beneath him as a force art suddenly appeared. It looked as though the maw of a green dragon had opened up beneath him, trying to swallow him from the bottom up. But this dragon was trapped in a mirror it was just about to soar out of. With a single tap of his foot, a counter-force art was drawn and the dragon's nose smashed against the glass, shattering it apart. The pieces of the mirror fell to the ground as Leonel took a step forward, stabbing out with his spear several times in quick succession. Gervais used a combination of force arts and his scepter to block, his stern eyes locked in concentration as streaks of blood began to appear across his body, caused by attacks he couldn't perfectly block. With a wave of his arm, Gervais's scepter rippled out with a dense energy and his body seemed to multiply into several mirror images. Each one held out their scepters, drawing a large circle in the air. Boom, boom, boom. Leonel was swallowed up from all sides by strong beams of light, each one capable of seemingly wiping out a universe. An image of Gervais in the back tossed his scepter into the air, slamming his palms together and sending out a shockwave that caused space to crackle and bend. It was as though he was already clear on the fact that this wouldn't be enough to deal with Leonel. The cracked crown on his forehead splintered more as he pushed, his aura skyrocketing. A rush of powerful might spread out as a shadow appeared behind Gervais. Pucky, the shadow ripped a hole through the Emperor's chest, but this wasn't Leonel at all. That much became clear as the shadow pulled its arm back, slowly unearthing a scythe from the depths of Gervais's heart. Gervais hacked up a mouthful of blood, the focus in his eyes only increasing as he unleashed a roar. The shadow flickered before vanishing into Gervais's own shadow. There was a shudder as Gervais grabbed his scepter out of the air. Boom! At that moment, the beams of light that had assaulted Leonel from all sides shattered. C-H-I, C-H-I, C, she. Arrows ripped through the air and pierced through each image, the last appearing before Gervais, who now had a hole bleeding black blood right in the middle of his chest. However, by that point, Gervais had already plucked his scepter out of the air. With a ripple, its size expanded, a blade jetting out from its large pearl. This blade wasn't connected to the scepter, but instead seemed to hover near it as though they were one object. With an arc of his arms, Gervais split the arrow in two, his white gold hair becoming a dark gold as tendrils of darkness began to pulse out from the corners of his eyes. Death sovereignty. Leonel could feel it quite clearly. It seemed that his grandfather was far from running out of trump cards, but it only seemed natural. If he could steal ability indexes, there was no reason that he wouldn't be able to steal other things as well. This one seemed to be particularly special, though. He was so casual with how he had brought out the Pluto, but this Void Race member, he was especially cautious, even going as far as to hide it away in the depths of his very body. Just summoning this construct required an act of self-mutilation almost on the same level as the time Leonel had been forced to allow himself to be eaten alive. However, it just wasn't enough. Gervais was still in the motion of cutting the arrow when Leonel had already appeared before him. To his credit, he reacted quickly, but the death aura of the blade was sliced through by Leonel as though it wasn't even there. A reverberating tempest of blows echoed through the region as Leonel and his grandfather crossed blades. Their tempo was fast and hard to follow, a cascade of sounds that should have been individual resonating and bleeding into one another until it sounded like nothing more than a continuous, long, drawn-out echo. But what was clear was that Leonel firmly held the upper hand. The scythe was parried and pushed aside at his will, his blade cutting into Gervais's body again and again. There was a fierce intent to kill that permeated both of their eyes, a bloodlust hanging in the air as they flickered and vanished time and time again. Their speed caused the world to warp around them, even to the point that the laws of time seemed to cease to make sense. Images of less injured versions of Gervais began to meld in with more injured versions. Sometimes, attacks that should have reverberated several seconds ago were delayed by a minute in both sound and image, and sometimes clashes from the future would flicker around the duo as they were locked in the present. Each time this happened, it was like Gervais was getting a peek into the inevitability of it all, but his gaze remained firm and unbothered, the chilly coldness hidden in the depths of them neither warming up nor chilling any further. Bang, bang, bang. The two separated, and a haggard breath came from Gervais, contrasting the smooth casualness of Leonel's own. Leonel took a step forward, and his bow appeared in his hand. A kilometer separated him and his grandfather, but this sort of distance might as well have been nose to nose at their level. His arrows began to rain down again as Gervais struggled to parry them. An arrow ripped through Gervais's shoulder, but he didn't so much as flinch, slashing out to destroy a follow-up arrow only to suffer a similar wound from a third. Leonel's rain of arrows was relentless, each one aiming for a vital spot. His arm blurred in the air, and the images of the past, present, and future began to bleed into one another. The flicker of his fingers seemed to carry the cadence of a crafter, his finger designation having reached unfathomable levels. As though he were drawing his fingers across the keys of a piano, he moved with a careless elegance, and once again his bow force seemed to reach a new height entirely. A force art was quickly forming before Leonel's bow, and every time an arrow went through the incomplete force art, it seemed to become stronger. The more complete the force art became, the more trouble Gervais had in protecting his own life. Arrows ripped through Gervais's legs and limbs, but in a relentless bid, Gervais activated another ability index, and an illusory hand appeared high above his head. The hand flexed and puppet strings attached themselves to Gervais's body. At that moment, the weakness of Gervais's body after tanking so many injuries no longer seemed to matter. He slashed down with great might, roaring as a cascade of arrows were ripped to shreds, splintering like wood in a hurricane. But then Leonel's force art completed itself. Staring at the force art, Gervais found himself frozen. It wasn't out of fear, but rather because he physically couldn't move. The force art seemed to claim dominion over all Dreamforce, ripping his puppeteering ability index to shreds and leaving behind nothing more than a weak body that could no longer hold up to this sort of pressure. But it was deeper than even that. His very soul was frozen, unable to think properly, unable to formulate a new solution for the trouble he was dealing with now. The gazes of king and emperor met. The world fell to silence, the oceans below becoming as calm as the surface of the lake, even as the rubber banding of past and present slowly fused together into one, just in time for Gervais to see one final glance of the future. One where his body was torn apart, his soul ripped to shreds, and the last vestiges of his will being eliminated under the might of the arrow. There was no suspense, there was not even a corpse left. The powerful will of Gervais didn't even allow Leonel to show this bit of mercy. When facing a man who was willing to give up everything for his hopes and dreams, there was only one way to deal with him, and if that man happened to be an all-powerful existence who would continue to battle so long as there was the slightest shred of him left, there was truly only one path forward to take. Leonel had no choice but to destroy everything this emperor had been, once was, or could become. Gervais didn't waver in the slightest, the light in his eyes making one thing clear. If Leonel gave him even the slightest opportunity, he would take it. The last light of hope in Leonel's eyes dimmed as his fingers trembled, releasing the arrow. It appeared before the emperor in a final sweeping might. pucky, it ripped through Gervais's forehead, shattering his ethereal glabella. The remaining force was so powerful that it ruptured the rest of his body, sending him blasting out in a rain of blood and gore. At that moment, the aftershocks of the future and the present melded into one, the layers fusing and combining into one final, undeniable conclusion. The death of an emperor. Chapter 3255, An Emperor. Chapter 3255, An Emperor. The last moments of Gervais's life seemed to last an eternity. He could feel his life slipping away from him, but all he could do was sigh. It seemed that in the end he hadn't been able to accomplish what he had promised. He had carried this weight on his shoulders for so long, that guilt. He could still remember every moment of the destruction of the Fox family. How many people sacrificed their lives just so that he could survive? Not a single one of them acted out selfishly. Even though it was all his fault, even though they would have been just fine if he had never been born, they still went above and beyond, sacrificing themselves to the last man. And then he remembered his own father, Prometheus Fox. That broad back, those shoulders that seemed to hold up the skies, and that stoic sort of smile that rarely came out and yet carried with it the grace of an emperor. He was such an arrogant man, a man who deserved to sit atop the world and call it his own, the one man who was actually worthy of ruling existence like Gervais hoped to. But that man, who had pride running into the very depths of his bones, had actually lowered his head for the sake of his son. The inaction of the Pluto was always something that had filled Gervais with endless amounts of fury. But it wasn't their inaction itself that truly made him so filled with wrath. It was the fact his father, the man he respected most in the world, was forced to ask for their help in the end. Gervais knew his father well. If it was only for himself, Prometheus would have preferred death over asking the Pluto for anything, even if the Pluto owed them. However, for the sake of finding a path for Gervais to survive, that prideful man had lowered his head, making a trip to the Pluto. Gervais hadn't been present, but he knew the ways of the world now that he had long since matured. He could imagine the sorts of humiliation his father had had to face that day, how the Pluto had likely made him feel like he was asking for a handout, how they had debased him and turned their noses up at him. His father shouldn't have had to go through that, but because of him, because of his stupid talent, their lives were completely upended. He had really wanted to be the one who corrected all of that. He had really wanted to be the man who brought the Fox back to the peak of the world, that destroyed the Void Race, and pressed the Pluto beneath his heel for their arrogance. He wanted to wipe the four great families out to their last man, and then face off against the Northern Star with a happy smile on his face. Every second of his life he had pushed himself to the extremes, but as he neared the end, he realized, ironically enough, that the very talent that had destroyed his family wasn't enough to help him rise above it all. In the end, he wasn't as good as this grandson of his, and maybe he needed to see it through to the end to finally be accepting of that. It was just that he didn't want to accept that the talent that was the reason for the destruction of his life, his family, his mother, his father, wasn't the best there was, because then, what was the point of it all? They had gone so far, and he couldn't even justify it to himself like this. It only filled him with more anger. He had to be the strongest. He had to be the one that lifted up this mountain. He had to be the one who justified both the pain his family had suffered and the one who pulled them out of it. Even facing his death, this will burn so fiercely and strongly that he wanted to find a way to struggle, but it was in vain. There was nothing to hold on to, nothing to push against, nothing for him to even apply pressure on or with for that matter. His body was gone, his soul was dispersed, all that was left was death. In the end, it wasn't enough. No amount of will, no amount of rage, no amount of hopeless begging or pleading would change much of anything. As prideful as his father was, he had to lower his head to the race he hated with every fiber of his being. And now he, Gervais Fox, the emperor of a generation, would have to accept his loss much the same way his father had. It was just that he had wished that he could have done so with as much purposeful drive as Prometheus had. Gervais found himself frozen again after having this thought. He couldn't remember having ever had it before, but now, facing his death, he felt that he finally had. His words before were right. The one thing that would always be uncontrollable were the thoughts and emotions of others. If you could, then they would no longer be their own person. The world had too many variables in it, but it was precisely these variables that allowed the uniqueness of every individual. You couldn't separate a person's experiences from who they were. This was why reviving someone would never be easy. Even if Gervais could revive his father, what then? Would he make that prideful man live out his life knowing that he failed to sacrifice himself for his son and was instead now only alive thanks to the sacrifices of this child of his? Even if Prometheus was happy for a few days, maybe in a few years, the worthlessness of his existence, or at his perceived worthlessness, would turn him into a completely different person, a man more jaded by life, more filled with hatred, less prideful, because then, what would be the point of everything he had done? Life was always a road of assigning arbitrary value to things. This was what Leonel had to realize himself. He had to come to an understanding that maybe life itself wasn't any more special than a rock laying by the side of the road. Maybe life was only valuable because the living said it was, and that was enough of an answer in itself. It was because of this that Leonel had chosen to have children even though it felt like an objectively foolish decision. It was why Ina had abandoned the thought of reviving her mother, and it was why Gervais was spending the last flickering embers of his life in a daze. Prometheus had decided the own value of his life. believing that what gave it worth was allowing his son to live the life he deserved to give his son a chance to be the emperor of a world. Before he died, Prometheus never said a word about revenge. He just wanted his son to live. Unlike the challenges Leonel faced, Prometheus hadn't believed that Gervais's clash with the god realm was inevitable. The demoness wasn't avoidable, but Gervais's enemies were. It was left up to Gervais to take the position he had and did the things he did, but in doing so, he had lost his purpose along the way. Was revenge really all he wanted? No. If that was true, then he would be fine with Leonel taking his place so long as it got done. Was it the satisfaction of revenge dealt by his own hands? Somewhat, at the very least, this would justify all the pain, suffering, and humiliation he had put his family through. But that answer in and of itself seemed to prove that there was a deeper underlying reason. It wasn't because he wanted the satisfaction himself, but because he wanted to retroactively justify everything that had happened. Only by being the best could he justify the pain he had brought to the Fox family. Only by proving their enemies correct about the threat he was could he finally set the weight on his shoulders down. But by virtue of that, from the very beginning, he was chasing after an ending that would allow him to finally shrug this mountain off of his shoulders. He was trying to climb to a mountain peak, not for the ends, but so that the ends would justify the means. In those last moments of his life, Gervais found himself asking himself a question he never thought he would. Had he ever truly wanted to be an emperor? Or did he just want his family back? The last embers of Gervais flickered out, his thoughts drifting into the wind on a current into silence and solitude, until a hand wreathed in violet suddenly reached out, pulling him out of the darkness. Gervais gasped as though his head had just broken the surface of water. The first sight he saw was the pale face of his grandson staring at him with tears streaking down his face. "I really hate you, old man. Could you have waited any longer?" Chapter 3256, Fruits, Chapter 3256. Fruits. Leonel really wanted to punch his grandfather in the face, but he felt that that might not be appropriate given the moment. He had really been about to let the old man go. When you were faced with these sorts of issues, the only person who could choose to live was the person themselves. Unless Gervais could realize that being an emperor was never something he wanted, but something he had forced, hypnotizing himself into believing he wanted, then there would be no amount of bringing him back that would change anything. In the end, if he had revived his grandfather without his input into it, then they would have just ended up locked in battle again and Leonel would have been forced to kill him once more. Or, Gervais might have accepted his loss and become a twisted version of the man Leonel knew him to be. Regardless of which of these happened, it wasn't something that Leonel wanted to see. At that point, the man he knew would be dead, so what would be the point in bringing him back? This was something that Leonel had accepted long ago. What part of a person did you actually value? If it was just their fleshy bits and the blood that ran through them, then yes, the younger version of him was right, life was worthless. He could remember having a crisis when he realized that the silver tablet was capable of reviving people from the dead. Back then, he had assigned too much weight to the physical existence of a person, and not nearly enough on the other factors that made them who they were. Now, he knew far better. Leonel didn't think that there would ever be a point in time that he cried for this grandfather of his. He wasn't the sort of person who got attached easily, and all things considered, he didn't know this grandfather of his very well, or so he had thought. But he realized during their battle, and as he was dying, that he was truly tired of losing people. He had lost friends, lost family, and lost countless more things in pain, anguish, and hardship. He was so completely and utterly fed up with it all. His reaction to his grandmother's near death had said it all. He truly didn't want to lose a single more soul, but it was deeper than just that as well. In fact, it was deeper for two reasons. First, this grandfather of his meant more to him than he had realized. He was the man who built the foundation for him to grow into the man he was today. In a lot of ways, Fox was akin to a second father to Leonel. Just because he hadn't known him from his youth like he had his real father didn't mean that Gervais was any less impactful. Recalling everything he had gone through, from being a refugee of Shield-Crossed stars, to being given the chance to reaffirm his dimensional foundation from the third dimension upward, all of these things were matters that his grandfather had helped him accomplish whether from the shadows or actively. Even now, Leonel had no idea how his grandfather had managed to allow him to do the impossible and return to the third dimension. Though, after their battle, he had a pretty good guess. It was almost surely on the long list of broken ability indexes that he had. Gervais was still in a bit of a daze, but understanding slowly overcame him. He looked down at the hand Leonel was using to hold him up. "How long are you going to hold me by my collar like that?" "I don't know, old bastard. How long are you going to dangle like a toddler? Aren't you a man? Stand up yourself." Leonel let go, but Gervais, who should have fallen to the waters below, just hovered as though nothing had happened. Then, as though nothing had happened at all, he brushed away the wrinkles on his robes as though they weren't littered with holes and wounds, and then began to walk away. Leonel was speechless. "That was it? Where are you going?" "To see my wife," Gervais replied casually, already over a kilometer away. "Don't you know how to say thank you? How about, 'I love you, grandson'? I can also settle for, 'You are my Lord and Savior, and I'll worship you to my final breath.'" "No." These were the only words Gervais said before he disappeared from Leonel's sights entirely. This time, Leonel was truly without words. He had thought that Nilram was shameless, but his grandfather truly took the cake. Leonel shook his head and then began to laugh, his tears becoming motes of violet, light that danced in the surroundings. It seemed that there was another way to save people as well. There's still much to do, Leonel thought to himself, looking toward the tall ceiling of the underground catacomb as though he could see right through to the skies above. Or maybe it was that no matter where you were, it was impossible to miss the Northern Star's influence no matter where you were. That aside, there was indeed much to do. The four great families, the Void Race, the Pluto, the Minerva, the Sylvans, the Demoness. Leonel should be raising war banners and charging out onto the battlefield, but at the moment he had no desire to do so. The matters of the world would come, the end of the world would come, his enemies weren't going anywhere. So why should he rush to deal with them? There was no reason to not spend every moment as though it might be their last, and that was precisely what Leonel did. He too went to see his wife. It wasn't until over half a year later that Leonel finally seemed to recall that the world was in chaos and there were things that he finally had to handle. He peeled himself out from under his wife's body, swinging his legs to the side of their bed and standing to his full height. Exhaling a breath, the breath of calm in him solidified into a hidden coldness. Putting on his robes, he stood a strong step out, appearing high above Anastasia's world. Seemingly sensing something, Anastasia appeared by his side a moment later, her aura glowing. "How is it?" Leonel asked lightly. "Everything is prepared. Explain it to me." Leonel truly hadn't been paying any attention this time. He hadn't wanted to make Anastasia do all the work on her own, but she had insisted. It seemed that she was still feeling guilty about what happened back then. So, Leonel took his grandfather's lessons to heart. Controlling the heart of the people wasn't nearly as easy as controlling his own. And a step further than that, he shouldn't want to control their hearts either. Otherwise, what made them the people he wanted to love and surround himself with would be erased, lost in an endless tide of space and time. Anastasia was still carrying around guilt surrounding his father's death. She knew that in exchange for herself, Velasco very well might still be here today. Leonel didn't want her carrying around extra unnecessary guilt, so he had allowed her to do as she pleased, and she truly performed. The Morales have all been fast-tracked properly. Their compatibility with Valor Force is extraordinary, and it evolved their constellation perfectly. The Morales dimensional method we created paired well with Dimensional Cleanse. The constellation allowed their stars to synergize excellently. The plan with the Morales was multi-layered, but it built upon functions that they had already come to understand. The Spear and Creation halves of their abilities were combined thanks to Valor Force. But the true shocking displays of their abilities came thanks to the synergy between Dimensional Cleanse and their constellation. As the creator of Dimensional Cleanse, Leonel understood it the most intimately, so doing something like tweaking it was excellent. But I was also thanks to Anastasia workshopping a special Morales dimensional method that everything came together so well. The short of it was that he was able to use Dimensional Cleanse to help the Morales form stars of their own. These stars would then arrange in a formation when they were activated, and this would in turn form the foundation for the army's force art. Ever since Leonel had learned about army syncing in the Cataclysm Zone, he had been playing around with and tweaking it. Now he felt that he had created the strongest army formation in all of existence. Not only was it built into the family's constellation, but it also fed off the idol of a true god, Valor Force, and all of that was tied together perfectly by the Morales dimensional method. By now, Leonel understood that the Demoness had created the Morales lineage factor for her own whims and wishes, but now she would face the fruits of her labor herself. Important announcement, below Chapter 3257, Bunch of Babies, Chapter 3257, Bunch of Babies, the drums of war echoed across the God Realm, 4 great families. Imperatress Anselma walked with vigorous strides, the strips of her red gown practically hovering above the marbled ground, fusing into her red-gold hair. Bang! Her palms slammed the wide double doors of a throne room open. Several gazes landed on her at once, but with every step she took, her aura only seemed to grow until she eventually stood like a towering mass. The current head of the Brazinger family looked at her with a frown, but by the time she had placed a foot on the first staircase, he was covered in such a heavy cold sweat that he no longer dared to speak. A memory triggered in his mind as Anselma climbed the stairs, and his emotions quickly flickered from rage to shock, then fear, then understanding. "Scram," Anselma said coldly. Barat was a veteran of war, a man who had bathed both his skin and blades in blood. However, right now, he couldn't seem to muster up the momentum he needed to do much other than move out of the way. Anselma didn't slow a single time, as though she already expected that Barat would move for her. Without breaking her stride, she crossed the threshold of the final step and took a scat, facing off against a sea of red eyes staring back at her. Each was colored with some shade of confusion, not understanding what was going on. The woman in question herself trembled slightly when she sat on the throne. Memories she had long forgotten whizzed by in her mind one after another. With each new consolidated thought, her aura grew less violent and more solid. By the end of it, she seemed to recall just who she was as well. Huh! A single hollow chuckle came from her lips. When she had been walking here, her body had practically been controlled by a mysterious power, and she could only watch as a third party as she did something she would have normally never dared to do. But now that she understood, she felt like it was all just one big joke. I, the Imperatress, actually have a day where I fall so far. 10th-outed, losing her temper for a man, torturing mere mortals, being sent fleeing with her tail between her legs by a mere child, she had prepared herself to recall her previous life with quite some regrets. With things like this, it was impossible to control every variable. She had thought that she might accidentally marry a man who was beneath her status, or maybe humiliate herself in various ways. But this left a taste of disgust even in her mouth, not because she regretted the actions, but because she regretted the reasons for them. If she was going to kill, maim, and humiliate, she should do it for herself. A cold sneer spread across her beautiful features. Eine Brasinger, was it? Did a woman who took another family's name deserve to carry their blood? Who are the Brasingers? Anselma asked, a chilly wind spreading beneath the weight and majesty of her tone. The Brasingers, even the most skeptical ones, were compelled to answer by a mysterious power. Their mouths opened at once, and the aura in the throne room solidified. W.E. bleed, a simple 2 words. Yet they resonated with an echo that howled across space and time. The Imperatress had returned. The weight of the words didn't seem to settle in for a time. Anselma had carried the title of Imperatress for all her life, and others called her by it naturally as though it was just a fact of life. But it wasn't until today that the meaning was realized, and she wasn't the only one that revived on this day. Dreadarch Erevan of the Levis supplanted the head of the Levis. Thronebearer Lorith of the Crutus directly took the head of the Crutus. Regentrix Mixor hummed the head of the Aderna to dry, allowing her to slowly die beneath the sun and the crows. The Imperatress, the Thronebearer, the Dreadarch, the Regentrix, each one had returned, but the latter 3 only had one action they all took when they recovered their memories. Without fail, they all turned to the Brasinger clan, falling to a knee. Anselma sat on her throne in silence, her eyes closed and her breathing even. The slight movement of her chest was the only proof that she was still alive at all. When she sensed the actions of the 3, a fiendish grin spread across her face. With her eyes still closed, it looked to be particularly out of place. There is only room for one lioness at the top. Leonel sat at the top of the Ascension Palace stairs. He looked down toward the sea of warriors below, some looking at him with complicated glances, some with confusion, others with unwillingness. You see that? Leonel asked his son and daughter. Little Leo was standing on the top step Leonel sat upon, half hiding behind his father's shoulder as though only this gave him the courage to peer over and take a look at the millions looking up at them. Leah, though, was sitting on her father's lap, only barely peeking out from burying her head in his chest. Leo said, squeezing out his words. Most of them aren't very happy with me. Whether it be that they're still very loyal to my grandfather, or the fact that they think the world is ending so there's no point in scrambling for power right now. Leonel's voice wasn't very hidden, so many froze when he spoke out such things so candidly. Most of them will probably never put their full effort into the coming battle. Some probably have plans of defecting and end rushing off to the middle of nowhere to live out the remainder of what little time they have left. What do you think? Leonel asked Leo. Bunch of babies, Leo muttered. Leonel sputtered with laughter as a spark of rage lit within the army below. Chapter 3258, First Blood, Chapter 3258, First Blood. Oh, you're angry? Leonel said between his bouts of laughter. So what? With those words, Leonel stood to his feet, his aura changing. You know who isn't worried about the end of the world? The Pluto, the Void Race, the Beastmen, the Minerva, the Sylvans. While you're here busy sulking, they're positioning themselves to take everything you're worth. I can hear your thoughts. I can see through those pitiful expressions. You don't care. Maybe you think they're wasting their time. But this is the difference between them and the human race. They know how to take what they deserve. All you all know how to do is wait for it to be handed to you. The creation beasts granted you power in the past, and when they passed away, you lost it. My grandfather granted you power this time, and now you want to squander it. You have no backbone, no heart, no conviction. It's no wonder the entire world looks down on the human race. What are you worth? Leonel's voice was powerful, but he didn't shout, and yet it felt like each one of their chests were rattling with the vibrations of his words. Bang, bang, bang. Suddenly, to Leonel's back, one heavily armored existence after another appeared. It seems that all of you have forgotten what it means to be human. Morales men, remind them. ROA. Leonel took a step as the Morales roared behind him. The aura of the madmen of the dimensional verse shook the stars and the skies, and before the northern star, they didn't shrink even the tiniest bit. To his back, his generals took the stage. From Joel to Elthor, and then from James to Emna. The only one that seemed to be missing was his wife. But if Leonel wasn't worried about that, then it probably wasn't anyone else's place to be. Not to mention the fact, it was hard for them to focus on anything other than the steadily building momentum in the skies. I will say this only once. Leonel's voice became glacially cold. I do not have the time to slowly win you all over, nor do I have the patience. If you do not fall in line, I will kill until the stars cries and the rivers run red. I have the blood of my own cousin on my hands. Don't think that your relation to me will save you. I do not favor the Morales over you. Both are my family. However, unlike you all, they have a grudge that they have been nursing for many years, while you all have gotten soft and complacent. You don't know war, you don't know battle, you will either learn how to live in this rain of blood or you will die. There is no other option. Ing. Leonel reached to his back, his spear unearthing itself from the depths of space. He pointed it toward the skies, and a spear howled across existence. At that moment, there wasn't a single person alive who didn't hear it. Down below, Mordred's gaze flickered with a complicated light. She still remembered the young boy who had a heart that was still too kind for his own good. That young boy helped her rebuild her relationship with her father and her mother, the young man that took in a world of people who didn't have a proper place in the world and showed them that they weren't just words on page, but rather real people that deserved to be treated as such. But now, he was no longer that young boy. At least that was what she thought before she felt an image of Leonel winking at her surface in her mind. She blinked, wiping her eyes in confusion. But the image was long gone, and the sight of Leonel standing in the skies coldly with his daughter in his arms was firmly imprinted once more. I am no emperor. I will draw my blade, and I will shed blood with you on the battlefield. However, I am likewise unwilling to allow your pettiness and selfishness to go unpunished either. I will give you as much as you give me back. Beneath my charge, not only will the human race rise to its previous glory, it will surpass it. The skies rippled as Leonel slashed his blade down. The blue seemed to part like the skies, a moon in the far-off distance trembling once before it was split in two. And the cowering rats that only know how to backstab and take advantage of numbers and the weaknesses of others will suffer the fate they always had coming to them. The moon fell into two halves, the faint image of it barely perceptible in the bright light of day. However, what was clear was the fleet of ships surging over from a distance. Without the moon blocking their line of sight, the Ascension Emperor citizens realized something horrifying. Leonel wasn't just lying to them, he was very much telling the truth. Even if they wanted to relax and rest on their laurels until the end of days, their enemies wouldn't allow them such a luxury. While they were busy sulking, the rest of the world was scrounging up just the slightest hope. The moment they had this collective thought, the sound of glass shattering echoed through the ether. A ship cut through the darkness, wreathed in golden roots and bark. Unlike the others, it seemed to be living and breathing. In its depths, an ancient tree swayed in silence, and all seemed right and perfect until there was a sudden pulse of red. A face appeared in the body of the ancient tree, and it coughed out a mouthful of blood. The peaceful atmosphere was shredded to pieces. I'm glad you're on your way here so I don't have to waste my effort. Trying to use Dreamforce to influence my citizens? You Sylvans do a great job overestimating yourselves. Let your death be the first blood of this war. CHI. The ancient tree was split in two. Chapter 3259, Overgrown Weeds. Chapter 3259, Overgrown Weeds. A savage grin spread across Leonel's face. Were the Fox really such cowards? Maybe in part, but definitely not to the point that it would be such a systemic problem. Violence and rage were reactions that he was ready for. This pacifism and self-loathing wasn't part of that equation. It made the manipulation almost too obvious. There was only one reason they would react like this. The Dreamforce undercurrents of the Ascension Empire had already been controlled by others. But before this plan could even be executed on, Leonel directly shattered it with a few words. In this world, if he said he was second in Dreamforce control, only one person dared to claim being first, while the others were ignorant of their own inferiority. Boom, boom, boom. A familiar scene played out as the Fox snapped awake. They didn't even have the time to react to the changes properly before their world was entirely surrounded. Ships wreathed in golden roots shook to a stop. However, CHI, one was suddenly split in two right down the middle. What should have been an oppressive rival was cut through just as easily. It was only then that those that thought Leonel was just showing off his power realized that he was, in fact, attacking something they hadn't even been able to see, let alone attack themselves. A gloominess hung in the air, several oppressive dream forces descending. Their minds were so powerful that just the fluctuations in their emotions seemed to paint the skies a different color. One after another, one Sylvan elite appeared per ship, standing on their backs as though they were one part their body and another part transportation. Leonel wasn't surprised to see this. This method was the one the Sylvans had come up with to deal with one of their greatest weaknesses. Their perceptions were the greatest when they were rooted down. But when they were rooted, they were also highly vulnerable. Like this, they could have the best of both worlds. However, seeing them appear like this, Leonel couldn't help but raise his head to the 10,002 sky and unleash a billowing laughter. Leah frowned, pouting as she used her little hands to cover her ears. "Daddy, you're too loud. I'm sorry, it's just too funny." "What's funny?" Leah asked, confused. "Do you know who claims to be the smartest race in existence?" Leah blinked. "Oh, the Sylvans? That's right. But Daddy said that they're just overgrown weeds." The gloominess of the Sylvans only deepened. Leonel burst into laughter again. "I did say that, true. You also said that in the past, our ancestors used to use their leaves to wipe their—" Leonel hurriedly covered his daughter's mouth, a cold sweat matting his back. If she finished that, Ina would definitely have him by the balls later. Yes, I did say that." Leah blinked innocently, a smile in her eyes. "All right, 3 scoops of ice cream." Leah held up her chubby little fingers. "All right, fine." 4. The giddy little dance his daughter did brought a smile to Leonel's face. For a moment, he almost forgot that he was in the middle of a battlefield. I do not know what Emperor Fox was thinking handing his kingdom over to you, but even though you are clearly lacking in many respects, you at least share your grandfather's overblown sense of confidence. Leonel looked over, seemingly offended. What do you mean overblown? That bark that covers your body sure makes your skin a bit thick. Leah giggled. Arundel is your name, right? Leonel asked, as though he didn't already have the answer, but the Sylvan ancestor fused to the floating vessel couldn't help but narrow his eyes. His name wasn't something that most should know. Even if they did, they would know him by his title, not his full name. No need to be surprised, Leonel continued. Your race might not be very smart, but what they are is long-living. I read a passage about you in the life tablet. You started off as a walking stick for, Enudge. Arundel's roar parted the clouds. Rinthia the Gentle, right? Leonel's voice cut through as though Arundel hadn't spoken. Quite noble of you to help out others in their old age. It's quite interesting, though. All of your races descend from humans, or so I thought. So why were you a normal block of wood? That confused me for a long while until I understood. The god beasts of creation were doing quite a lot of experimentation back then. I wonder how many people ended up dead because of it. If you read history at face value, you might miss a lot of the finer details. Like how a coldness flashed in the depths of Leonel's gaze. Plants like you grow best with fertilizer. The echo of Arundel's roar was still hovering over the horizon, but it did nothing to stop Leonel's words from cutting through. Arundel's chest heaved and the murderous intent of the other Sylvans only seemed to grow. Those will be some of the last words you speak, he said coldly. Is that so? Leonel asked. In that case, how about I say some more? Have you noticed something odd about what's happening here? Arundel frowned, the bronzed orbs that were his eyes practically piercing through Leonel as though trying to see through him. Do you think that your race is really the smartest there is? You think you got here first after months of planning, thinking that you'd have the leg up? Did you think that everyone would allow you to fly under the radar because you're neutral pacifists? Who did you think you were fooling here exactly? Arundel slowly calmed, his face becoming entirely expressionless. His Dreamforce reacted in kind, calming until the skies stilled once again, the deformed clouds remaining as the only proof of their previous fury. And what do you mean by that exactly? A malevolent grin spread across Leonel's face. They sent you here to die. You're nothing but a sacrificial lamb to roast, here to test my bottom line. But they'll learn quite soon that you're not worthy of that. Kill them all, Leonel said coldly. Bang! Leonel's army shot into the air. Chapter 3260, Blood. Chapter 3260, Blood. Blood. The scent hung heavily in the air, tinting what should have otherwise been a clear atmosphere crimson. Aina walked slowly through a plain that didn't seem very special. It was flat, mostly barren of life, and it didn't have the slightest bit of character to it, aside from the large castle right in the middle of it all. Aina's approach couldn't have been more silent, but it also didn't look like she was trying to hide her presence at all. She was alone, accompanied by nothing more than the axe on her back and the leather armor on her body. Her eyes were so emotionless that they were practically dull. They would have been had it not been for the resplendence of their golden hue. But her brows remained flat, her lips gently pressed together, her neck proudly straightened, drawing a line right from the back of her head to her planted feet. However, that scent of blood was only becoming more suffocating, more omnipresent, until the blue skies above became purple, and then from purple, they became a deep rouge. The change was so oppressive that even the sun that hung high in the skies trembled, dimming and becoming painted in crimson as well. Despite all of the changes, one would have never thought that they were related to the beautiful young mother walking calmly across the plain. Anselma's eyes suddenly snapped open, her pupils constricting. There was a slight palpitation in her heart that she ruthlessly suppressed, but the solemnness between her brows hadn't vanished. Her head turned and her crimson irises flashed as she seemed to see through the walls of the palace. I see. Anselma slowly stood to her feet. This founder's axe has returned home. Aina's steps didn't pause for a moment. She felt a gaze land on her, one that she recognized intimately, but it might as well have been nothing more than air. Her gait was even, so mechanically precise that it could be measured down to the exact millimeter without a hint of deviation. The battle-axe trembled on her back, greedily soaking in the bloodlust in the air. How many years had it been? Aina's expression finally slowed just the slightest hint of deviation, her head tilting up to the skies. She had been not much older than her daughter was now when those matters took place, being forced to experience the horrible fate of her mother as she lost her life piece by piece to the sickening torture methods of the Brazingers. She had bled more blood than she cared to count for, waiting for this day. Memories floated by her thoughts one after another. Days she would train until her body was too tired to even sleep properly. Days she would swing her weapon so many times it felt as though her joints themselves had become calloused. Days she used to shatter her own bones just to grow them back stronger. Her training methods had only grown more devastating, more cruel, more masochistic with every step she took. And yet, it never felt like it was enough. She always wanted to push further, press harder. A light smile spread across Ina's lips as a fond memory came to mind. When she was younger, she used to have a terrible habit of biting her lips whenever she was agitated. She had grown out of that long ago, but it wasn't because she had forgotten about it. Every time she thought about doing so, she remembered words that maybe even Leonel didn't remember saying. "You shouldn't do that," Ina said softly. You'll scar your lip." She hadn't known what to think back then, and it made her even more afraid to face Leonel with her real face. If he was worried about a scar on her lips, then what would he do when he saw what the curse the Brazingers had placed on her had done? Still, she had, subconsciously or otherwise, stopped biting her lip after that day. Ina raised a finger to her bottom lip, a gorgeous smile blooming on her face. That short sentence completely recontextualized everything to her when Leonel didn't care about her scarred face at all. The scar wasn't the problem, he just didn't want her to be hurt. It was a simple thing, so impossibly simple that even Ina felt a little silly that she was thinking about it now of all times. But it brought a broad smile to her face. Indeed, she didn't need to be that woman anymore. Ina took another step, and a pair of black wings grew from the small of her back. Her eyes became a deep abyss of black. Her hair lengthening as a pair of horns formed. Her temperament became more regal and overwhelming as a crackle of black lightning peeled across the crimson clouds. Okay, maybe she could be that woman only for a certain man. "My babies and husband are waiting for me." Ina's blooming smile suddenly became ice cold as she reached out a hand, her battle axe slapping into her palm. In one fluid motion, she didn't pause a single time as she swung down. A scythe of crimson tore into the ground, almost splitting the world in two. It appeared before the gates of the castle in a blink of an eye. A ripple of red appeared, an invisible dome flashing into existence. Scythe and dome worked around one another, a clash of force twisting and pulling against one another. Shades of red flashed around one another until, bang, a bolt of black came from the skies, ripping into the barrier. Boom, the barrier flexed like a rubber ball before it shattered completely, unable to withstand the power. Alarm bells rang through the Brazinger family compound, and a large number of warriors shot into the skies, expecting to find an army that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But instead, they only found a single young woman with an ice-cold gaze. And even then, it was only for a short moment. Before they could react, dozens of heads had been bisected from their necks. Blood shot into the skies and formed just as many blooming roses. Today, she had come here to kill. Chapter 3261 returned. Chapter 3261 returned. Ina swept out her battle axe, her blood roses rotating like a garden of blades, blackened lightning forming their thorns and painting the skies across in an array of death, destruction, and oddly, life. With a step, Ina's black feathered wings fluttered, her armor pulsing with a bright vitality. The amusement drained from her eyes, replaced by a deathly stillness and cold. The life force of the world seemed to drain continuously, a whine that came from the depths of the world spirit's soul, making those that called this place home tremble, a sense of loss overwhelming their hearts. Bong! Dozens of Brazingers couldn't hold on. Ina did nothing more than walk toward them, but their blood ripped out from their bodies, unable to hold back under the call of their mistress. Without the strength to fight back, their life force was almost eager to hand themselves over. Their queen had beckoned them forward. How could they not oblige? The Brazingers, for their credit, charged ahead. They were warriors down to the depths of their souls, and they didn't shrink in the face of challenge. However, they were little different from moths to a flame, and every time they acted so recklessly, they only added to Ina's strength. One would have thought that the skies would be painted by grief, by pain, that outpouring of a daughter's love would rip their psyches to shred. But Ina was eerily calm, not like a lake, but rather like a slumbering volcano, a dragon coiled deep within their cave. With every step closer she came to Anselma, the deeper that calm seemed to become. Her soul was awash with a refreshing dew, her body swaddled in the caring caress of the skies and the tender call of the earth. The deaths continued to accumulate, not a single one managing to approach within several dozen meters of Ina. They flew forward like moths to a flame, adding to the garden of blood forming around the queen. Dark clouds rumbled in the skies, blackened lightning, an even deeper shade of darkness and brooding than them tearing across their body like dancing shards of electricity. A large amount of stamina should have been used up by now, and maybe that was precisely what the higher-ups of the Brazingers were waiting for her to tire, for her to waver. However, the smoldering ember seemed to be gently cradled by a pair of fair hands, that ember carrying a hatred she had held in herself since the day her mother suffered on that stake, since the day her face was torn asunder, cursed to suffer to the end of her days by a woman spurned by nothing more than petty jealousy. A life upturned, a mother ripped from her daughter, a pain buried years deep. But it no longer consumed her, no longer weeded into her soul. Instead, it became a gentle fuel no different from any other, a fuel meant to burn for an eternity and into infinity, along with the memory of the Brazinger's fall on this day. Bang! Ina took a step onto the walls of the Brazinger family compound. Not once had she decreased her pace. All the while, her gait was steady, her expression a lukewarm sort of coldness that chilled the heart and yet somehow calmed the spirit. She gently raised her battle axe for the first time. The moment she did so, a cascade of powerful auras erupted from the distance. The ancestors of the Brazingers had finally made their move, and yet her blade descended. There was nothing more than the slightest ripple in the air. A scythe of force didn't take shape. It almost looked like a heat wave passing through the air, distorting nothing more than the image on the other side of it and not much more. But this simple swing made the hearts of the Brazinger ancestors leap into their throats. Fear colored their expressions, and one after another, they summoned their manifestations. Giants of illusion, clad in reds and bejeweled by a bright vitality and a fiery will for battle and victory, appeared. And just as quickly, they were torn in two. The invisible blade passed right through them, and their bodies split of their own accord. Their own blood formed the scythe within them, splitting their bone, their skin, their flesh right down the middle. They stood frozen in place, not realizing just what had happened to them until it was far too late. Pucky, the sound of wet flesh and split bone echoed through the air. They fell to the ground in two pieces, their bodies flopping in a sickening blend of noise. The roses that floated around Ina pulsed with life, her control over life increasing as the corpses of the Brazinger ancestors were sucked dry. But right when the blood was about to be incorporated into her strength, they froze in the air. A woman had appeared. Adorned by a fluttering red dress, she and her bright red lips seemed to stand out in the skies no less than the rivers of blood that surfed the wind. These rivers, however, stilled, seemingly frozen in time. And Selma looked at the blood calmly before turning to Ina. She scanned the young woman's face, and then her eyes landed on the battle axe. A light smile tugged at her lips. It had been a very long time since she laid eyes on this treasured weapon of hers. It was about time that it returned home. She raised her hand and softly beckoned. It seemed like a gentle gesture, but the clouds above almost dispersed beneath the power of the almost careless curl of her fingers. A strong, pulsing might came from the battle axe. Ina looked down at it as her arm tugged forward, the force so great her shoulder nearly popped out from its socket. She too was calm as she gazed at it. Then the founder's axe was ripped out from her hands, whizzing through, then snapping into place on Anselma's with a satisfying slap. It had returned home. Chapter 3262, 4. Chapter 3262, 4. Anselma took a breath, her chest shuddering as she felt a rush of power weave through her. The world shook as though bowing to the return of an empress, the imperatrix. Ah, it has now truly returned home. Now, let's end this quickly, shall we? Anselma took a step and appeared before Ina in a flash. She swung the axe with a single arm, its unruly and long polearm seemingly not much of a problem to her at all. Although the battle axe's form was more than a head tall than her, she wielded it like a normal single-handed hand axe. Yet the power behind it was so great that the body bent into a crescent moon, the laws of the world whining and then bending into obedience as well. Ina struck out with a palm. Bang! The wind shattered to pieces, or so it seemed. Volatile currents, spinning, churning, and thrusting in all sorts of directions made it confused, not knowing which ones to follow. But soon after the shattering, space quaked along with it. The two women, however, were unmoved. Oh? Anselma blinked. She was calm and casual, but her indifferent arrogance caused her to almost miss the fact Ina had followed up on her attack instantly. A second palm descended, as though Ina didn't fear the blade meeting her flesh at all. With how much she had been through her life, with how many weapons she had gone through, how much pain she had forced herself to endure, how was this worth much of anything? Anselma failed to react as a palm drove into her chest. Her ribs rebounded back, being compressed at an awkward angle before she was sent flying back. Ina took a step forward, her hips twisting slightly as her wings flapped a single time. All of her momentum transferred to her attacking arm. Bang! Anselma's body shot out like a rocket. The air she passed through superheating as concentric circles of shattering wind rippled out. She tore a line so straight down and through the city one could have easily mistaken the streak of crimson for a laser piercing through the air. She crashed into several buildings, not slowing until she was embedded into the central castle. The earth rumbled so fiercely the skies quaked along with it. At the same time, the wall beneath Ina's feet cracked down to its very foundation. This wall was one meant to anchor the earlier, large-scale formation, and yet now it could hardly withstand the might of a single light step from Ina. Then Ina vanished. There was a rumble and the wall collapsed. As though a spherical bomb of energy had been set off, a perfectly smooth section was left behind. But Ina herself was nowhere to be seen. A beam of light passed through right where she had just been, and her figure itself appeared in the rubble along with Anselma. Bang! Another sphere. Bang! Another. Bang! Yet another. Anselma and Ina flickered around the city, their powerful strikes leaving smooth, almost too perfectly controlled pulses of destruction in their wake. And every time, Anselma found herself crushed. Her battle axe's blade was blocked, her body was bombarded, her head was snapped to the side, her blood leaked from her lips and her wounds. It was a complete, one-sided, utterly contemptuous sort of battle. Ina flashed by the swing blade, her fist cutting across the side of Anselma's face as sending one of her teeth flying into the distance. But before Anselma's body could even head in that direction, a second fist came even faster, driving into her gut so far Ina almost felt her spine on her knuckles. Anselma keeled over before her body accelerated, shooting off into the distance and digging a deep trench into the ground. The Imperatrix coughed off a mouthful of blood as Ina stood in the skies. The latter's head turned, looking off into the distance as though she had sensed something. But even now her expression was shockingly calm. Anselma slowly stood to her feet, wiping the blood from her cherry lips. It was an action that should have smeared that bright red lipstick she wore, but somehow, that color seemed infused into her very flesh itself. It didn't fade even the slightest bit. If anything, it only grew brighter, sharper. The Imperatress didn't seem to be distressed. There was a hint of shock in her eyes, but it wasn't to the point that she had lost herself to despair. This was only to be expected. Even with the Founder's axe back in her hands, this body was too weak. She had planned to use the next few years to rebuild her foundation and return to her original strength slowly before the final battle, but Aina had come before she could do this. If she was honest, she thought it wouldn't matter. The shadow she was chasing was that of the demoness, not this child. So she thought that even without much effort, she would win this battle, especially after Aina lost her weapon. But it seemed that she had underestimated this child. Boom, boom, boom. 3 auras appeared, each one just as powerful as the last. The Dreadarch Erevan, a man wreathed in golden light. There was a sharpness to him in his yellowed eyes that exuded the air of a refined blade. Even looking into his gaze seemed to hurt. The throne-bearer Lorith, a woman coated in vines and poisoned buds, a crown of thorns wrapped around her head, piercing into her skin and leaving scars as it greedily drank her blood. The Regentrix Mixor, a man wearing nothing at all. He stood there, almost too confident. He was offensive to the gaze, and yet it didn't seem to faze him even in the slightest. The 4 didn't say a single word as they moved. Lorith's vines spread, Erevan shot into the skies, drawing on air and pulling a bow and arrow from the light, and Mixor shot for Aina. All the while, Anselma watched in a calm silence, the gentle pitter-patter of her own blood falling to the ground, not fazing her in the slightest. Chapter 3264. Atone, Chapter 3264. Atone, Lorith shrieked. The banshee-like fury peeled across the skies like flashes of lightning, the echoes painting the harrowing image of an infuriated wraith. The earth burst apart, and the foundations of the city were torn as trees, vines, and poisonous buds burst out from the cracked, paved roads. A large net of vines wrapped together, spiraling into the skies as they intertwined. They formed a beanstalk that should have only appeared in fairy tales, reaching a peak and then twisting into a mutated, budding lily. The lily opened its maw, unleashing a roar that sounded akin to a yodeling wail. Rows of teeth lined its petals, and a thick mist of poison spread out from it. The moment this behemoth appeared, it was like the plants of the world bowed in obedience, and the life force that Aina had managed to maintain a small bit of control over was torn apart. What remained of her blood roses vanished, sucked into the endless river of vines. The toothed lily sucked in a strong breath, and hurricane-force winds knocked buildings to the ground and stirred the clouds into a spinning vortex. And then it closed up. Its throat bulged, and the world fell into silence for but a moment before it exploded with a bursting breath of fire. The flaming ball fell toward Aina. It truly looked like a helpless situation. Her left ankle was nothing more than a stump of pooling blood. Her arms were nailed together by an arrow that cut through both of her forearms, and now she was facing off against an attack in what was her worst state since this battle began. Anselma watched calmly from a distance, not feeling very surprised. They might not have regained their full strength just yet, but their ability to play off of one another and battle in tandem was second to none. In fact, they were only working at about 10% capacity right now. That was because she had yet to join. Boom. The attack landed, crashing into Aina's location and enveloping her completely and totally. A strong vacuum force ripped upward, forming a cyclone that spiraled into the air. With a calm gaze, Aina watched as a figure appeared before her. Her eyes never seemed to carry any fear or surprise. Even seeing this person didn't bring her any excitement or happiness. Miles swept out his battle axe, standing before his daughter in a protective posture before he slowly looked back. I do not know why you've allowed this to happen, but you can't expect a father to stand on the sidelines and watch this happen, right? Aina looked toward her father with a calm gaze, but she eventually parted her lips, speaking out an equally calm set of words. You've done it before. Miel's pupils trembled. It was clear to him that his daughter was not happy in the slightest. In fact, she seemed bothered by his appearance. He thought that their relationship had taken strides toward the better. He had even met her children, and he had taken on the role of grandfather with open arms. He loved those 2 little babies no less than his own daughter. However, right now, the dividing line that still existed between them became clear and obvious to him. 111. I am not strong enough yet. Aina continued slowly. This is my last chance to become so. If you stand in my way now, it will be because of you that he has to stand alone when the time comes. I do not want him to fight alone. Please move. Miel understood his daughter better than any Imperatress ever could, though maybe that wasn't as much of something to be proud of as he thought. Wasn't it only natural that he be so capable? But even though he knew that his daughter had been holding her back, he found it very difficult to wait for the result. The fact that his daughter hadn't even spoken to him before coming here said all that needed to be said. She truly didn't need his help anymore, and maybe right now, while her emotions were so raw, while the pain of her mother's death all those years ago was becoming even more of an open, festering wound, she didn't want his help either. Miel seemed to forget that there was danger lurking all around him. He only had eyes for his little girl, his gaze softening considerably. He was only human. Part of him wanted to scream out that it wasn't his fault, that he had done all he could, that he couldn't have possibly known that things would end the way they had. But time and time again, he only let this daughter of his down. He was the reason her mother was dead. He was the reason Athles had ended up the target of a vindictive woman, the reason his daughter was almost forced to marry a man she didn't love, the reason she had lived a childhood so broken and full of despair that even when she did find the man she loved, for a long while, she didn't even know how to love him right. A tear fell from Miel's eye, and Ina felt her heart shake. For a moment, she almost broke out of her state of hyperfocus, buried emotions threatening to bubble back up. But before they could, Miel had already turned away. "My name is Adam Rainier Brazinger," Miel said softly. "This is a name I cast away long ago, but it wasn't for reasons as noble as you, my daughter. I did not want this name because I was ashamed of it, ashamed of what it had forced me to do, ashamed of what I had done in the name of it. You, my daughter, do not have the same fate. By now, you've probably realized that death cannot be reversed so easily, but often, neither can life. Much the same way death cannot be atoned with life, sometimes life can only be atoned with death." Ina's pupils trembled, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Miel shook his head. "Don't speak. Redemption sounds like a nice story, but there are some sins that can't be taken back no matter how much you wish for it, no matter how much you bleed for it. I cannot give you the life you deserved back, but I can give you a new one." A powerful soul pressure rippled from Miel in waves. Chapter 3265, Crimson. Chapter 3265, Crimson. Miel's red hair danced in the wind like a flickering stream of magma, and then his body burst apart. Blood rained, flesh fell, bones tore the air apart like the shrapnel of a bomb, and Selma's pupils constricted. Unlike Ina, who was stuck in a state of shock, she knew exactly what was happening. Unfortunately, it was much too late to stop it. In a silent corner of the world, a woman too weak to take action sat in silence. She looked up, tears falling from her eyes. "In the end, you could never set your heart down to choose me, but I guess if you did choose me over your daughter, you wouldn't be the man I fell in love with." She stood to her feet, hugging a sword to her chest. Rippling golden light extended from her hair, cascading down her back. Her aura continued to grow as though something had been severed away forward. Her tears continued to fall, but they had become akin to golden dewdrops, falling from her cheeks and rippling against the tides of space like rain besieging a placid lake. With a step, she became a beam of light, appearing high in the skies. A great battle was taking place. Clouds shattered like brittle stone, raging air currents leveling mountains and denting worlds. Giants among men wielded plumes of fire and jets of water, bolts of lightning and entire moons of earth. It was truly a battle that she was too weak to take part in. Since the moment Leonel took her out of the Slayer Legion and gave her the chance to hone and sharpen her light force, she had tried her best to improve. But in the end, she didn't have the talent. In truth, she did. What she really lacked was the time. She wasn't a monster like Leonel or Ina, nor did she receive the same benefits as those close to him as kin. And now, the only man she held on for, the man she hoped would forget his past life and start a new one with her, had made his decision. In this case, what reason did she have to hold back any longer? To hopefully be protected by the efforts of everyone else? 10:00. Sidra looked down at the sword she held to her bosom, her clear tears falling faster. Then she unsheathed it. Like a moth to a flame, she charged into the battle. She, like many others, would be nothing more than a drop in a vast ocean, drowned out by tsunami-like waves, bent and twisted to the whims of the push and pull of celestial bodies. Her death was assured, but she hoped that in these last moments she would find some use to the world. Like the others, she was someone who had a life of her own. She had shed tears and blood, she had had hopes and aspirations, dreams and loves. But in the grinding wheel of fate, it hardly held much weight or substance. Here, on this battlefield, she chose to be another bit of fodder to their cannon, a foot soldier who would throw themselves forward to push the line back just an inch. In her last moments, she forgot about her love. Maybe in another life, she would find a man all to herself, a man who made her no less happy and hopeful than he did. "Go now, Adam," Sidra said softly, her sword blazing in a golden light. "Maybe in another life, I will be lucky enough to meet my Miel." In place of Miel's body, a blazing soul stood, wreathed in gold and red light, a powerful, seething sort of intent coming from it. "I owe too many people," Miel said lightly. Although he didn't put much force into his tone, it traveled far and wide. In those last moments, it felt as though he could hear Sidra's last thoughts as clear as if they were whispered into his very ears. In life, everyone was given a well of potential. It was up to them to slowly unearth it, pulling it out from the water and using it to irrigate their lives. Miel had spent too long pulling from a sieve, wasting his own potential, chasing various matters due to his own insecurities, his own indecision, in his selfish, immature choices. In the end, after chasing after those mistakes for so long, he realized that even if he could survive to the very end, even if he could win this battle for his daughter and help her achieve the happy ending she was looking for, would it ever be enough? Ina felt her body shudder and her manifestation forcefully took shape. Boom. An enormous area was cleared out around her. Whether it was the Regentrix, the Dreadarch, or the Throne Bearer, they were sent spiraling away even faster than they had come. Her power shot up by hundreds of times, and in that moment, the four heads seemed to understand just what it was Meal was speaking about earlier. In that moment, Meal's soul, as though mimicking the actions of an unrequited love, flew into its own flame. His soul fused into his daughter's manifestation. Impacting another's idol should have been impossible, but there were two reasons that Meal could do so. First, because the manifestation was rooted in the lineage factor of the Brazingers, something both he and his daughter shared. And second, both he and his daughter had soul clairvoyance. Not only was he in the perfect position to understand and improve his daughter's idol, she was in the perfect position to accept those changes and integrate them. At the same time, his flesh and blood began to snap back together, pouring toward his daughter and forcing her blood force to respond. I wish you, your husband, your children, eternal happiness, my precious daughter, my little girl. Hopefully, on the other side, I can spend an eternity making it up to your mother. Live well. Tears fell from Ina's eyes, her wings turning a blinding shade of crimson. Chapter 3267, Berserk War Goddess. Chapter 3267, Berserk War Goddess. The world fell into an eerie lull. Silence clung to its edges and pooled into its core, like sunlight retreating beneath the hues of dusk. The darkness raced against the light, pushing it back and then swallowing it whole. The only point of brightness that remained at all was a single young woman staring into the void. The world vanished from her sight, and her thoughts became a contradictory, vacant mess. Her emotions spiraled akin to static confusion. Before, in a suppressed hush, it too was vanquished. And then there was nothing at all, nothing but an unbridled fury. Boom! A pillar wrapped in blood-red and demonic blacks shot into the skies, splitting the clouds into a winding cyclone that sparked with ruby lightning. The wings on the small of Ina's back flared outward, scythes of wind energy splicing space into shards and splitting them into ribbons. Force accumulated in the skies, and for a moment it didn't feel like it was a young, vulnerable woman standing before them at all. Instead, it was a towering mass, a natural phenomena, a matriarch that stood even above a woman that would deign to call herself imperatress. Ina moved. Space folded before her like layers of fabric, trying to fight back beneath her power and maintain its hold and control over the world. It failed. The folds shattered, sending mirror-like pieces of space cutting against the wind. The ruby lightning sparked at its edges, grabbing onto the laws of the world and suffocating them into obedience. Ina reached out a hand just as she appeared before the throne-bearer once again. Lorith's eyes trembled, and an overwhelming sense of danger blossomed from her heart like another one of her treasured plants. The world faded from her senses, and all she could feel was the death looming before her right this moment. Suffocating, oppressive, a deathly sort of blankness that encapsulated not torture or the fear of pain, but rather the vast nothingness of what death truly was, an endless abyss, lacking in time and unknown to space. She was dead. She felt it even before it came, like there was nothing she could do with her own power at all to change things. Anselma's gaze sharpened and her grip on her battle axe tightened. She stomped a foot and accelerated forward. The domain of the Founder's axe surged, and the laws of the world twisted around both herself and Ina. Bang! Anselma was sent rocketing back, but Lorith had firmly landed in her palms. The two skidded across the earth, the city that had once been their own splintering at the seams and being swallowed up by the vacant depths that Ina had become. The world fell into a silent lull once more, the discharge of lightning snaking across the ground echoing as the only sign of life. Lorith coughed up a mouthful of blood as they skidded to a stop, her eyes bulging with fear. The moment that acceptance of death disappeared, it was like all the dread, once forced back by the depths that was Ina's presence, came flooding forth all at once. She began to hyperventilate, her force almost spiraling out of control. Slap. Anselma's palm struck against the throne-bearer's face. Pull yourself together or get the hell out of my sight. The imposing air of an empress stretched across the skies, clashing against the black and red of Ina's aura with a fierce violet and red of her own. The pride of this imperatress rose into the skies with a dominating posture as she stood to her feet, tossing Lorith to the side. Her gaze shifted, landing to the location Meal had died and then upward toward Ina's manifestation. An indifferent sneer spread across her face. To think that an incarnation of this imperatress fell in love with such a pathetic excuse for a man. Weakness of the body can be fixed. Weakness of the heart will rot and fester, destroying the roots of even the strongest trees. You will be no different. Anselma's arm swept to the side, a strong scythe of energy emitting from the Founder's axe and shattering much of Ina's aura. Her power began to climb as a Mixor and Erevan drenched in cold sweat rose to her sides, appearing like shadowy warriors in obedience to their empress. The clouds above rumbled. In the midst of the battle, it was almost soft, akin to the final groan of a wounded beast. And soon came the pitter-patter of rain falling in a melodic rhythm. 4 auras rose up from them, a crimson imperatress, a golden dreadarch, an emerald thronebearer, a silvery blue regentrix. Ina stood like a lone tree in a vast desert, buffeted by the winds and the hail of sand. Her hair became drenched beneath the rain, her wings growing heavy, but then they suddenly flared out. Her wings, arched elegantly and layered in carefully sculpted gem-like red feathers, trembled just a single time, and the rain on it was flicked off. For a moment, the rain around Ina seemed to freeze in place, unable to fall. "Prepare yourself," Anselma said coldly. She raised the Founder's axe as Erevan, Lorth, and Mixor all called out with their senses at once. At that moment, from across worlds, the founding treasures of the four great families heeded the call of their masters. Whether it was Leonel or little Nana, they felt their treasures once in their possessions vanish. Crossing time and space, the Lavis bow, the Crutus armor, the Aderna shield, all made their presence known to face against a single woman without even a weapon in hand. But then Ina reached toward the skies, her weapon forces rotating around her as dragons of ruby lightning descended to her palm. She was the berserk war goddess. She had no need for a weapon. Anything, everything, and nothing at all would heed her call. Boom! Lightning-wreathed fist and founding axe met in a clash akin to a herald's cry. Chapter 3268, The Creator. Chapter 3268, The Creator. Anselma's arms shook as the veins across her arms bulged. An overwhelming power poured into her like a hydraulic press, the pressure increasing akin to an endless tide. Just as she was about to be overwhelmed, vines shot up from the ground and Mixor Aderna appeared to Ina's side. Crackle. Lightning whipped against the vines, shattering them to pieces just as Mixor's shield crashed into her side. This seemed expected by the four as they worked seamlessly together. Erevan had even taken the Lavis bow into the skies, already prepared to unleash a torrential storm of supporting arrows from above. However, bang! Mixor was sent flying back even faster than he came. At some unknown time, Ina's wing had formed a shield to her side, and with the slightest of flickers, the Aderna head catapulted around, drawing a line through the rain that made their delicate droplets sting as much as a rain of needles. Anselma managed to hold on due to the distraction, but she was still forced to step back, her arms vibrating beneath the strain. Taking advantage of the gap, Erevan unleashed his rain of arrows, each one ignoring time and appearing before Ina in a flash. But the moment they entered her domain, it was like the laws of the world broke. It was said that photons didn't experience time and had no concept of this fourth dimension, but that was only a matter of perspective. The beams of light slowed considerably, and the infinitely heavy arrow hidden within was caught in Ina's palm. With a light squeeze, she shattered it to pieces as her lightning danced across the skies like an endless sea of whips weaving in and out of one another. The arrows that slowed within Ina's domain shattered in a rain of light. There was a brief beauty to it in the expanse of explosions and darkness. But brief it was before a savage wind broke it all apart, sending them spiraling into the distance. Trees bloomed in the surroundings, and a dense poison air filled the skies. Its power was unlike anything that had been seen before, but Ina remained indifferent to it all. In the far-off distance, the Regentryx's arm hung limply even though the Aderna shield still held strong. His inner organs rattled about within him, and the others seemed to notice just how badly injured he was a step too late. They were too used to the Regentryx being the strongest tank amongst them. Never could they have thought that the simple swipe of a wing would leave him in such a state. But what they failed to consider was the fact much of the Regentryx's defenses came from his ability to counter and deflect. It was rooted in his lineage factor and his idol. What would he do if the laws of the world he relied on to sustain those things shattered to pieces before his eyes? Mixor roared into the skies, the bones in his arms popping back into place as his manifestation appeared at his back. Finally realizing the seriousness of the situation, the four heads no longer held back. One after another, avatars that could hold up the skies appeared, each one dwarfing Ina's own as though they had been carefully refined time and time again. Because that was precisely the case. This wasn't the first time these four had reincarnated, and it wasn't the second or third either. Time and time again, they put themselves through these rigors for one reason and one reason only: to grow strong for when the time came. However, much like Ina, they had reached their own bottlenecks. The only way past this was by layering their manifestations through each life they experienced, awakening it again and again and again and again. Until now, they stood akin to mountains, their feet rooting the earth more firmly than even a world could, and their heads becoming the pillars that stirred the clouds, swayed the wind, and held up the skies. Boom, boom, boom. They drew their weapons and treasures at the same time, a colossal mass of oppressive might descending. At that moment, even if there were members of the Brazingers still in the vicinity, they had long since died. Those that were smart had already retreated to a far-off distance. In this clash of gods, mere mortals had no right to hold up their head. Ina faced off against this might, her expression unreadable. It was the force that stirred around her that truly reflected her heart. Ruby lightning sparked with a wild intensity, but a steady-handed darkness belied it all, moving slowly, unhurriedly, handling the weight of a life of pain and torture. The tall ancient trees in the surroundings finally shuddered to a stop as Erevan flexed his arm. The damage he had received from Ina's wing poured out from his body, and his injuries vanished in the blink of an eye. He struck out with his shield, and a beam of silvery blue light crossed the void and appeared before Ina. At the same time, the tall ancient trees swayed a single time, illusory emerald vines taking shape as the sound of a beating heart filled the depths of space. The emerald vines bypassed Ina's lightning, latching onto her body, or so it seemed. Instead, it poured into her soul, restricting and restraining her. At the same time, Levis charged up an attack from above, and Anselma did the same. Both were waiting for the same thing, for Mixor's attack to land and give them the opening they needed, while Ina was both restrained and reeling. But what they expected to happen didn't. "You've all forgotten what it means to be human," Ina spoke for the first time since her father's death. Her voice had a gruffness to it, a sultry depth that compelled the world into obedience. Her compulsion in her tone bloomed forth with a power the likes of which had never before been seen. Tying her soul down with vines? She wasn't like these false humans who did everything in their power to separate their bodies and their souls. Pitiful existences who were nothing like her husband, the true ancestor of spirituals. They were nothing but cheap, fake imitations. There was no separation between her own body and soul at all. CHI. The vine snapped and Ina vanished. A beam of light passed through where she had just stood, digging up a smooth, deep trench through the ground and vanishing in a winking light that tore through the far-off distance. A massive depth of black formed in the skies through the space it passed, but none of them could even focus on it. Ina stood high above them all, holding a limp Lorith in her hand. With a motion that was almost delicate, she brushed Lorith's sweat-stained hair from her face and then pressed the throne-bearer's back against her own tree. Ruby lightning flashed, and Lorith was pinned to it through her shoulder, and then her other shoulder, through her knees, and finally through her neck. The Crutus family head convulsed. "I didn't realize until today that the wood that took my mother's life was actually your own creation, black wood. That day my mother was humiliated and stripped, her head was shaved, and her naked body was forcefully pressed onto the wood. The only thing separating her, and it was a cushion between its effect and her head. It's a clever trick. It forced her body to rot as her head stayed intact. But if I just make you experience what she experienced, would that be fair?" A voice more beautiful than words could describe hung in the air. It filled one with a sense of calm, and yet a contradictory dread at the very same time. Chapter 3269, No Longer. Chapter 3269, No Longer. Blood-red lightning sparked, the nails they formed discharging through Lorith's body. Ina could remember the effects of black wood like the back of her hand. She was a force pill crafter. Her knowledge of force herbs and various natural remedies, both toxic and not, were likely what very few could compare to. But even in relation to her usual knowledge, she had come to understand black wood more intimately than anything else in her life. It was a curse. It would slowly peel into your skin, eating away at you layer by layer. It would burn you slowly, making you sizzle and crack, from each layer of your skin, down to the fat beneath and the muscle beneath that. It would take you down one cell by one cell, eating into your very soul and radiating the pain step by step, until you were nothing more than a husk of bleeding flesh. Then it would rip even that flesh apart. But the truly sickening ability of black wood wasn't this. Instead, it was the scent of rotting flesh. This scent served two purposes. Not only did it keep you awake, forcing lucidity, it also maintained one's life, constantly nourishing the soul and stopping it from dissipating. Because it targeted the soul directly, even when one's nerves had been fried to ash and nothing remained but your bone and the flesh left on your head, you would still feel every hint of pain, no less intimately. The cushion between the head and the wood was precisely the reason for this. While the rest of your body would rot, flaking away in a sickening burning sensation, your head would remain just fine. Until the rotting began to slowly creep up your neck. By the time everything was done, all that would remain was a flailing string of nerves, a brain, and a skeleton. Then, as you experienced your life being weeded out, one would feel the wind sweeping back and forth in an eerie rhythm. In that state, you wouldn't be able to see, nor touch, nor hear, nor smell. That feeling of empty wind would be your everything. And then, your body would fail after exactly 99 days. Not one moment more, not one moment less. This was the horror of black wood. The feeling of your body slowly rotting must be terrible. But just 99 days isn't enough. I also don't think that the pain you experience is nearly enough. Crimson lightning flickered. The dread arc unleashed a roar. Lorith, the arrow he had been charging up, was loosed, piercing through the air in a veil of gold. It hardly looked like an arrow at all. It was more like a curtain falling from the skies, rippling with a wave of all-encompassing light that seemed descended from the stars. Boom. Erevan's fingers trembled as his manifestation moved. Veins popped along his arm, and he immediately felt that something was wrong. But before he could react, his arm was ripped backward under a mysterious force. He had lost control of himself, his blood moving to a rhythm he didn't dictate, and as a result, he missed an arrow for the first time in his life. His bone snapped and his forearm swung the wrong direction. However, his eyes were bulging with far more shock than pain. Unfortunately, there was little chance to bask in this shock as another more substantial one took hold of his heart. A hand grasped his throat and he froze in place. Calmly, Ina took a step through the skies, dragging Erevan with her. Pucky, 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 Pucky. Lightning nailed him to another tree, his body convulsing wildly. The horror on Mixor's face became palpable. Anselma still seemed to be holding herself together, but it was hard to tell if this was out of true confidence, or if it was nothing more than a false sense of unwarranted pride. Ina slowly turned around, standing in the skies as the lone point of light. Her wings radiated with rays of red, surging out with a suffocating might every time they flapped just the slightest bit. Anselma gripped the Founder's axe so tightly the skin at her knuckles split, blood pooling down her hand and down its length. She took a breath, her red hair dancing beneath the strong hurricane-force winds Ina was producing. She turned, looking toward Mixor to find that he was already looking toward her. The man looked beaten and haggard. Despite having the most defenses amongst them, he had suffered probably more than all but Lorith. Now, he was looking toward her for support, for help, for something. The pillar of support he was looking for swung out her axe. His head flew into the skies and she took a strong breath. Pools of blood surged toward her and her foundation deepened. At first it was slow, but then it accelerated faster and faster until her very skin began to glow. Beads of sweat began to pour from the Imperatress, and soon she looked like a vaguely humanoid pool of blood, her body slowly expanding to fit the size of her manifestation. Dudo, Dudome, the world trembled beneath her might and the Founder's axe expanded to match her size. She had lost a lot before she could even begin to lead the four great families back to their former height. All that work, all that effort, all her hopes and aspirations seemed to be being flushed right before her eyes. And now, she had to kill one of her own most important trump cards just for a small chance at surviving. She was pissed. Her aura flared as she stood to the height of a god, the whipping of her hair leveling buildings and leaving deep trenches in the land that extended further than even the eye could see. Ina looked at her calmly, still the same size, and with the very same manifestation to her back. "Is this your strongest state?" Ina asked lightly. "Good. Today I will allow my mother to rest her soul in earnest." Ina took a step forward, and the world beneath her split in two. She was no longer holding back. Chapter 3270, Ina Morales. Chapter 3270, Ina Morales. Ina Morales. Ina appeared before the enlarged Anselma, slamming out a palm. Her momentum was akin to the skies, vast and unapproachable. It was impossible to tell where it started or finished, or the exact moment when dusk shifted into a dense night. Anselma swung to meet her. She was imposing in her own right, a towering mass that went beyond just her size. The clash shattered the world's concept of sound, a vacuum more vacuous than the depths of space and heart and layers formed, palm and axe blade echoing off one another in pulsing waves. The two separated for only a brief moment before they clashed once more. A flurry of exchanges expanded the vacuum, forcing more and more force into it. The world whined against its limits, the tears of the world spirit falling from above in a torrent of rain that washed the blood beneath and only stung against the throne-bearer's skin all the more. And then it gave way, all but the trees. They were instead enveloped by a powerful aura, diverting from Ina and rooting themselves in the depths of space. There was a shocking wave of pressure that filled all sides, and in one moment the world had been there, while in the next it was vaporized to ash. "Diverting your power like this will be your death," Anselma roared, her Founder's axe multiplying its blades in the air as she swung. Time rippled and reality warped. Ina didn't respond. In the depths of the void, it was only easier to do such things. There were no world spirits, no regulators, no constraints, just violence. Ina drew a circle through the air with one palm, a wave of blood following it. Her clairvoyance seemed to radiate out of her body, and the blood rippled. Force art spontaneously bloomed in a cascade of natural force. Bang, palm and blade met once more. But this time, Anselma's arm snapped back so hard and fast that it nearly dislocated from its socket. All the power she had built up in that reality-bending strike was countered with a single blow. Ina took a step forward. After the last word she had spoken, she hadn't even so much as parted her cherry lips again. She had said all that needed to be said. All that was left was death. Her fist shuttled through the void, a ring of blood appearing around her arm. It sparked with lightning, and clouds formed above, more natural force art spontaneously taking shape. Anselma hurried to defend, but she was too late to bring her Founder's axe back. Without a choice, she could only surge out with her own defenses, her blood churning and fusing into the ruby armor that adorned her body. C.R.A. check. R.A. check. Ana's fist went right through, pounding against flesh, crunching through blood, ripping out tendons and sinew. All the air seemed to have left Anselma's body as she was sent flying backward. Her body almost shut down entirely, her own blood control countered by wisps of Ina's own entering her bloodstream. Anselma quickly tried to assimilate it all, and when that failed, she pulled on her heart and sent out a violent pulse. A surging geyser of blood erupted out of her chest, spewing into the surroundings and fusing into the rain that suddenly began to fall from above, originating from the clouds of crimson above Ina. At first, Anselma thought that she was feeling the splashes of her own blood, but very quickly it became obvious that this was not the case. Her eyes widened in horror, but Ina had already appeared high above her. Anselma roared, swinging out her Founder's axe. Even with all the damage she had taken, she managed to keep it under her control. However, what met it was a bolt of crimson lightning from above. A single flap of Ina's wings sending her flying far out of Anselma's reach, while the latter was buffeted by winds that felt akin to a thick steel wall. Bang! The tears of the world spirit, Anselma's blood, and Ina's own rounded the skies, as Ina almost delicately raised her palm for one final time. The rhythm of the world fell to her beck and call as her eyes met that of Anselma's. The Imperatress' eyes widened further, her heart, or what was left of it, skipping a beat as she felt so many things flash before her. And then Ina struck. Most of her life, the Imperatress thought herself to have sat at the top of the world. She stood at the pinnacle, matched only by those most ancient of ancestors. She thought it was her palm that could call rain and command the skies, until she saw a young woman without even a world to call on form it herself. The tears of the world spirit remained not because of the world spirit. That existence had long since been wiped out, unable to withstand the blow of their battle. It remained only because Ina commanded it to be so. What could only be described as the blood palm of a world descended from the skies, enveloping Anselma. She didn't even have the right to resist, her body collapsing practically from the inside out. And yet, just when she thought she was dead, and her life was hanging on by nothing more than the faintest of strings, she felt something pull her out. But it was no savior. It was a calm woman, beautiful beyond compare, and even more unmoved by the world than that. Ina pulled Anselma up by her hair, volatile energies that could shatter stars swirling around them as though nothing more than fireflies in the night. And then she slowly crossed the skies, approaching the black wood tree. Anselma's body shook, her pupils trembling. No, she struggled, but her tendons were ripped out from her body. Her blood had all been drained, and her bones didn't have a single intact piece left. Even her face had deformed into a flat, grotesque mess. You are a Brazinger. You can't do this to your ancestor. Ina didn't respond, slowly pinning her to the tree. Only when Anselma's agonizing screams were sealed into her body did Ina speak again. My name is Ina Morales. I haven't been a Brazinger in a very long time. Chapter 3271, Her Babies. Chapter 3271, Her Babies. Ina's movements were almost careful as she pulled Anselma's body onto the floating piece of black wood. The ancient trees hung in the depths of the abyss, looking anything but like the torture devices they truly were. There were struggles, curses, a hail of insults. But one would have thought that Ina didn't hear them at all, especially not after she finished hanging Anselma and actually began to hum. A beautiful sort of tune spilled into the surroundings. But to Anselma and Loreth's horror, this tune that could bring down the pleased chirps of birds and the humming wings of butterflies was actually increasing their pain by several orders of magnitude. And yet, not one of them was able to make a single sound. They could only watch as Ina sat cross-legged before them, blood rotating around her as though following the resonance of her hymns. And then, 2 pills began to take form. She took her time on these pills, her song not stopping even for several days. She recalled the few memories she had with her mother, and then the few she had with her father. Both were actually quite clear to her given her clairvoyance. But this was the first time she seemed to realize that her memories with her father weren't so bad after all. Right then, what she recalled the most were the times they ate together. They never said a word, but when she thought about it, the way their elbows used to clash as though they were in the middle of battle and not dinner had always been amusing. Her mother was a fairy tale in her mind, and her father was very much real. She loved both of them equally for different reasons, and maybe it took losing them both before she could even begin to understand that. In the end, the Brazingers also hurt both of them. They ripped the innocent life of her mother away from her. They suppressed her father, drilling him down with burdens that turned him into a man he couldn't even look at in the mirror. And today, she had avenged them both. Her pill, or rather 2 pills, finally took form. Ina's hum reached a peak, and for a moment, around one could see a beautiful woman with long black hair coming out of the hair of a little girl as she hummed her own tune. Around the other, one could see a middle-aged man sneakily stealing food from a young teen's plate as she fought to eat faster. There was a ripple through the depths of space as Ina stood to her feet. With a calm wave of her hands, the pills soared through the skies, becoming part of the separation between the black wood and the back of the 2 Brazingers' heads. Like I said, 99 days isn't enough. Maybe you'll get lucky and the world will end soon, but I doubt it. More likely than not, my husband, the reason I am no longer a Brazinger, will be the reason you suffer this torment into the endless spiral of time. Poetic, don't you think? After she said these words, the 2 women tried yelling, tried screaming, but nothing was heard. The ancient trees drifted off into the void, and Ina turned away, staring off into the skies. With a wave of her hand, the 4 heirlooms of the great families appeared around her, her gaze calm. Then she suddenly smiled. She missed her babies. Leonel squatted down on a mountain peak, his palms stretched out in a clawing motion. The enormous head of a Sylvan ancestor, its golden mask cracked and fissured, hung from his fingers, its body dangling below, limp and broken. I tried to tell you this would be the end result. People just sent you here to die. But I'm actually quite happy that you presented yourself like this on a silver platter. We really do have important things to discuss. The tides of war still boomed and crackled around them. Entire worlds and stars seemed to be wiped out in breaths of time, and yet Leonel was still there, his 2 children by his side. I really need to know what you all were thinking, ranking my wife second on the beauty list. What? Little Leo's eyes bulged as though he had just heard the most ridiculous thing. You see, even my son can't believe his little ears. My ears are not little. Leonel reached back with his free hand and ruffled his hair, obscuring his vision. The little guy had to fight for his life not to fall off his father's back. The Sylvan ancestor coughed up a mouthful of blood. But maybe because it was too spent, too broken to respond, or maybe because it was already at death's door, it had no reply. Leonel suddenly looked up, his eyes narrowing. There was a sudden great wave of animosity just now, one suffocating for all the wrong reasons. He felt it long before he saw it, and once he did, he deduced exactly what was going on. Well, they were bound to come for revenge at some point. There was probably only one group that would get so infuriated at him mentioning that list. Boom! 8 pairs of golden wings appeared high in the skies. They seemed to vanish behind the clouds, looking more illusory than real, or like they were still so far away from the world that it was only their sheer size that allowed them to be seen in the first place. The world's forces seemed stripped and pulled, as though all of it was being sucked toward this construct high above them. Leonel shook his head. I'm surrounded by idiots. He quickly looked at his children. When your mother is back, you didn't hear that from me. Leah only giggled, while Leo seemed to already be plotting his revenge. Leonel sighed. Was this the fate of a father? Despite his antics, his reactions weren't slow in the slightest. A pulse of vibrant violet came from his life. Where do you get off trying to control the domain of a king? Something snapped. Chapter 3272, A Pawn. Chapter 3272, Upon Leone's royal crest pulsed with a radiant light, a beam of violet piercing right through the skies and shearing apart everything in its path. A violent upswell filled the clouds and painted their curving outlines, echoes of radiance splintering the wings that blanketed everything to pieces. With a relaxing of his hand, Leonel allowed the Sylvan ancestor to fall from his hands, its large body tumbling across the rocks in a pathetic sprawl as he stood to his feet. His children seemed to understand the assignment, each one using their little hands to grip onto one of his shoulders as he stepped into the skies. He waved a hand, a bow appearing in his palm as though he had plucked it right out of his royal crest. There was a confident smile on Leonel's face as he seemed to see the world in a light others couldn't. There was an anticipation bubbling up in his heart. He had done everything right. All that was left was to claim victory just like he had every time before. In every iteration, the demoness tucked her tail and hid. This time, he knew she would appear. This time, he knew that things would reach their final conclusion. As for the Minerva, they were entirely uninteresting to him. His fingers left blurs in the air as he erupted with a barrage. Streaking lights so numerous and suffocating, they overshadowed even the sun in the skies, pilfered and plundered. There you are. Leonel grinned. He pulled his bow back, its form vanishing into his royal crest. With another wave of his hand, his spear took shape. The skies trembled. Hi! Leonel roared out. James, Milan, and the others, despite the distance separating them, all seemed to grasp Leonel's words as though they had been spoken right into their ears. They didn't reply with much other than a flare of their auras. Pillars of light cut through the air, and Leonel knew they understood his meaning. Very soon, this would no longer be a joke. From this moment on, their lives and those under them would be up to them to preserve. See you, Mommy, Leah and Leo called out, their eyes lighting up as yet another pillar took shape, a beam of red descending from the skies. It took what remained of the shattered image of wings and turned them to a bloody crimson mess. An angel of a woman descended from on high, a delicate ruby light slowly receding from her hair and wings. Soon she landed in front of her husband. Leonel smiled. Took you long enough. Do you know how much of a headache it is babysitting these munchkins? Leah blinked and patted her dad's head. Don't worry, we took care of a mommy. Ina's smile bloomed, and she took her little girl into her arms, and then her son. She bundled them up tightly, hugging them so hard they thought they might never breathe again. Leonel's laughter filled the skies as he took a step forward. He seemed to phase through his wife and soared high into the skies just as roars filled it. Give us or daughter back. It was absolute chaos. It felt like everything was happening all at once, but the voice had barely echoed when it came to an abrupt halt. Leonel hadn't even been the one to make a move, but a pair of parents Leonel barely recognized as Zara and Lycos. Minerva's parents found themselves frozen in the air. A line of blood appeared down each of their foreheads as Leonel strolled by them, a confident light sparking in his eyes. It seemed that his wife's strength had improved far more than he assumed. Likewise, he could also guess why that was. Since that was the case, it seemed that he was going to have to vent on her behalf a bit. He didn't care about the Minerva much, but the one thing he would always have the time for was pettiness. As the skies cleared, the formation of the Minerva torn to shreds, a man with 8 golden wings appeared high above it all, his pupils trembling slightly in an attempt to reaffirm their calm. Leonel could remember the last time he met this man. This head of the Minerva had the entire world in the palm of his hand. Though cornered by the schemes of a young man far younger and weaker than himself, he still wanted to pretend as though everything was under his control. A sneer spread across Leonel's face. He really hated that arrogant indifference. Raising his spear, tendrils of spear force coalesced in the air. How many moves do you think you can last? 1? Leonel asked, taking another step forward. Half of 1? He took another. Elysium's gaze sharpened, a golden sword appearing in his palm. First it was the Sylvans, and then they sent you. You know, I don't quite understand it. Did you think I was wasting time here so that you could slowly whittle away my forces? Leonel took another step, his spear waving through the air. Elysium raised his blade to block, but his sword was cut in 2 down its length, his hand becoming a bloody stump of pouring blood. The Minerva head's eyes bulged, and his jaw clenched in a writhing mass of veins. I was actually just waiting for my wife to return. Leonel's spear flickered again, and Elysium's entire arm soared into the air, the spear force of his weapon shattering to pieces beneath the might of his spear force. You were a pawn back then, and you're still one now. The question is, who are you a vanguard to? Leonel appeared before Elysium, his spear tip thrust through the man's chest. With a flex of his forearm, he lifted him up and shifted him to the side, as though it was less effort than tilting his head to look past him. Ah, what a surprise. I thought it was going to be the Invalids again, but they're still not here, are they? So it's the Void race and the Pluto race, two enemies come to form an alliance just to deal with little ol' me. Chapter 3273, Enough. Chapter 3273, Enough. Elysium hacked up a mouthful of blood. He reached up, trying to grab Leonel's spear, his bloodied fingers grasping at the air, only to fail in the end. He must have been seeing double and triple, the feeling in his chest spreading out uncontrollably until he couldn't tell the origin of the pain at all. Leonel's wrist flickered, and the man was sent flying. The Pluto. They were the race that had ruled over existence for as long as anyone could remember. Their bodies weren't as peculiar as the Void race, nor was their intelligence as prolific as the Sylvans, nor did they have the origins of the god-beasts of creation like the Minerva. But they stood at that peak for countless years nonetheless. In a way, maybe it should have been flattering that they were all here, but Leonel found it amusing instead. Why were all of these people here in the first place? Why did they all collectively decide that the smartest thing to do when the world was on the line was to target the one race they had supposedly never respected in the first place? There was only one reason. Or maybe it would be more accurate to say just one person was responsible. But to Leonel, the outcome didn't matter. Boom, boom! Leonel almost couldn't react to the hand. It appeared before anything else. A claw that looked as though it descended from the might of a dragon, a steely blue that looked almost human if not for the curved blade of silver at the end of every finger. The shuddering might carried within it reminded one of rushing waters and collapsing mountains. Leonel grinned. He retracted his spear, his free hand forming a claw that rushed forward. Veins popped across his forearm, the skies changing color beneath his own might as well. Natural force arts bloomed like sparks dancing off a flint. Miniature shooting stars and celestial maps wrapping around Leonel's body as the world fell into the tune of his attack. Boom. Two claws met in the air, one substantially larger than the other. Sparks flew, this time not carrying the impetus of life, but instead a deep-seated will for destruction. Crunch. Leonel squeezed down, and the powerful hand of the Pluto snapped, his fingers breaking in awkward directions. Don't run now. This time, Leonel's voice sounded like it came from its own abyssal hell. Despite the smile on his face, there was a deep impatience that stirred in his chest every time one of these new enemies appeared. Did they really think that? The human race was here for them to need as they pleased? In this case, this Pluto was almost certainly enraged. Leonel could read his soul like an open book. A dead child. In fact, Leonel knew exactly which child, Geraint. But did he think that this would make a difference? There is only going to be one race under the Northern Star after today, Leonel said coldly. His claw strengthened, and he ripped the arm forward. An enormous Pluto man with wisps of gray falling down the length of his chin appeared. As Nox. A bloody grin spread across the Pluto's face. Rather than showing fear, he raised his other claw, swiping it down toward Leonel's head. Leonel hardly paused, his spear flickering with life. Chi, 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 Chi. His blade left crisscrossing, swirling patterns across the Pluto's forearm. Blood refused to fall, but as though Leonel didn't notice, he took a step forward, his blade accelerating until the crisscrossing patterns had run all the way up Asnox's limb. The Pluto, do not bleed, to the likes of you. Your son sure did, Leonel replied coldly. Leonel's spear ran through his chest, and Asnox froze. Die, Leonel's cool voice echoed. Bang! The Pluto's heart exploded, and all at once his arm shattered into a rain of blood. Leonel kicked at his chest, sending the grieving father falling from the skies in a heap. However, before he fell very far, he was caught out of the air. The Pluto that appeared seemed to have come from nowhere, and it felt like no matter where he stood, it was only natural for him to be there. He stood far shorter than any other Pluto Leonel had ever seen, and the Void Race member that appeared not long afterward seemed to follow the same logic. The two men were only 8 feet or so tall for a human, but practically miniature for their races given their strength. It's a shame. A father should really listen to his son, Leonel said calmly, his eyes landing on the Pluto. You overestimate yourself and your worth, Zorthar spoke slowly. I don't remember being the one to ask my mortal enemy for aid to face off against someone who's overestimating themselves. If you believe that's what's happening here, you not only overestimate yourself, but you're also ignorant and not nearly as intelligent as you think. Leonel tilted his head and looked past the two men. You two are too weak. Who else did you bring? Zorthar's gaze narrowed. I won't repeat myself again, Leonel said slowly. You have 3 seconds to get out of my sight, or I'll mail your head to El Rion in a black box. The last of Leonel's words came out in the thunder of the Pluto's language, but this time it couldn't harm his throat. Instead, it was Zorthar who found his ears ringing. 1. Leonel moved. This time, he didn't bother to count. His patience had reached its limits. They believed that his forbearance was a product of his hesitancy. They were sorely mistaken. Zorthar's pupils constricted as he threw out a punch, pushing Geraint's father to his back. Leonel's spear ripped through his fist, flaying his forearm in two. With a flicker, half of his arm was severed, and with another, the other half was spliced into ribbons. Zorthar's other arm was still in a throwing motion, and he couldn't bring it back fast enough. He could only watch as the blade approached his neck, Leonel's promise echoing in his ears. Enough. Leonel's spear froze in place, a mysterious strength binding it. Chapter 3274, Chessboard. Chapter 3274, Chessboard. Leonel's wrist trembled. He had to admit this was the greatest strength he had come across since his battle with his grandfather. It was cute. Chi. Bang! A hole was blasted through Zorthar's chest. The Pluto was sent flying backward with such speed he vanished over the horizon in less than a blink. Leonel's hair danced in the wind, his king's robes flapping as though they had a mind of their own. If you came here today and failed to treat me as an equal, you, and everyone you've brought with you, will die. If you came here today to treat me as an equal, you and everyone you've brought with you will die. Only if you came here ready to place your life on the line and scratch and claw for every advantage you gain, might you have a chance at touching the hems of my robes. Leonel's voice boomed across the battlefield. It had only just fallen when an old Pluto appeared before him. The expression of the man was calm, but there was a deathly sort of furious momentum to his presence. It only took a glance for Leonel to feel that this was the strongest Pluto he had ever personally faced, the ancestor of the Plutos, Theos' Rin. This man was so old that he was among the very same group of Plutos that gave the human race a chance to escape. Unfortunately for him, Leonel didn't have even the slightest bit of gratitude in his heart. When he looked at the Pluto now, all he saw was a sea of ungrateful has-beens that had a fondness for overestimating themselves. The skies fell into silence as a sea of Plutos began to appear one after another. A shadow descended from above, a leg of stars, an arm of celestial bodies. They were all larger than life, their scythes carrying the souls of entire worlds. There were many stories across history and legends that told of gods descending onto the world, a single lone man standing before them, carrying the weight of hopes and dreams on his shoulders. Leonel had gotten used to that weight long ago. Even staring at this scene now, facing off against the gods that he had only been able to look up to in the past, his expression was as calm as could be. "No," he said softly. "I'm trying to recall, but I really can't remember a time I ever looked up to any of you." The words were soft and out of place. But with the strength of those present, it was impossible that they didn't hear them, these genuine words that came from the depths of his heart. "If you are the only one with this level of strength, then it won't make a difference," Theos' Rin said coldly. Leonel blinked. "I don't think I ever said that I was. Well, if my wife asks, I can and would beat her 10 out of 10 times no matter how strong she is. But as far as you're concerned, there's at least one other that could punch a hole through your chest." "Two is not enough," Theos' Rin replied just as coldly, the gravelly texture of his voice practically grating across the clouds. "Why don't we just skip to the final part?" Leonel suddenly asked. Theos' Rin's eyes narrowed. But before he could react, Leonel swiped out with his spear, a line appearing in the depths of space to reveal an eye larger than the world itself. Ancestor of the Void race, Thalvrin. Space trembled and pulled itself apart. Leonel didn't do much after his swipe, and yet Thalvrin's presence seemed to make the space itself scared to repair itself. However, Leonel was still shaking his head. "I feel like I'm surrounded by idiots all of the time." First, the so-called god-beast of destruction didn't realize that he was a pawn, and now two of the strongest races in existence are still in the dark. You never ask the obvious questions. Why is it that of all the races, only your Void and Pluto races use your odd nomenclature? Do you remember when it started? Why it started? Or did you just start naming your sons Elryon instead of Elryon for fun? It was only when it was facing its death that the celestial terror realized that it had been nothing but a victim of the demoness's schemes. And now, it felt like history was replaying itself all over again. Do you know what a double break represents? When I say the name, Vanwellia, an echo of blood filled the air. The skies turned crimson, the ground sloshing about with currents of red. The dense scent of death filled the air, a suffocating aura choking them down to their very souls. Vanwellia. She was the artist who painted The Last Bloody War, a depiction of the envoys of destruction and creation. However, her name itself was anything but the death and destruction that was playing out now. Vanwellia's name, when spoken, was beautiful beyond compare, painting a gorgeous flower known as the Dream Lotus. It was this beauty that somehow gave way to the savagery that hung in the air. It was the most beautiful of souls that finished the last bloody war. Beauty becoming ugly, creation becoming destruction. A dream lotus carrying nothing but nightmares. Is your name really Theos' Rin? Leonel looked toward the Pluto ancestor. Or is it Theos' Rin? The Pluto froze, and Leonel reached forward. "Little lion, is there a need for this?" A voice filled with a sultry air danced through the skies, but it was almost as though Leonel hadn't heard it at all as he tapped the ancient Pluto's body. Theos' Rin couldn't even react to Leonel's touch. "You see that you're a pawn now, right?" Leonel said lightly. Unfortunately for you, you're too much of a fool to realize it in time. So, instead, how about you just die for your sins instead? Theos's Rin began to crumble before the eyes of everyone present. It wasn't just him. One powerful Pluto after another fell to ash. No one knew how to react. No one knew how to understand what was happening. Leonel could summarize it quite well, though. He had finally stepped off the demoness's chessboard. Chapter 3275, I will be. Chapter 3275, I will be the world. Watched as some of the strongest existences of all time crumbled to pieces. In truth, even Leonel's own brothers couldn't believe it. His wife, the person who believed in him the most in the entire world, couldn't help but blink a few times as well. She had been gearing up for a great battle. This was meant to be their last hurdle. So long as they made it through, they would finally grasp the peace and happiness they had been chasing after for so long. And then, Leonel went and did this. He just reached out and touched the strongest Pluto, a man who was very well acknowledged as easily amongst the 3 strongest warriors in all of existence, and he died. Leonel retracted his hand as a woman appeared before him. She was just 3 meters away, a distance that was hardly far for a mortal, let alone gods that could bury stars with a flip of their hands. As black as her heart was, she was a woman with beauty that touched the skies and calmed the winds. Her most striking feature was just how red her lips were. It was all too easy to forget that she even had the rest of a face to look at. But oddly enough, at least right now, there didn't seem to be any dream Ashura aspects to her at all. She looked like a normal human woman in every aspect. Maybe it was a trick of the eyes, but even her eyes weren't violet. Rather, they were the most normal, warm brown. If one wanted to depict a human woman, maybe the pinnacle human woman, this would be the sort of example they might choose. Usually, she was calm, unbothered, always smiling without hints of dissatisfaction. But right now, despite the fact the same smile was on her face, Leonel could tell the difference. She wasn't happy, not in the slightest. Leonel looked at this woman who had made his life a living hell. Every other time he had come across her, he had lost control of his emotions. He felt rage that sunk to the depths of his soul, like the worming, slimy hands of a devil slithering over his heart. But right this moment, forcing her to appear for the very first time regardless of iteration, he felt nothing at all. The demoness slowly shook her head. If you simply ignored it just one more time, none of this would be necessary. Aren't you supposed to be kind? One Pluto and Void Race member after another began to collapse and fall. It seemed as though Leonel had knocked down a series of dominoes. Leonel looked into the distance, his gaze calm. For some reason, although there was no one there at all, it seemed that he was indeed looking right at a person, almost like he wanted them to know that he wasn't hiding from this moment. The first time I committed an act of genocide, I did so out of fury. This time, I do it out of necessity. My conscience is clear. The demoness didn't reply immediately, her eyes brimming with an odd emotion. You've given up on your father. I have. Then you and I will never see eye to eye. We never would have. Citying. The howl of Leonel's spear filled the skies. In that far-off, distant world, Elrion stood in silence. He didn't choose to charge with his family, but standing here, feeling his life slip away from him, it was hard not to feel rage toward that man. When he felt Leonel's gaze, he couldn't help but recall memories. Those words of rage and anger Leonel had spoken back then, words he dismissed as ridiculous. Do you think I need this power? Do you think it matters if I don't have a fraction of your strength? I swear that I will do these things, and I will do so as a human, the words echoed in Elrion's ears again and again. His powerful body began to break apart, vanishing into the sands of time. He crumbled and collapsed, a guttural chuckle coming from his lips. He honestly couldn't remember the last time he laughed, but it was hard not to right now. A human wiping out the 2 most powerful races in existence with a word and a touch. It was comical, was it not? The worst part was that he had said enough to explain how it happened, and yet he still couldn't understand. Was the gap between himself and Leonel truly so large? What happened to giving him time to catch up? When had he even had the time to surpass him, the greatest genius of the Pluto, by such a large margin? Oh, Elrion's voice rumbled one last time, and then he laughed again. The Pluto gained their power due to a favor, and they lost it all the same way. Maybe that was what they deserved. Who would have thought that from the very beginning they were just set up to be pawns? The last of Elrion's head vanished into a dusty ash, sprinkling out into the world until there was nothing at all left of him. The Void and Pluto race were no more. Leonel's spear continued to howl, so eager for battle it trembled in his palm itself. Why aren't you doing what you do best yet? Leonel asked lightly. My uncle, my master, when are you planning on using them? The Invalids, go ahead and have them charge. The ancient humans, I'm sure you have your own plans for them, do you not? Show me what your chessboard has left on it, because if there's nothing else, I'll be taking your head right here and now. Leonel raised his spear, aiming it at the demoness's head. His blade was eerily still right then, so still one would have thought that time came to a complete and utter stop. And beneath their powerful dream force, that might as well have been exactly what happened. I thought that you would come to understand, the demoness said lightly. In this world, there are no gods. If there were, life would be completely meaningless. The pupils of the demoness shook, and she looked up to meet Leonel's gaze. Wrong. You just aren't strong enough. I will be. The aura of the demoness changed. For the first time, her smile vanished. Chapter 3276, far larger. Chapter 3276, far larger. The words were enough for Leonel to understand the sort of person the demoness was. Maybe in another life he would have ended up the exact same way. He didn't know what exactly her story was or who she was so obsessed with bringing back, but what he did know was that it was a foolish pursuit. If there was someone powerful enough to wave a hand and bring back life, then was it truly ever worth much of anything to begin with? This was something that Leonel had accepted that the demoness was entirely unable to. And now, this woman, who once had the entire world in the palm of her hands, had begun to show some fluster for the very first time. That was because a key cog in her plan had been entirely crippled by Leonel. Suggestion through Dreamforce. It was something that the world feared greatly. Dreamforce masters were some of the most fearsome existences throughout worlds, and until now, there were none more powerful than the demoness. The accents and the names of those within their monikers had always been meant to convey pulses of Dreamforce. Oddly enough, all Void Race and Pluto Race members had had these accents as well, but they were always muted, not carrying the same pulse of Dreamforce. They were easy to forget as a result, just a quirk of their languages. It was only natural that different cultures and dialects had their own way of doing things. Even Leonel never second-guessed it. It was something hidden in plain sight that no one would give a second thought to. Until Leonel did. Those muted accents were there for a purpose. They were a suggestion cast over the entire race. Both of them, the power of them, and the scale, was on a level that was hard to even fathom. But what was even more important was what they represented. The Void Race, the Masters of Space, the Pluto Race, the Masters of Time. Just what did it mean to have absolute control over both races simultaneously? Leonel just decided that he would rather not find out. In the entirety of existence, if there was one person that could stand toe-to-toe with the demoness in terms of Dreamforce, it was Leonel. If Dreamforce was separated into dimensions of control, the two of them were the only ones standing on their plane. And because of that, the demoness couldn't protect her plans from Leonel at all. The moment Leonel took action, he was able to exploit the vulnerability the demoness left behind on purpose to kill every single member of the Void and Pluto race. The demoness never thought that the backdoor she left behind to control the two races would be used in this way. But her words also explained that well enough. She ultimately thought that in the end, Leonel would be on her side. How many iterations had the two of them been through together? Was it really possible that Leonel could never find her? Impossible. In the end, it seemed as though Leonel made the same choice every time, to allow the demoness's plans to continue unhindered. What she never expected was for Leonel to make the complete opposite decision he had in the past. Leonel had changed. His rage-induced mistake in the dimensional verse had once weighed heavily on his heart. He was a man who treated all lives equally. For him to erupt with such anger that he wiped out entire races just for the sake of venting his own frustrations was entirely unlike him. That guilt had followed him for a very long time, and it was never quite resolved. It was the same reason even if he had been aware of this backdoor before, no matter the iteration, he never pulled the trigger. But what shocked the demoness even more was that Leonel had truly given up on his father. She had personally witnessed all of the things Leonel had done to try and bring Velasco back, the level of destruction he had wrought. For him to change his mind like this all of a sudden was what floored her the absolute most. She never realized that all this time she was actually on Leonel's chessboard. When Leonel was training with Nilrem, being forced to recall all of the methods of power he had created in previous iterations, he was also recalling every failure, every attempt, every bit of suffering he had caused, only for it all to end in the same exact way. That moment when he finally gave up and allowed the Northern Star to take his life was symbolic in more ways than one. He had already given up then. He just needed to live one more life to be reminded of it all. Maybe he could bring Velasco back, but he would never be able to bring his father back. That he had accepted. Now it was time to end this. The demoness stared into Leonel's eyes for a long while before she flipped over a palm. An elegant spear appeared, radiating a delicate purple light. But when Leonel saw the stinger on the end of it, his eyes widened, his pupils trembling heavily. Sparks of lightning flew across his mind, connections he never thought he would make in his life overwhelming him to the point he nearly took a step back. It was the second spear that Leonel had ever gained from the spear domain ring, the very one that made him realize that not all the spearmen depicted in the ring were men. I have always been by your side, little lion. A parent's burden isn't something that you can imagine. Whether you believe it or not, I love you. I love your father. I love your uncle. She looked up from the spear. I love your grandfather. She pointed her spear forward, her dress fluttering in the wind. The gap between us isn't something that you can bridge. This chessboard, as you call it, is far larger than you can fathom. The demoness's spear tip trembled, and a hole was ripped right through Leonel's throat. Chapter 3277, Tip of the Iceberg. Chapter 3277, Tip of the Iceberg. The pain ripped through Leonel's body, sharp and fast. Without his Dreamforce prowess, he wouldn't have even registered it. He had simply never seen a spear so fast. But more shockingly than that, it embodied every aspect that it had once taught him. A continuous stream of speedy thrusts, filling the skies, covering all paths of retreat, perfect in its simplicity, endlessly complex in its variations. In an instant, Leonel was riddled with holes, an overwhelming sense of inferiority burying itself into the very depths of his soul. And yet, he hadn't ever attempted to move even a single time. A pulse of light came from Leonel's brows, the band of violet gold running across it radiating out into the world. Everything dispelled, and he found himself standing in the same place, the demoness standing across from him with the same placid expression. "Do you feel the gap now?" she said lightly. Leonel looked down at his spear and didn't reply immediately. "I have been refining my spear for so many trillions of years I have lost count. When I grew bored of the thrust, the demoness's palm flipped over and a new spear appeared. It looked almost like a glaive, having just a single edge to it. But it was thin, light as a feather, and flutteringly fragile. Then the demoness swiped out casually. It was a simple sweep, moving from left to right." Leonel's body shuddered, being sliced completely in half. Pain tore through his soul once more, but he hardly registered it when he found himself split into ribbons. Cold sweat poured down his brows. He could tell that these were just illusions, but he could also feel that if the demoness truly chose to strike, the end result just might be the very same. A fear was being ingrained into his psyche, pressed and seared into his heart. His ethereal glabella itself was being molded and shaped to it. It was a sort of manipulation that was out in the open, and yet nothing at all could be done about it. He coughed as he snapped out of the illusion once again, his breathing heavy. Beads of sweat fell down his body, his grip on his own spear tightening. Eventually, I grew bored of the sweep. The spear in the demoness's hand changed once again, shifting and changing into a heavier blade, one that carried such a heft to it that light bent toward it. A deep darkness exuded toward it as a result, an event horizon just barely forming in its midst. The blade descended from above. Leonel could do nothing as he was cut in half. It practically felt as though his body had presented itself to be spliced and diced. Once again, he was instantly cut into ribbons. Every slight bit of pain was as real as the projections in his mind. There was no escaping it. He was made to feel every split in his cells, every shear of his flesh, every break in his bones. So I mastered the slash. The spear in the demoness's hand kept changing. Every time it did, a new spear strike would be the focus. And every time, the end result would be the same. By the time the 10th spear vanished from her hand and the original stinger spear appeared, Leonel had fallen to his knees, his breathing heavy and labored. It felt like he had just experienced a countless series of deaths, and yet every strike made him very much feel alive, another attack on his mind and psyche that he was forced to experience every waking moment of. With any one of these spears, any one of these attacks, I could end this battle. If I ever cared to use them all in a seamless combat style, well, I would never need to do such a thing because there hasn't been anyone in a very long time that could parry even one of my attacks. Leonel didn't reply, his mind replaying every strike. And yet, no matter how he went through them, he couldn't find the flaw, he couldn't find the gap. It wasn't a matter of his body being unable to keep up like it usually was. In this case, even his mind couldn't track what was happening. He had never experienced such a thing in his entire life. No matter how powerful his opponent, his bottleneck had always been his body. For the first time, he was meeting something his dream force simply couldn't see through. Leonel coughed, raising a hand to his mouth subconsciously. His pupils constricted when he saw the blood that coated his palm. Dream force transcending reality. At that moment, he understood something, but it hardly changed his situation. Maybe he had overestimated himself in thinking that his dream force had reached the same stage as the demoness. This was a level more unfathomable than even influencing space and time directly. To turn illusion to reality, and for reality to become illusion. The lines blurred, and suddenly his mind couldn't tell the difference, couldn't feel the difference, even with his dream force affinity. This was beyond a dharma, beyond an idol, beyond existence itself. For a moment, he couldn't help but wonder if she was correct. Was she a god? Were there truly gods in this world? Not in the sense of an idol or mere power under their control, but in terms of omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience. A flicker of a flame appeared in Leonel's palm, burning the blood away. He slowly stood, looking back onto the chaotic battlefield. It was entirely frozen in place, locked in a frame of time beneath where the two of them stood. The battle between grandmother and grandson was on a level the world couldn't be privy to, and yet Leonel was sure that the demoness had already unleashed all of her plans onto his brothers and family. "You think too little of me," the demoness said lightly. "I don't think I've ever been inferior to someone in Dreamforce in my life," Leonel spoke as though he was talking to himself. "But I think it's a little interesting. I've never had anyone to learn from." Leonel's spear trembled. "I've never been very good at this spear thing." Leonel tossed his spear to the side as though he hadn't built his idol on it at all. He grabbed at the air, and a bow that shook the world appeared. If he was going to take the demoness down, he was going to have to do it at his absolute strongest. "It seems you still don't understand." The demoness's hair began to wave gently in the air. "What I've shown you is the mere tip of the iceberg. A dream force, the likes of which could build and topple the world all at once, manifested, and Leonel nearly felt his mind collapse on contact. Chapter 3278 Control. Chapter 3278. Control. Leonel's mind blurred, his body losing control of itself for a brief instant. It was once again something that he had never experienced before, but this time he was ready. Dream counter activated. He had changed the parameters of his ability index skill the moment he experienced his first death. His hands fired without his mind's input. The disruption to his dream force didn't matter in the slightest as he unleashed a rain of arrows. There was a blankness to his mind right this instant. He had never been so focused in his entire life. This was it. Everything would come down to this. And he had not the slightest intention of losing. Leonel's vision cleared to find the stinger spear at his throat. His gaze didn't so much as fluctuate. The spear vanished, and all of a sudden the demoness had retreated. As though the image before Leonel had been nothing more than a fake, she appeared dozens of meters away, her spear dancing as she parried one arrow after another. Time warped and shifted around them in ways that didn't make sense to the naked eye. However, to them, the two strongest Dreamforce users in the world, this was their stroll in the park. This was their daily meditation. For the first time, they were facing off against someone that saw the world in the same way they did, and the result was a battle that caused the bounds of reality to tremble, even the likes of the Northern Star shrinking back in the distance to make more space for them to unleash their might. Leonel exhaled a breath with every arrow. He should have been hyperventilating at the speed he was releasing them, and yet he seemed calm and collected. The bow was his weapon. When he used it, he never felt more comfortable, he never felt more in control. Something warped to Leonel's side. His pupils constricted, a spike of pain tearing into his ribs, a spear slid between his bones, jetting right toward his heart. A natural force art bloomed on Leonel's body, etching itself into reality. His body shifted and moved. As though erased from one reality and drawn into another, he appeared out of the range of the blade. His king force bloomed, his arrow appearing drawn at the demoness in point-blank range. It couldn't have been more than a half-meter between the two. He didn't even get the chance to release it, his arm flying into the air. Losing control of his bow, Leonel took a strong step back, his aura surging. There was a calmness to him even with just a single arm at his disposal. His king force bloomed and his missing arm regrew as though it had never been severed, the vital star force aspects pooling a vibrant life force into him. He struck out with a palm at the same time, blasting his severed arm to pieces. Natural force arts bloomed out from it, an array of complex magic circles enveloping one another as Leonel's bow swapped for a quill. He swiped at the air, crossing through the spray of his own blood. Clones of bows and arrows crossed the air, spanning hundreds of miles, thousands of them all drawing at once and firing in a rain that descended from the skies. The demoness calmly weaved through them, releasing a single palm from her stinger spear and tapping at the air. The arrows all froze in the skies. The natural force art that had bloomed from Leonel's arm was being reversed by the touch of an empress. Every move Leonel made seemed to be perfectly countered, and she did so with the calmest of countenances. And every time she took action, it seemed like an ancient rust was being knocked off of her. Every flutter of rusted rose gold was akin to another tick up in her strength. Leonel could feel it. He was watching the awakening of a slumbering dragon. He had never felt so oppressed in his life. In that instant, it was like the looming image of a goddess was hovering over him. "I'm no goddess," she said lightly. "The choice of the word God was made by you." The demoness's dress fluttered. A simple strike soared through Leonel's defenses, and this time, he wasn't fast enough to knock another arrow, his reaction lagging behind just the slightest bit. At that moment, even the likes of Dream Counter were suppressed. She grasped its secrets, and she reacted accordingly, her dream force shifting to make her attacks more ethereal, harder to read, and impossible to grasp even for Leonel himself. "I am a demoness. Pucky." The spear jetted through Leonel's heart, piercing right through it and out of the other side. Boom! A violent pulse of power, a force-shaped cone, radiated out from Leonel's back. As though to paint the picture of just how much strength was coursing through his chest right that moment, it shot out, blinding the world. In the far-off distance, stars died, worlds collapsed, regulators cowered, and world spirits shrank. And yet, the demoness's eyes narrowed when she saw this. "Claim as much control over the world as you want," Leonel said calmly, feeling the power coursing through him. "But my body is under my control alone." He knew why the demoness was shocked. As great as the cone of force was, she had too much control over her spear and attack for such a shocking amount of energy to leak so easily. Such flashy displays were only for the weak. She had long left that behind. The only explanation was that she had somehow lost control of her blade. But she couldn't quite understand how that was possible. Even after Leonel stated it so plainly, she didn't believe it. She lost control over her blade in Leonel's body? If she could lose control of her weapon due to something so trivial, how would she paint the future she wanted? Rage flickered through the demoness's eyes, and her hair rose from her shoulders, flickers of violet appearing deep within it. Chapter 3279 Not just Chapter 3279 not just the demoness, pulled back on her spear, ripping a hole out of Leonel's heart. But there was a pool of spear and bow force that jetted out, the weapon forces that forged the very core of his being, sparkling out into the world. They latched onto the demoness's spear force, suppressing and battling against it. The demoness's gaze flickered, confusion coloring her features. She had just been about to grow the slightest bit serious, but this change caught her off guard. She found her spear force suddenly difficult to control, and before she could make heads or tails of what was going on, Leonel was already upon her. The quill in his hands changed again, and out appeared a spear. Once again, the demoness was taken aback. It didn't make sense for Leonel to go back to the spear. Didn't he realize the gap between them already? Pucky! A hole ripped through her shoulder. Leonel's spear danced, butterflies and hummingbirds fluttering around him. His gaze had become frighteningly cold, and the demoness realized at that moment that her grandson had long reached an absolute state of focus. While her emotions were continuously changing, his had been steady from the very beginning. She raised her spear up to block, but Leonel slid by it, slicing into her gut. His spear twirled in his hands, slashing wound after wound into her body. She leaned back in an attempt to dodge, still reeling from what was happening, but Leonel's blade was absolutely relentless, and in that moment she saw shadows of herself in him. A flash of understanding lit her eyes. While she was knocking rust off, there was someone else that was improving right before her. Leonel had never had systematic training in his entire life. From the very start, his father had left him to fend for himself. Even when he gained a master, all Nilrim really did was teach him life lessons, then point him toward techniques that he had created himself in past lives. What he did best was improve on his own, and the worst things his enemies could do was give him a template to follow. Not only had the demoness given him a template, she did it all through a dream force illusion, and then she had the audacity to run her spear force through his weapon force innate node. All of her progress, all of her understanding, was his own now. He wasn't just Leonel the king, he wasn't just Leonel the father, he wasn't just Leonel the husband, he wasn't just Leonel the son. He was also Leonel the wise Star Order. In this world, there was nothing he couldn't document, nothing he couldn't see through, nothing he couldn't grasp when given enough time. His spear ran through the demoness's chest, and she looked down in abject shock. Slowly, her expression almost seemed to fade away. Her emotions were leaking out into the world, melding into her dream force, and then diluting to such a large extent that there was almost nothing left of her. "Okay," she said lightly. The spear in her hands changed. The demoness that Leonel had just ripped a hole through slowly faded. She appeared in the distance, reality rewritten as though she had never suffered the slightest bit of injury. She stood there in silence as her new spear manifested, her thoughts seemingly in a distant place. Despite the dilution of her emotions, Leonel could feel all sorts of them coming from her, but they ultimately boiled down to a simple phrase. She was at a crossroads. Standing there, she wasn't really sure what road to take, but oddly enough, it wasn't that she was hesitant. She had long set off on a particular path, her aim remaining the exact same, and she had no intention of changing. Rather, she was considering another matter. How much of her strength did she want to show right now? Leonel could feel his dream force improving by leaps and bounds every moment he spent in this battle, and because of that, he could feel the deep and unfathomable well remaining within the demoness. But this question she was pondering made his eyes narrow. What was she conserving her strength for? Leonel looked off into the distance, his gaze landing on the northern star that loomed overhead so closely that they could practically reach out and touch it. I see, in this ultimate battle, both grandson and grandmother seemed distracted, their thoughts elsewhere. And yet, bang, 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 bang. They continued to stand there, but illusions danced through the air, their every clash just as real as the last. They both danced across the line of illusion and reality, the strikes of their spears carrying more power, more control, more mystery with every blow. A battle of dream force raged through the skies as they lost themselves in their own minds, and then they suddenly moved at once. As though the iterations of their battles all played out at the same time, their weapons seemed to multiply in the air, a myriad of changes taking place until their blades clashed. Boom. There was only the slightest pause before Leonel coughed, taking a heavy step back. The new spear of the demoness had solidified. It was as simple as could be, a wooden spear with a flat, double-edged blade. It carried not the slightest hint of power to it, and yet Leonel could feel the concentration of auspicious air. It was as though the spear itself was the embodiment of enlightenment. Maybe this was payback. He had managed to defeat his grandfather after his inferior weapon gave way, and now Leonel looked at his spear manifested from his dream force and idol. Cracks riddled its surface, and it seemed like any moment now it would completely collapse. So such a path of force crafting is possible too. Fascinating. Leonel flipped his spear in his palms, 10 stars appearing to his back. They formed a link, and a constellation took shape. I'll be taking that too then. A natural force art took shape, the Morales constellation shimmering bright and powerful. Auspicious air poured down from the skies. Chapter 328 open, palm, chapter 3280. Open palm Leonel pulled on the world itself, his thoughts almost becoming solid. Auspicious air fell in waves. He had never forgotten. How could he? He had created this technique with his own hands. Dimensional Cleanse had had a built-in array of natural force arts designed for no other reason than to gather auspicious air. It was so natural to him that he hardly ever used the ability. Leonel had never really fought an opponent he needed auspicious air against in the first place. In his estimation, his mind had already been elevated to the point he didn't need the help of the world around him to think sharper and faster. What he never considered was the possibility of using auspicious air for something else entirely. When he saw the demoness use it in such a way, it flowed naturally as though it was nothing more than an extension of himself. But not only did he grasp the methods of the demoness, he took a step beyond. His king force took shape, fusing into the auspicious air. At that moment, his spear force elevated to another level, the weapon in his hand simplifying on one hand and blooming to another level on the other. The skies shook and blades crossed through the air. They danced with the rays of the northern star as their backdrop. In that moment, they looked like nothing more than a pair of mortals. If it wasn't for the fact they were crossing the skies and impossible distances in what felt like less than a blink, one would have truly been fooled. Their power was so controlled, their attacks so straightforward that they almost looked down to earth. Thrusts met thrusts, slashes parrying slices, piercing strikes meeting steady spear bodies. Every attack they sent, they both seemed to be improving by leaps and bounds. It seemed as much a competition of their genius as it was their strength. They grasped techniques from one another, differing methods, different perspectives on how to view the world. And then their strikes began to grow more overbearing, more complex. They layered in shifts in time and space, warping reality and twisting the world to mold to their will. Down below, the world seemed still frozen in time, unable to read or react to the battle they were witnessing. Blood spurted. Leonel's neck was almost severed in two, but a light of violet fused it together back into one. He knew that he was at a disadvantage, his improvement lagging just the slightest bit behind the demoness. The difference was small, but what truly made him apprehensive was the fact that the demoness was controlling it at such a minor rate on purpose. While he was quickly trying to improve, she was not only improving, but also recovering strength she also had. With such a gap, the difference would be obvious. Even now, she was trying to win while minimizing the strength she had to use. In its own way, this was suffocating for a completely different reason. She was still playing mind games, still trying to fill him with self-doubt and an oppression that went beyond just the blade in her hand. She was the true ancestor of the Dream Assuras. However, Leonel didn't waver in the slightest. She wasn't the only one that had birthed a race. Blood exploded out from Leonel's back as a spear jetted through his chest. This time, the demoness bypassed his heart on purpose, piercing around it and avoiding the loss of control of her spear force. Or so she thought. An unrelenting blast shot out a moment later, leveling more worlds and stars. The eyes of the demoness narrowed, but Leonel had already taken control of his spurts of blood. Earlier, he had turned his arm into a natural force art. This wasn't by coincidence, nor was it something he had done on a whim. His wife had taken the true path of humans, but he was a spiritual king, the first spiritual. His soul was separate from his body, which meant one very important thing. This flesh sack of his that his soul chose to call home was nothing more than a vessel forged by his hands. He could make it anything he wanted it to be. He wasn't a blood force user like his wife, but the difference hardly mattered. In that moment, the substance of Leonel's body changed, and the force arts bloomed around the demoness's weapon. Despite her confidence, she lost control of her spear once again, and Leonel responded in kind, piercing right through her chest. Bang! There was a suffocating presence that bloomed, rebounding against his blade, but he pushed right through, auspicious air, his spear force, and his king force blooming into a single mighty tempest. A hole shot right through the demoness's chest. Boom! The two separated, their torsos coupled with ghastly, gaping holes. In an instant they were healed, Leonel's king force blooming and the demoness rewriting reality. The space beneath their feet rippled as they stomped down. Enough, the demoness said lightly. In that moment, the slight violet ripples in her hair became solid. Her aura changed, her body growing in size. She had already been slightly taller than Leonel, but now she stood at almost a half-meter taller. Lavender horns grew from her forehead, curling back and onto her head like a pair of twisting braids. And already a beautiful woman, she seemed to elevate to another level, her warm brown eyes sparkling with an amethyst-like sheen. Her subtle increases in power stopped as she took a large leap forward in an instant of time. She appeared before Leonel in an instant, the latter having only just stomped at the air. He was too slow to react, and from a third party's perspective, it almost looked as though he had thrown himself onto her spear. However, the demoness didn't thrust the blade through his body. Her spear moved so fast that it looked almost as though she had just tapped him several times, barely leaving wounds that were only as deep as paper cuts on his body. And then Leonel shattered to pieces, his ethereal glabella the only thing remaining, yet that simply fell into the demoness's open palm. Chapter 3281, Chapter 3281, the demoness looked down at the crystal in her hand. It was so large it made her eyes narrow, but the slight tremble that came from it was what made her pupils constrict. Her dream force pressed down, suppressing the changes. High in the skies, the constellation and stars of Leonel's making began to fade, as did the idol. It was impossible for it to continue to manifest itself like this, not when Leonel was sealed off from the world. As great as his body was, what good was it when there was nothing left? It was true that she could have ended this battle whenever she wanted. But she really hadn't wanted to tap into this strength too early. Unfortunately, this grandson of hers, he improved too quickly. If she allowed him the chance to continue keeping it close and rapidly rising, he might leech off her trillions of years of training and catch her off guard before she realized it. The first time he managed to control her spear force, she shrugged it off. but it was impossible for her to ignore the second time. He had proven himself capable of pulling the wool over her eyes time and time again. Truthfully, the very moment he had managed to deduce her plans with the Pluto and Void race, she should have done exactly this. But she had been a bit too stubborn, maybe a little too prideful, maybe a little too sentimental. Now, though, it no longer mattered. She hesitated for a moment, looking at the ethereal glabella in her palm. After a long while, she shook her head and squeezed. Shrack. Bang. It shattered to pieces. There was a slight tremble in her pupils, but she brushed the pieces away, letting them flutter to the ground. Do what you have to do. Now, she said coldly. In that moment, an unexpected pairing appeared. Well, one of them was very much expected. It was the second of them that was truly odd. Zephyrian, the Emperor of the Invalids, was one. He was a man who had once had a great amount of pride. He had also thought himself equal to the demoness. But right at that moment, his head was lowered, as though in deference to her presence. It seemed that whatever superiority he had thought he had had long since been wiped out. But what was truly odd was that invalids, even variant invalids, shouldn't be able to display such emotion. They only knew one thing: destruction. If a race of beings wanted nothing more than the end of the world, then how could they fear for their lives? And yet, Zephyrian had his head buried so low that one would have thought he was a cowardly rat. But once again, it was the second person that was such a surprise. Talon, the reincarnated genius of the barbarian race. Leonel had learned long ago that Talon was living a second life, having grasped it from his wife, a ninth-dimensional powerhouse that stood on the same level as the strongest existences across, well, existence. Now, Talon stood next to the Invalid Emperor, and was somehow much calmer than he was. At the very least, he wasn't trembling as though he might piss himself any moment. In fact, although he didn't look much different from the last time Leonel had seen him, there was a depth to his eyes that hadn't been there before. There already isn't much left to do, Talon said calmly. While they've been distracted, the mortal and demigod worlds are no more. The demoness didn't reply directly, looking up at the northern star instead. If that was the case, why didn't she sense much of a change? It seems we've put too much stress on it through all these iterations, she said lightly. If there was one existence that knew of everything that was constantly happening, it was the Northern Star. It was beyond the realms of time and space. More, she eventually spoke again. Understood, Talon replied. Then he vanished. Zephyrian lagged behind, not realizing that Talon had already disappeared because his head hung too low and he didn't dare to reach out with his senses. By the time he realized what was happening and was ready to leave, the demoness called out. A moment? Zephyrian froze. Yes, my son and his wife. She spoke these words without elaboration. They've already been integrated. They are now one of us, Zephyrian replied carefully. There was a ripple in the air as though the demoness was agitated about something, but then she just nodded. Good. Go. Zephyrian bowed his head and then vanished. The demoness stood there in silence, time frozen all around her. Looking down at the people she could hardly see as anything more than ants, she was eerily calm. Her emotions dispersed through her dream force as usual, her mind so large that it was possible to dodge even her own thoughts if she wanted to. Whether time was frozen or moving, it hardly mattered to her. Wasn't it all the same? Since you're here, why don't you show yourself? Nilrim stepped out of the shadows, his gaze on the fluttering pieces of ethereal glabella still dispersing through the air. Are you here to try and convince me again? She asked. I gave up on that a long time ago, Nilrim replied, still not looking at her. Was it after the 10th woman you fucked, or the millionth? Nilrim's eye twitched. I don't think the number is that high. It is. In fact, it's much higher than that. Ophelia, do not call me by my name. Dare to do that again, and your death this time will not be swift. I will make you feel every ounce of pain that I have. Nilrim's mouth opened to reply, gathering the courage to look at the demoness for the first time. But the very face he didn't want to see was there. Cold, distant, so far away that he couldn't touch her even though he was within arm's reach. He exhaled slowly. This time, you will lose, he said lightly. Thank you for saying those words, the demoness replied as she looked toward Nilrim. Now I have all the motivation that I need. Nilrim smiled, a genuine, true smile. I look forward to the afterlife with you, if there is one. Our grandson is not so easy to defeat. The demoness's pupils trembled when Nilrim said the word our. Then, in a fit of rage, she slapped out with a palm. Bang! Nilrim was no more. Not even flesh, bone, or soul remained. Chapter 3282, Husband. Chapter 3282, Husband. The demoness's hand trembled in the air, but then it suddenly stopped. It dropped to her side, falling into a lull. The space her dream force took up seemed to expand, and her rippling emotions calmed. She looked toward where Leonel's remains rippled in the air. Then, she took a step and vanished. Honestly speaking, she wasn't sure what Nilrim was speaking of. What was dead would remain dead. If that wasn't the case, why would she have to try so hard to change it? Ina stood on the ground, the small hands of her children resting in her palms. She stared up at the skies. In one moment, her husband had been there, and in the next, he wasn't. She felt an emptiness in her heart, and tears threatened to fall from her eyes. Mommy? 2 tugs came from her arms. A smile curled her lips as she looked down, the sadness she had just felt vanishing into the wind as though it had never been there. Yes? Little Leo and Leah blinked. They thought they had felt their mother's sadness just now, but it didn't seem like anything was wrong anymore. They might have been intelligent, but they were still children. Their minds lacked flexibility, so they quickly forgot, thinking that they had made it up. In their short little lives, they had never experienced any sort of true hardship. Certainly, nothing that wasn't manufactured by their parents. They didn't have the capacity to consider that something truly horrible may have happened. For her children, Ina put on a strong face as though she couldn't feel the vast emptiness. Even the pain of the ring on her finger being burned away didn't so much as change the look on her face. The space before them warped. Out from it, a barbarian walked out. A woman with a bosom so large that it felt like she should tip over appeared, holding a heavy club over her shoulder. Bandages stretched across her chest, loose pants hanging so low on her hips, even they seemed like they might fall at any moment. Ina hardly reacted to the appearance of this woman, but she already knew who she was. Talon's wife, the very barbarian race woman who had once stopped Leonel outside of the incomplete world of the sea gods. She looked toward Ina in silence. Despite her valiant demeanor and her being quite well aware that these matters were all but over, she didn't show much arrogance. In fact, her expression was that of pity. She, too, had once lost her husband. It took quite a lot to get him back, but the man she knew now, she found herself absently looking into the distance. Maybe her true husband was never coming back. She would just have to learn to love this new man. As soon as she had this thought, she fiercely suppressed it. If the demoness sensed it, she would truly be finished. Taking a breath, she looked toward Ina again, opening her mouth to speak. She didn't get the chance to. If you want to live, leave, Ina said lightly. She never let go of the hands of her two children. It was quite rare for Ina to show any mercy at all. Between the two of them, she had always been the more bloodthirsty compared to her husband. All this talk of guilt and genocide never faded her. Leonel could kill all the men, women, and children in the world, and she still loved him just the same. It just never mattered to her. But right now, she didn't want to interact with anyone but her children, and certainly not an enemy. The barbarian woman frowned. The pity she once felt had vanished, and the warrior blood in her pumped only once, as it was the last time. Her head flew into the skies, the very blood thrumming in her body being ripped out of her control. All she felt was her heart beat once, far too heavily, and then a spurt of blood surged for her throat. When it reached that location, it sharpened, jetting out like a winding scythe. Her head was separated from her shoulders before she even got the chance to speak a single word. Talon froze. His head snapped back so fast that space crackled and almost snapped apart at the seams. A pang echoed through his heart, his palm involuntarily raising to his chest. He hadn't even known until this moment that the woman had so firmly wormed her way into his heart. He knew how much she loved him, but the feeling had never burned so furiously in him. At best, he loved the feeling of her body. In this life, he accepted being her husband because she was the best option. Sometimes he could see that reflection of pain in her eyes, but he couldn't change how he felt. So, he just never addressed it. At that moment, though, it was like something had been ripped out of him. She died? His shock almost made him hyperventilate. Without the Pluto or Void race, with the Sylvans neutered and the ancient beasts being slaughtered beneath his and the Invalids' blades right this moment, just how could there be someone left who could kill his wife, let alone so quickly? Those families? No, they were dealt with as well by... Talon's eyes danced with a malevolent light. He stomped at the air, his rotund body carrying such strength that such a simple movement, even so high up, bounced the world beneath down several light years. In an instant he was gone, his fury towering to the skies. Ina stood in silence for a moment and then kneeled down to her children. She calmly brushed their hair with her hands, giving them each a kiss on the forehead. Then she hugged them tightly. The two little ones were overwhelmed by the love they were feeling. Little Leo squirmed a bit, but Leah pinched his cheek, forcing him into obedience. A light smile coated her lips. Then she pulled them into the segmented cube, suppressing Anastasia's desire to manifest herself. Rising to her feet, she exhaled. A blood-red light coated her from head to toe. Chapter 3283, Trust. Chapter 3283, Trust. A pair of wings appeared, outstretched on the small of Ina's back. Her hair became a bloody red, her eyes morphing into a pair of sparkling rubies. She stood there in silence as the air boomed. When Talon appeared, he didn't say a single word, his fist striking down from the skies above with a fury that could render even stars impotent. Ina simply reached out her palm. Boom! There was only a brief silence before everything exploded around them. The battle, the war, it all seemed to pale. But deep inside, Ina knew that the battle her husband had just fought and lost was on a level entirely separate from this. While they were still affecting reality, Leonel and the demoness had long transcended beyond that. Somehow, that thought only fueled her further. The earth beneath her collapsed into a crater so deep that lava began to bubble upward, but she still remained in the air, her palm meeting Talon's fist with a calmness that belied the sadness and hurt in her heart. She wouldn't allow her tears to fall, not while her children still needed to rely on her. She would be strong for them, for her lost parents, for her husband. Her arm lightly shook. Talon flicked through the skies, being pushed back and landing in the far-off distance with a heavy thump. His pupils had constricted into pinholes. Never did he think that there truly was someone so strong remaining here. However, soon his shock became boiling blood, his surprise fusing into his fury and lighting sparks of lightning across his body. The skies clapped with thunder and two hammers appeared in his hands. Like a god of soaring clouds and peeling lightning, he shot upward and slammed down. Aina was about to move when she felt something odd. His abilities are similar to mine. Her mind was in an erratic state. Usually, she moved fluidly and without thought. But there was something about Talon's abilities that were restricting her. He has some form of clairvoyance as well. That was when Aina remembered. Wasn't this the ability of the barbarian race? They had the ability to feel out the future in a way that only those with clairvoyance usually could. The realization came to Aina in waves, her thoughts a little slower than usual without Leonel's Dreamforce affinity connected to her any longer. She needed her clairvoyance now more than ever, but to think she would run into an enemy that was such a perfect counter to her just after she lost her husband. Aina could feel her heart trembling as the hammers descended from the skies, her expression a little lost as though she wasn't quite sure what to do. Still distracted, she almost couldn't react as the hammers bore down on her. Boom. Her wings crossed about her body at the last moment. A clash that sounded akin to metal banging against metal resonated. A harsh hum filled the skies as they vibrated against one another, Aina's knees bending and almost giving way. However, the one to feel shock was Talon. Despite Aina clearly being caught off guard, she managed to mostly withstand his strength. Just how much power was her body holding? How was it even possible for someone's physical prowess to be so high? The two separated, but Talon didn't give Aina a chance to breathe. One swing after another came, one reverberating clang after another came, Aina using a mixture of her wings and palms to reflect them. The more the battle went on, and the fierce Talon suppressed Aina, the more shocked he felt. She was matching these weapons, forged with the core of worlds, with nothing more than her body. Wasn't she a battle axe expert? Did she not even care to bring it out any longer? Despite Talon's thoughts, Aina was struggling a great deal as well. She couldn't find her footing. Fighting with so much thought involved was completely foreign to her. She had known relying so heavily on her clairvoyance would be a problem. That was why she had gone all out against the four great families in an attempt to find a path to breakthrough. She had managed it, but in the end she still had this glaring weakness. With the weight of her husband's death on her mind, it was even harder to focus than usual. Her thoughts flowed slowly and languidly, lagging in her mind and making her hesitate before every attack several times. Talon, a seasoned fighter, took every advantage. A hammer whipped against the side of Aina's head, and she felt her vision go entirely white. Blood flew from her lips, her body almost going limp as she shot out. She hadn't even been able to react to the blow. The gap just kept climbing between them until she couldn't react at all. In the far-off distance, Leonel's brothers were still fighting their bloody battles. Even when they thought things had ended with the deaths of the Pluto and Void race, the Invalids came in with numbers more shocking than they could fathom. Seeing Aina suddenly suffer such a blow, many of them wanted to rush over, but they simply couldn't. The sea gods, the fox, even the oryx were all tied down. Never once had the war stopped. When Leonel had said they would all be on their own, he had meant it. He just had hoped that these words wouldn't have to apply to his wife as well. Unfortunately, he had failed. And the end result was that a scene that had played out many times throughout history was playing through again. Aina's head wrung. She could already feel Talon rushing forward. An expert like him wouldn't possibly give up such a good chance. I miss him already, she thought softly. She didn't believe it. Her husband, he could never lose, no matter who the opponent was. He could beat her 10 out of 10 times, even if she was stronger. He had said so himself. He would never lie to her. She trusted him more than anyone else in the world. I trust him. A small light of clarity flickered in the depths of Aina's eyes as she felt something shift within her. Chapter 3284, Too Weak. Chapter 3284, Too Weak. The world was in an odd limbo, silent and endless. If there was ever true nothingness, this was what it would be. Deeper than the void, blacker than an abyss, lifeless. It was the essence of a complete lack of potential, a world that had nothing to give and nothing to be taken. Through it, consciousnesses swam. These were the minds too powerful to be snuffed out in an instant, but too distant to ever taste life again. This stream existed beyond the Northern Star, a place where the weapons of the four great families had once been hidden, and yet it was even beyond those deathly destruction flames that Leonel had once tapped into. Here these minds drifted, forgotten and buried, never to return. Soon, in this place without time, they would vanish without a sound. Not even a puff of smoke or a whisper of wind would beckon them to the forever of nothingness. And it was here that a voice unexpectedly spoke. You seem to be doing just fine. Fuck you. The second voice was Leonel's. He was absolutely pissed off. Did he have a plan? Yes. Did that matter to him? Not in the slightest. He had wanted with his everything to win without having to do this. There was nothing he hated more than putting his wife and children in this situation. But in the end, he still wasn't strong enough. No need to be so angry. That grandmother of yours, a whistle came. She is not only smoking hot, but, goddamn, is she powerful. I've tried already, believe me. Can you not speak about people I'm related to that way? It's disgusting. Also, I'm pretty sure you tried something like that on my mother too. Don't you have an ounce of shame? She's related to you, not me. How is it my fault you descend from bombshells? Your daughter-in-law, you mean? Leonel's voice clapped like thunder. The other voice didn't reply for a very long while. Listen, Leonel. I'm sure you already know my answer to that question. In my last moments, is it necessary for us to argue like this? Cut me a little bit of slack. I've been fighting for so long, so very long. It was a tone that Leonel rarely, if ever, heard from this master of his. It was true fatigue, but it was also a deep sadness, an unwillingness as deep as Leonel's own. As much as Leonel didn't want to put his wife and children in this situation, Nilrem didn't like to watch his family crumble in front of him, even when he could never truly see them as his family. I've tried every way I can. I've tried to be the man your grandmother remembers, but it was never enough. It's so ironic, so sad. But I accepted a long time ago that not only could I never be that man, but even if I did somehow become him by some shocking sheer twist of fate and serendipity, I doubt that your grandmother would be in the headspace to even acknowledge it as true. This is the truth of it all. She's long since defeated herself, she just hasn't accepted it yet. These words were enough for Leonel to put the final pieces of the puzzle together. He came to understand, and what anger he did have dissipated. Indeed, this man wasn't his grandfather, not really. That man had long died. I know that you understand already, but allow these words from a dying old man. I've wanted to speak this to someone for so long. Leonel couldn't see Nilrem, but he could feel the tears in his eyes. He didn't know how he had never noticed that this man had long been broken beyond repair. In his life, the only person Leonel had ever truly respected was his father. He didn't think that in these last moments he would gain the same sort of respect for his grandfather as well. All that pain that he had so perfectly hidden even from Leonel himself, just how much heavier had the mountain on his back been? In ancient times, your grandmother and I were among the first humans, the first existences to grasp force. We were talented, so supremely so that we led humans out of the shadows and into the world, but neither of us realized just what we were doing until it was too late. We thought we would live forever, that we would be by one another's side into infinity, but nothing lasts forever, Leonel. Nothing ever does. We improved too fast, suppressed other races too much, took too much. I'm sure that you've heard much of this story already on the idle battlefield, so I won't waste your time again with the details. The short of it is a story that you've probably never heard, because the sacrifice I had to make back then required erasing myself from the annals of history, from the bounds of time and the reality of space. This northern star that everyone in the world thinks of as a harbinger of doom, it's actually what remains of me. It's all that stands between life and true nothingness. Leonel remained silent. Maybe if he had had a body, his reaction would have been fierce, but hearing it now, it was the only thing that ever made any sense. The Northern Star, his last and strongest iteration, had personally checked what was behind it, going as far as he could into the ether, only to find that there was nothing at all. And that was the very point. There was nothing. True nothingness. I thought that that would be the end of it. I sacrificed my life for the woman I loved and the children we had together, to give them hope to live out the rest of their lives, hope that maybe there was an afterlife we could be together in. But your grandmother was unable to accept it. All of these iterations, all of the versions of me she's forcefully brought back, all of my failed relationships, run-ins with empresses that wanted my head, or a matriarch of a wife who treated me without the slightest ounce of respect, your real grandfather? These were all of her attempts to bring back the man she remembers, whom she truly loves. Ironically enough, your grandfather was probably the closest, the man who best embodied what I once was. Unfortunately, he had a fatal flaw, Nilrem chuckled. He was too weak. Chapter 3285, to be loved. Chapter 3285, to be loved. Nilrem's laughter was sad and broken. Life liked to play jokes. The demoness had only truly fallen in love twice in her life, though that wasn't for lack of trying. Every time she forced her husband of the past to reincarnate in some way or form, she tried to be with him. But that ended tragically almost every time. Nilrem's stories of being chased by empresses, or how emasculated he had been in the Luxnix clan, these weren't foolish facades or made-up tales. They were his truth. They were the tapestry woven between him and the demoness, him and Ophelia. The second time she fell in love, the second time she lost herself in a man, an iteration of Nilrem was Velasco's father, Leonel's grandfather, I. She really had loved him. She had given him her life and everything, birthing 2 children for him. Throughout all the iterations, this was the one thing that Ophelia had never done for any other man. It was the one thing that she had barred herself from until she found the husband she was looking for. It could be said that this time she thought she had. But as life went on, and she observed Leonel's grandfather more, the potential she thought she had no longer being twisted through rose-tinted glasses, she realized that he couldn't be the man she fell for. That man had been able to sacrifice himself to save the entire world. He had been able to shoulder the burden of an entire race. He had been able to protect her, she who was the strongest Dreamforce user in all of existence, the first Dreamforce user. That man, despite her own strength, had been able to stand before her and carry mountains and rewrite constellations, overwriting laws and forging new ones with his own hands. How could that man and this one possibly be the same? Ophelia tried everything to change his talent, to help him grow stronger, to throw challenges at him that would force him to improve. But in the end, she pushed it too far. He lost his life in the hands of one of her schemes, and it completely broke her. No, maybe she had already been broken before, far too broken beyond repair. The words his father told him about his grandfather rang in Leonel's ears. He told them not to blame her, that it was all his fault. It seemed that he realized what Ophelia was doing even when she tried to hide it. He might not have been the talent that she wanted him to be, needed him to be, but he was intelligent enough in his own right. Over the years, he gained an understanding of his wife and what she was looking for, and he knew that he could never measure up. Leonel could feel the very remains of his soul tearing up, a pain ripping through what might have once been his chest. He had deduced it, he had. But hearing it out loud hurt so much worse than he expected. Hearing it said in such bold words. His talent, the one thing he couldn't control, wasn't enough in the end. Leonel thought about how lucky he was to be born the way he was, how lucky he was to have his intelligence, to have this talent of his. He had always been the man who felt that all lives were equal regardless of the strength they were granted at birth. And then his emotions twisted, melding darkness, helpless fury, a broken guilt. The only reason he had this talent was because of who his grandmother was. And yet, it was because of who his grandmother was that his life was so broken that he had lost almost everything that meant anything to him. And then he laughed too, a laugh no less broken than Nilrem's own. Don't chuckle at me like that, kid. I've been through far more than you. This is my turn to be the edgy mess. You just sit there and see a bright future like you're meant to. I'm depending on you to bring my wife back to me. Would that be in between your mistresses, or... Leonel made the joke through his tears, knowing it was exactly this sort of thing that his master, that his grandfather wanted to hear. He still wanted to feel rage, feel anger that Nilrem hadn't saved his father. But he knew that fury was worthless. Nilrem was just as helpless as he was. Those women were there to numb the pain. This handsome face can't go on without use, you know. There's nothing handsome about a ghost, bastard. Leonel could finally feel Nilrem's smile. Near. You're the apple of her eye, little lion. She wants to see you come back. She wants to see you do the impossible. She wants to see her grandson do what only her husband could do in the past. Don't disappoint her. And be sure to kick her ass. Leonel didn't respond for a long while, so Nilrem had no choice but to speak again. Don't disappear on me, little bastard. I swear to God, if you made me talk big to my wife just for them to be empty words, I will pull you out of the afterlife just to give you the spanking I never could. Nilrem grew more heated as he spoke, somewhat worried that Leonel had truly dissipated, but then a calm voice came. There's no need to worry, Gramps, Leonel finally said. It was obvious what Ophelia wanted to do now. She felt that the only two in the world strong enough to survive the end of everything were her and her husband. If she destroyed the world, her husband could finally let his burden down. He could finally stop being the Northern Star. He could finally come back to her. In this world, the only way to live forever is to be remembered by those that you love. Luckily for me, I have just one woman who loves me very much. Leonel's consciousness trembled. Chapter 3286, Who? Chapter 3286, Who? To Ina, the world had never felt clearer. In one moment, her head was ringing, the world was spinning, her body felt like a wobbling mess, one action leading to three others she didn't ask for. And in the next, she was as solid as a rock. No, more accurately, she had found her rock. The eyes of a man she could never forget. The smile, the heart, the soul. Her mind trembled. Instant recovery, she whispered. A blinding light pierced the skies. Ina's mind seemed absent for a moment, as though she hadn't noticed the hammer coming at her. But then her wings flapped. Talon felt like he was watching the most peculiar of things. Ina's wings seemed to multiply, and in an instant, both of his hammers were struck at their weak points several times over. At the same time, Ina had flapped her wings so hard that a massive crater appeared beneath her, blasting out a sphere of space and giving her room to rebound. Talon's momentum came to a grinding halt in the skies. What happened? He was stunned, but Ina had already moved again, her small fist flashing through the air with the power of stars. Talon's pupils constricted. Before the blow even landed, he changed his entire approach. Arrogant and oppressive as he was, he took the battle seriously. Usually, he would at least suffer first, but as a veteran of battle, an elite warrior who felt he was beneath no one, his speed in recognizing his situation and reacting appropriately was second to none. He crossed his hammers before his chest, clouds thundering above. He was sent flying, but his expression was calm. The lightning he called for fell right that instant, sliding into his hammers. They enlarged, with force arts of lightning and destruction manifesting in them. The destruction pooled and pooled until the heads of the hammers increased yet another size. Then, in a shocking display, it overturned to creation, light blooming. Talon stamped out with his hammers twice. Complex magic circles began to appear in Ina's path, each one carrying the auspicious air of a natural force art. In the end, it had to be remembered that the most shocking thing about Talon wasn't his power, it was his force crafting. Since Ina had decided to bring this out, she would suffer for it. Ina's second fist slammed into the first. To her own surprise, her momentum was greatly reduced. Talon's eyes flashed when he noticed this and immediately took advantage. He slammed his two hammers together, a roar leaving his peals as the second natural force art expanded violently. Lightning flashed and danced like splitting sparks, and then a flood dragon took shape. A roar, layered over Talons, shook the skies. Ina had only just burst through the first natural force art, only to be greeted by a true monstrosity. But what Talon hadn't expected occurred at that moment. As fast as he was to adapt to taking Aina seriously, Aina was a touch faster. Never did Talon consider that someone would have to actively make such a choice for him. The only one he could even remotely accept such a thing from was the demoness. But right now, he had no choice but to accept it. The dullness in Ina's eye vanished. She was waiting for her husband to appear, but if she died before he got here, wouldn't that be unacceptable? She forgot about everything else and focused on the opponent in front of her. The instant she did, it was like the skies had overturned for her alone. Roses of blood appeared around her, force arts pooling from the surroundings, spontaneously spawning, no different from Ina's thoughts and clairvoyance. But this time, she felt like she was on another level entirely, because she had tapped into the abilities of a wise Star Order. A force pill formed in an instant, so quickly that the maw of the flood dragon had only just opened when it appeared before her palm. Aina lightly slapped out, and the force pill flew into the mouth of the dragon. Bang! It only faintly touched the lightning when shattered. It seemed like things were over, until the flood dragon convulsed, collapsing from the skies as though ill. Talon didn't notice until it was too late. The instant his vision cleared, his dragon falling out of the skies, he was greeted with Ina's fist. Bang! His nose collapsed into his skull. A sharpness radiated from his eyes as though he didn't feel the pain, and he swung his arm at Ina's head. His pupils couldn't help but tremble when he realized Ina's wing was already there. Just what happened? How was she reading him so easily? The gap in power between them was obvious, but she was his perfect counter. No, she must be receiving help from somewhere else. He had been defeating her too thoroughly before. Just how was this happening? Was it that pillar of light? Peng! His hammer rebounded off Ina's wing heavily. What? This time, Talon couldn't even hold back his reactions. His hammer bounced back, almost flying out of his hand as though he had hit some sort of solid rubber structure. This wasn't the density of Ina's wing last time he touched it. What the hell happened? He barely had the time to smell the medicinal effects in the air and come to a realization. She hadn't formed one pill in that split instant. She formed two, and the second was for herself, for no other reason than to change the structure of her body for this moment right here. Just what sort of demon was he facing? The spring back of his hammer left Talon's chest wide open. He could already see Ina blasting right through him. Such an opening in a battle of experts when the other was entirely unprepared only meant death. And yet, he died in a manner he could have never expected. Who the hell touched my wife? An arrow fell from the skies, piercing right through his chest in the very opening Ina created. Chapter 3287, Together. Chapter 3287, Together. Death didn't seem to have changed the compatibility of Leonel and Ina's combat styles. If Ina was the one to strike, she would have surely heavily injured Talon, but the battle would have been unlikely to be obvious. To make the rebounding effect so pronounced, she had to divert a lot of her blood force, so the physical strength Talon had been expected had likewise been limited. But much the same, like she had said, she trusted him. Leonel appeared high in the skies, pissed. There wasn't even a bow in his hand. It was impossible to tell where the arrow had come from. It was too fast, too sharp, too quick, and too powerful. At first, there was nothing but a small hole at the start, so controlled it was imperceptible, and then his torso was gone. Bang! A pair of legs and a hip hung in the skies for a moment before falling. Leonel was truly enraged, but he suddenly had nowhere else to vent. It wasn't until a person appeared before him that his expression softened. Ina threw herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Guilt flickered through Leonel's expression. He had truly not wanted to fall. If at all possible, he didn't want to use this card. He knew what would happen after he died because he had witnessed it before, with Ina's death. Why was it that the demoness had gone through so much trouble, all the effort in the world just to bring her husband back, and yet Leonel could bring Ina back so easily? It was the same reason Leonel could bring Ina back so easily, and yet was helpless to do the same for his mother and father. Ina hadn't truly died. She was in limbo because she was a god Childi. Because of that, Leonel had been able to bring his wife back from the brink of a true death. But there was another elephant in the room. It was the same thing for ninth-dimensional existences. The reason they could come back to life after they died was because they never truly dispersed and left the world. Of course, being killed by the likes of the demoness, or anyone who understands how to truly impose their will on the world, would make that ninth-dimensional title worthless. But it was enough for Leonel to know that he could use this to his advantage. So long as Ina was to break through, she should be able to sense his lingering aura. And if she could, with her clairvoyance, she could reattach their souls herself. Once that happened, it was a simple matter of her triggering one of her abilities. Their soul bond now was on a level that was truly unfathomable. They had already been united thanks to Ina's clairvoyance, but Talon was the last piece she needed to understand something fundamental. The barbarian race's method of fate reading and scrying was completely different from what she was used to, but she realized, precisely because of that she was trying to actively use something that should be passive, truly passive. However, how could someone turn their brain off? Doing so was impossible. Even for someone who had had clairvoyance almost all her life, Ina still had thoughts from time to time. Talon and the barbarian race were the same way. It was what separated them. Talon was actively thinking, actively deducing. While it seemed he had clairvoyance, he was analytical at heart and a force crafter by trade for a reason. But the contrast made Ina realize that that wasn't her path. So how could she take a step forward? How could she truly turn her brain off? Trust. The answer was right in front of her. To hand her body, her mind, her soul over to the man she had already given her everything to. She hugged Leonel so tightly, basking in the feeling of his arm around her waist and the hand caressing the back of her head. His presence alone soothed her soul, but his touch took what remained of her ache away. "You look kind of sexy with red hair," Leonel suddenly said. "You're going to let me try it out for a test drive sometime, right?" Ina sniffled. "Are you trying to say that I'm not perfect the way I am? Isn't this the way you are? Don't try and change the subject. You're still in the doghouse for daring to die." "You talked so big, and what was the end result?" Leonel's lip twitched. He had all the minds and thinking speed in the world, and yet had no rebuttal. Don't do that again," Ina began to sob again. "Oh, or I will destroy this world and everything that's left in it." Leonel held on to his wife in silence. The two stood there in the skies, as though there wasn't a battle raging all around them, as though this was the last time. Then let's do this together," Leonel finally said softly. Ina sniffled again. "It's about time. What's that supposed to mean? You know exactly what it means. Don't make me cut it off. Such vulgar language for a married woman with 2 children. What would the world think if they could hear you?" "The world can shove it." Leonel's boisterous laughter filled the skies. Of course he knew exactly what his wife meant. All his life he had taken on the burden alone, forcing him to wait by the sidelines. Even this time, when she had put herself through so much just to have a sliver of a chance to stand by his side, he had ignored her efforts and fought alone. This time, they would fight together. "You know, this isn't technically the first time we fought together. Why are you getting so worked up?" Leonel asked innocently. Leonel got a pinch that he felt from his waist down to his soul in return. He winced. I give. His laughter filled the skies once again. "Let's go end this." There was a flash in his eyes. "This time, we crush her." He took his wife's hand. The action had barely been completed when reality froze and Ina's eyes grew dull. A woman with a fiery violet aura appeared, her hair dancing like streams of amethyst waters. The demoness Ophelia. Chapter 3288. My Queen. Chapter 3288. My Queen. Leonel lightly held on to the dull Ina's hand, his expression unchanged. He held no weapons in his hands at all. Standing there, still completely in the nude, one would have thought that he was in an embarrassing situation he had just been walked in on, but the calmness in his eyes painted a completely different picture. The momentum of the demoness now was far more like her real strength, her power pouring out in all directions. She towered over Leonel, her presence even larger. It felt like he was facing off against a star, a luminescent being that made the void race look like nothing more than empty bags of air. This was a woman that truly embodied the vastness of the universe, the endlessness of the abyss, the depth of nothingness. The demoness's gaze never shifted to Ina a single time. It might as well have been that this granddaughter-in-law of his didn't exist. There was a calmness to her, but Leonel's mind expanded. In that moment, his dream force spread out, blanketing the same region as the demoness's own. He picked them out one after another, stray, dispersed, and diluted to such an extent that she couldn't even arrange them all properly. Maybe he too would be like this if he didn't have the controllability index. All of his thoughts, all of his memories were arranged in the prism that was his dreamscape. He accessed them all with ease, feeling them as much and as purely as he could, but he still remembered almost slipping down a road. Back when Ina left him, he weighed their memories on a scale, placing one memory after another as though to see if he could measure her worth in his life. Luckily, in the end, whatever ridiculous calculation scheme or method he came up with ended up just barely allowing her another chance. But sometimes, he thought about the man he would have become had he not given her that chance. Would he be like this, empty to everything, endlessly calculating? Chasing after something so fervently and yet not being in the state of mind to even remotely enjoy it should he ever successfully grasp it? This was the greatest tragedy of the demoness, the one thing she didn't seem smart enough to realize. Even if she found the man that was her husband in every aspect, in every way, was she still the woman he would remember? Would she still be the woman he chased after, pined after, gave up everything for? The demoness's pupils trembled, the whispers of Leonel's thoughts crashing into her in waves. Maybe Nilrim loved the demoness far too much to put things to her in this way, but this current version of the demoness was truly just that. When she embraced this title, she had long left behind what it meant to be Ophelia. That version of herself had died with her husband. "My wife made me a better man. It's unfortunate you didn't notice or understand until it was too late." The violent trembling of the demoness's pupils only grew more feverish until it vanished. Her dream force expanded just as violently, exploding out in all directions as she chased something, and then she found it. Peace. There it was. She could finally feel peace. A hint of sadness flashed through Leonel's eyes, something he never thought he would feel for this woman he had hated almost all his life. She had given up long ago. She just didn't know it. Leonel let go of his wife's hand, grasping her waist lightly and kissing the side of her forehead. "Together," he said softly. She didn't reply, her eyes still dull, her body unmoving. Leonel released her. Raising his hand, a spear swirled into being, a tempest of king force rising through the air as a violet gold band appeared across his forehead. He wanted to do this with his spear. It just felt right. He raised his blade, feeling the hand of his father land on his, and then his grandfather before him, and then, in a far-off distant land, he felt his grandmother's. The grandmother his grandfather would remember, Ophelia Morales, a woman he may have once been happy to call grandma. The demoness's eyes were calm, but the beating of her heart returned. She tried to expand her dream force further, but she had suddenly run into a limit. A limit? That was impossible. She was a goddess, a demoness. How could she have a limit? It won't make a difference, she spoke. How can you work together? Can't you see that she's too weak to follow you? You, little lion, you're perfect. You can help your grandfather return. You've passed my final test. No, you passed it twice over already. Now I'm certain, now I'm sure there won't be any mistakes. Her words were so calm. They looked like they came from a woman that couldn't have been more measured and level-headed, but the more she spoke, the more insane she sounded. How could a woman who wanted to use her grandson to reforge her husband possibly be in her right mind? It was suddenly all too obvious to Leonel why she had needed his dream-assure heart. She was treating the lives of her descendants as pawns to move on a chessboard, and the reason she could do so was just as obvious to him. A mother's love for her children and her children's children was unconditional. She didn't care what sort of tweaks Velasco's or Leonel's personality might have undergone after forcing them to reincarnate, or, at the very least, the demoness had been twisted so much that she didn't. But her husband, that was a man she chose with her own hands. He had to be perfect. He had to be the man she envisioned, the man she had always pined after. He could only be one way. He could only be the very best. And Leonel was that. You're wrong, Leonel replied lightly, pity overwhelming his other emotions. It's because we lean on one another that we are strong. I can only stand here because of her. She is my queen. The dull Ina's lips parted as though on instinct. And he is my king. The demoness's pupils stopped trembling, constricting into pinholes. The pair of husband and wife moved at the same time, rushing into battle side by side in earnest for the very first time. Chapter 3289, Kill. Chapter 3289. Kill. The two seamlessly weaved in and out of one another, their images blurring and somehow becoming difficult to track. Leonel was flooded with natural force arts, his body that of a spiritual, and it felt like he embodied the world itself. Ina was akin to a specter. Her soul was locked away in her body, undergoing a perfect fusion. But now, it had become so perfect, so seamless, that even her dream force couldn't be detected within the dream plane. One fused into the world, one entirely disconnected from it. When they worked together, one burning star and one shadow, one specter and one blazing light, the world fell to obedience. Leonel's blade appeared at the demoness's throat. To her credit, as shaken as her mind was right now, she reacted quickly. She slashed out, a spear appeared in the same fluid motion. Whether by coincidence or not, she pulled out her endgame spear. She didn't even have the instinct to underestimate what she was seeing right this moment. Every fiber of her being was screaming danger. However, Leonel's spear vanished. Space? No, Leonel had literally erased himself from existence. How was that possible? Only she had reached this level of dream force? The demoness's mind had been spread out too far for her synapses to connect fast enough. By the time she realized that Leonel was relying on Ina just as much as she was relying on him, Ina's palm had already slammed against her chest. Pucky, a spear ripped through her chest. At some unknown point, Leonel had written himself back into reality, appearing behind her seamlessly. However, it seemed like they had made a mistake. With the trajectory of Leonel's spear, it would run right through Ina's palm as well. But what actually happened made the demoness realize just how much trouble she was in. Leonel's spear became akin to an extension of his arm. This wasn't an analogy or an image painting sort of description. It was well and truly akin to an extension of his arm. He pulled the self-realm of force crafting to another level, injecting his very soul into his blade. Ina, even with her eyes dull and her mind blank, reacted in the very same way. The demoness felt herself lose control of her force once again. This was already the third time Leonel had succeeded in doing this, but she could hardly feel shocked when Ina seemed to do the same thing. Taking advantage of her loss of control, Ina reversed the flow of her blood. The demoness coughed up a mouthful of blood, her body shearing and shredding apart. She exploded, and then, in the far-off distance, she forcefully reeled in her blood and flesh, gasping for breath. Ina was already upon her. Leonel allowed his clairvoyance to direct the changes. While he could sense the changes to the demoness, Ina could read and react to them before they even happened. When Ina moved, Leonel reacted to his wife instead. This time, he trailed behind her, his mind sharp. Ina attacked, he would plan. The two halves of the coin played off against one another. There was a lot of talk about just who was the strongest in existence these days. But maybe no one expected that it would be a duo. The demoness recovered, pale-faced, only to find a fist at her head. Peng! Akin to the sound of metal clashing against metal, her neck snapped back. Leonel's spear weaved beneath Ina's arm, piercing through her chest. Ina's leg swept up, her shins slamming against the side of the demoness's head. Leonel had already retracted his spear, spinning it around his back in a seamless, fluid motion and slashing out with all his might. His blade came from the opposite direction in which Ina's kick had sent the demoness's body snapping toward, their momentum and strength multiplying over one another to slice her in two. Ina moved for her lower half, Leonel moving toward her upper. Leonel completed Spear Dance in an instant, pulling on Ina's clairvoyance to communicate and formulate the natural force art in a breath. Ina pulled on Leonel's calculative abilities, roses of blood appearing around her as she completed a force pill in the same breath. She slammed the force pill forward with a palm just as her husband thrust out his spear. Leonel roared, a complex magic circle appearing beneath his feet. His king force flooded into it, and then the force art rushed up his body, concentrating into his spear as he pierced forward. A concentrated blast of controlled spear force ripped through the demoness's forehead, through her ethereal glabella, and out of the back of her skull. There was an eruption of force, a violent tempest that shook the skies. Time became so warped and distorted that it seemed to unfreezing from the demoness's presence and continuing to move forward again. But then it suddenly reversed, flowing backward in a shuddering ripping. The demoness burst to pieces once again, her ethereal glabella falling from the skies in a sprinkling rain much like Leonel's had before. Leonel took a step back, appearing by his wife's side. Both of them wore placid expressions, Ina's dull, Leonel's cold as ice. They were both well aware that this wasn't over, but they were ready for more. No matter how many times she showed up, she would be crushed just the same. The ripping of time, its fierce reversal, rewrote reality once again. The demoness reformed, her expression paling further. There was a malevolent aura to her, as though she was truly infuriated, long having forgotten just what it was she was fighting for. All she felt was that these two were in her way, and they couldn't be here. They had to go away. If she wanted to see her husband again, they had to be erased. Go away! The shriek of a banshee filled the skies, and one after another, seas of invalids began to appear. Leonel's eyes narrowed as he seemed to sense something. These invalids, they felt like extensions of the demoness? What was? Leonel's pupils trembled as he understood. The final piece of the puzzle slid into place. You haven't been human or Dream Asura in a very long time. The first Dream Asura? The first human? No. The first variant invalid? No. She was the reason invalids even existed in the first place. Leonel had been wrong. Invalids weren't a creation of the Northern Star. How could they be when the Northern Star only existed to protect them from the vast nothingness? You don't even realize it, do you? They live because you do. They destroy because you want to destroy. You've dispersed your dream force so far you don't even realize the sort of carnage you've brought. Or maybe, subconsciously you do, and this is just exactly what you want. The invalids. They were products of the demoness's dream force. People who weren't able to escape the influence of her will for the destruction of the world. Her want to see everything crumble and collapse before her eyes. They were the truest essence of the demoness's helpless pain. Leonel looked off into the distance, his eyes landing on his uncle and aunt amongst the sea of monsters. He lowered his head, his expression darkening. A hand clutched at his, its warmth pouring into him, but at that moment, the chilliness in his eyes reached its peak. Kill. He and Ina spoke at once. Chapter 32090, Hide. Chapter 32090, Hide. Leonel didn't want to think about why the demoness had chosen to turn his uncle and aunt into invalids, but his mind whirred to its own conclusions almost instantly. And it filled him with fury. He knew when he sent his uncle out it would probably be the last time he saw him. He told his uncle to call on his name should he ever need help, but Montez, he would never do that. Especially not if he ran into the demoness, only to find that his wife had already become an invalid. Even Leonel couldn't trust what he would do in such a situation. He hadn't been there, he hadn't sensed it, but looking into his uncle's eyes from the distance, he knew how it had gone nonetheless. Much like he had almost been, his uncle was just yet another sacrifice, his wife nothing more than a small pawn to lure him in. His uncle's Dream Ashura bloodline had always been suppressed. Since his youth, only Velasco had been able to access it, but Leonel's father refused to use even an ounce of it, much like Leonel had for a while. Back then, Leonel thought that the demoness had just done this because she liked to watch people squirm, enjoying the rift that formed between the two brothers because of this. Maybe she was, in part, so sadistic, but it was clear that nothing she did was truly without cause or reason. This time, she benefited from the suppression of Montez's bloodline in some way. When Leonel thought about the difference he felt when his bloodline was activated and when it wasn't, it clicked. In his enlightened state, he had had many thoughts that he couldn't bring back to his suppressed self. His mind was too large, filled with too many things, for his suppressed self to keep up with. If he tried to remember them without the support of the Dream Ashura within him, his dream force and soul would shatter apart. It was only when he tapped into his bloodline would he remember again. Wasn't this the perfect way to hide something you didn't want other powerful Dream Force users sensing? A method both simple and yet elegant and perfect in its use. When Montez finally tapped into his Dream Ashura bloodline on his own, breaking free of the demoness's restraints, the only way she could continue to hide what she wanted, hidden, was by trapping his mind another way, forcing him to become an invalid. Upon becoming an invalid, everything that was once a person was devoured, leaving nothing but an endless desire for destruction. It was arguably an even better method of suppressing a mind that Dream Ashura blood had been. So the question was, what did the demoness want to hide? After knowing her story, the answer was obvious. She was hiding his grandfather, Ishmael. Leonel wasn't the only part of her plan. She was using bits and pieces of her sons and grandson to rebuild her husband. What better way to form the man she loved than the seed they formed together? Leonel would form the body. Velasco and Montez would form the mind. With the talent she had granted their descendants, and his mind stored away in the exact frame she remembered it, she would build the perfect man. Don't you dare move. You only have one job. Keep those annoying ancient humans off my back. Leonel said coldly, seemingly not speaking to anyone. Her head is mine. In a far-off distance, a hesitating Gervais stopped his slowly raising hand. In the end, he sighed and lowered it. For now, he would trust Leonel. Bang! Leonel's spear and Ina's fists carved out a path. They moved seamlessly with one another, in such sync and with such united will, that just the hairs of their skin brushed past one another as they shifted and glided across the battlefield. They wasted not a single ounce of movement. Fed by Leonel's fury, Ina's attacks reached a new level of potency. Blood ripped through body after body in winding scythes. The invalids themselves didn't produce blood after their deaths, but the motes of light seemed forcefully controlled by Ina, forming force pills of her own creation. These pills shot into the skies, falling down like meteors and erupting into nuke-like clouds of destruction. She concentrated the energy into powerful bombs, raining them down from above with impunity. Leonel's spear was relentless and violent, chiseling and precise. If one removed the enemies, it would look as though he was cutting out the perfect sculpture, his hands, palms, and blades gliding with heart-shuddering accuracy. All the while, he never looked at an opponent a single time, his gaze firmly locked onto the demoness who was shrieking in the distance. Her pale face, the cold sweat that marred her once beautiful but now twisted features, the wavering of her force. He felt it all. Today, they would kill and kill and kill to their heart's content, until there was nothing at all left. There was a flash before Leonel's eyes and his uncle appeared. His heart sank, but his blade didn't pause a single time. Their spears crossed, a clash reverberating through the air with a battering force. At that moment, he finally looked at something other than the demoness, staring into his uncle's eyes and feeling the hurt deep within them. There was something in there, at least that was what Leonel wanted to think, but his deductions told him otherwise quickly. That pain, that fear Montez was feeling, it was for no other reason than the shrieking banshee behind him. All he wanted to do was please her, and he feared what it meant if he couldn't. "No!" the voice of the demoness came. Memories danced through his mind, of the man standing behind the counter in an armor of shimmering gold, of the first time his uncle took his armor off to show him just the sort of work he put in every day, of the first interaction of his uncle and his little girl and boy. Montez's head flew into the skies, his motes of light fusing into his spear as his aunt was shattered to pieces by Ina's palm. The husband and wife paired roared, their forces reaching a perfect sync as they sliced a path right through the invalid army. Chapter 3291, Unfair. Chapter 3291, Unfair. They cut through the army like a knife through butter. One life after another was reaped beneath their blade. Leonel felt an extra hand on his spear, and his fiery fury fueled his every action. The demoness had surely not expected Leonel to cut down Montez so easily. Not because he was so strong, he was not. In fact, he was among the easiest opponents here. Leonel would read her like she was an open book. He had long stepped off her chessboard, and he was gazing at it from above, his chaotic aura suppressing her own. She wanted him to hesitate. She wanted him to feel the same torn feeling she was, to change his mind and realize that giving up everything to save someone you loved only made perfect sense. Wasn't it only natural to do so no matter what the cost? Yes, it was only natural. As for sending his aunt after them as well, Leonel saw through that even more easily. She actually wanted Ina to kill her. She wanted to form a rift between Ina and Leonel, breaking the seamlessness of their communication and teamwork. If Ina so carelessly took the life of Leonel's aunt, how would Leonel feel about that? How would he react? Even now, she was still trying to play mind games. No, at this point, it was all she could play. She couldn't gather her true strength. Her mind was too dispersed. And yet, rather than trying to reel it in, she was desperately trying to expand it further, to run away from the pain Leonel was trying to force her to face, the guilt. It wasn't going to work, because, as Leonel said, there were no gods in this world, there was no one without a limit. And this time, having run so far, and for so long, she had reached hers. Leonel and Ina appeared before the demoness. "Protect me, I command it," she shrieked. But in her fury and confusion, she didn't seem to have noticed yet that there was nothing left of the invalid army to protect her. Leonel and Ina had carved through an army of millions as though taking a strolling through the park. Craters appeared in reality, rifts through times of the past, and even small peaks into potential futures. The power of Ina's force pill bombs had been so shocking that she had forced these rifts to appear, but they also served a secondary purpose. With them, it was impossible for the demoness to reverse time again. It was all too volatile. Her mind was in too much of a mess, and, like Leonel was drilling into her right this moment, she had her limits, just like everyone else. And just like everyone else who had suffered loss and was forced to learn to deal with it, she would too, or she would die right here and now. Leonel had always believed that no life was superior to another. What gave the demoness the right to make a mess of the world, rip families apart, cause so much death, destruction, and carnage, just because she was unable to accept something anyone else would be forced to? Why? Because she was strong? That reason was never good enough for him. She was lucky to be born with her talent. Nothing more, nothing less. It didn't make her or her desires more important than that of someone else. And today he and his wife would finally make her pay for that arrogance. Leonel's idol and constellation shimmered into existence, an enormous man wielding a spear and formed of stars taking shape. Ina's body trembled and her own idol appeared, a manifestation of herself rising high in the skies and standing side by side with her husband. She waved a hand and shingles of crimson armor formed out of the blood around her. Leonel's aura flared along with hers, his divine armor appearing for the very first time in his battle with the demoness. Heavy robes formed of leather fell down his body, shimmering in whites, golds, and violets. His eyes became orbs of violet, his crown shining brighter and brighter. An explosion of creation filled the air, a painting of butterflies, fluttering birds, stars, and the most gorgeous of phoenixes and soaring dragons appeared around him. But what was more powerful than any of that was what wasn't seen. Hidden in his world of creation, his father's spirit, his grandfather's, his uncle's, they all layered onto one another. He thrust out with his spear with one hand, holding onto his wife's with the other. Ina punched out with all her might with one fist, her free fingers interlacing with her husband's own. They appeared before the demoness in unison, their manifestations bending the world to their will. In that moment, time seemed to slow, their determination solidifying. The power of the demoness felt like an unscalable mountain, a peak that stood beyond a peak, a heaven beyond a heaven. And yet, right then, crippled by her thoughts, this mountain fell to its knees, this peak crumbled, this heaven darkened, falling to an abyss that fell into a vast nothingness. In the end, maybe she too was just as tired as the northern star above. A spear pierced through the right of her chest, a fist punching through the left, her body convulsed. In a shocking display of will, she tried to twist reality once again, pulling on time to reverse to allow her to live. She had always done it so easily in the past, no one could kill her, she was a goddess, the demoness. But she realized at that moment that even she would have to face death one day. It was something she had never considered, a possibility that never crossed the vastness of her mind. But now she had no choice but to face it, because the gaze of her grandson was forcing her to. Die, Leonel said coldly. Ophelia's heart shook. Such hatred, tears fell from her eyes, and she just stopped. Her head lowered. In a fraction of a moment, her dream force sprung back to her body, and her mind was forced to analyze everything at once. But maybe this was the unfairness of the world, the unfairness she had forced everyone else to live through all this time. Even with her speed of thought, she didn't have the time to analyze it all. Bang, she crumbled. Chapter 3292, A Weak Little Human. Chapter 3292, A Weak Little Human. Leonel huffed out breaths, but he managed to catch his breath after just a few. He didn't feel stressed, nor too fatigued. Holding onto his wife's hand, maybe a little too tightly, he felt he had all the support he needed. He slowly lowered his spear, his weapon vanishing into motes of sparkling light that peeled away into fluttering butterflies and soaring birds. Looking to his side, he found his wife looking over at him at the same time. They didn't say a word, silently embracing one another. "I'm sorry," Ina said softly. Leonel stroked the back of her head, feeling comfort in her touch. "It was always going to be impossible for us to make it this far without giving up something. I still feel like we lost too much." Leonel didn't reply, his hold on her tightening just the slightest bit. Too many people had died. To his shame, there were probably more than Leonel had had the bandwidth to pay attention to. So many people that deserved more fell in silence, falling in some corner of the battlefield never to rise up again. It was a tragedy on a scale the likes of which had never happened before, and likely would never happen again. Taking his wife into his arms, Leonel soared high into the skies. He could already feel a veil over the world loosening. Without the dream force of the demoness suffocating and blanketing existence, the desire for destruction was satiated a great deal. It was so ironic. The demoness had killed so much in hopes of buying some time, but the more she killed, the closer to destruction they all got. The northern star looked as though it was within arm's reach. But Leonel had to cross countless miles to truly make it to it. It had a size that was truly unfathomable. Recalling memories of sitting before it and how small it had felt, Leonel wondered if he had even caught up to his future self in strength yet. Funny enough, it seemed that if his future self had been here, he would have been able to win this battle all on his own. Leonel looked down at the woman in his arms. She cuddled into him, her head resting on his chest, her smile small and peaceful. It seemed that in this soft silence, she had already accepted things for as they were. It was a shame, though. Leonel couldn't manage to see himself as some sort of moral savior, some existence that had a heart of gold that could give up everything. If he didn't have his wife, well, he had already seen how that played out. The destruction he brought was even worse than the demoness's had been. The difference was that existence had been so close to death that he didn't have the chance to do more. But in the end, there had been no one left in the world but himself. With such a pathetic showing, as much fury as he had toward the demoness, was he any better? I will be, Leonel thought, holding onto his wife a little tighter. For their sake. He leaned down, kissing Ina's forehead. She shifted slightly, greedily taking in his scent. The light of the northern star should have been fierce enough to burn them away, but their strength stood strong, intertwining with one another. Leonel reached out a hand, his palm touching the boiling gases of its surface. In that moment, he felt something. The heat vanished, a warmth enveloping him. The danger that seemed to always encompass the northern star vanished. Instead, he could almost feel like it was smiling down at him. Stars, they were indeed the thing that fueled existence. Without them, there would be no life at all. Without their warmth, the energy they provided, the light they produced. His grandfather, or rather the demoness's first and true husband, had likely been the first man to wield Starforce. From that, he created the Northern Star, using it to mitigate the greatest mistake they had made. They were too talented, too early, they lusted after power too much, chasing peak after peak without regard. And in the end, they took too much and the world threatened to collapse. The only way to reverse things was by giving it all back. It was hard to fathom just how much power his grandfather had accumulated to be able to support the world for so many trillions of years simply by returning what he had taken. The Northern Star lineage was for this, It seems that you were trying your very best as well. The warmth seemed to tremble the slightest bit. Leonel took a breath and his aura flared up. His eyes blazed with a white gold, Starforce blooming off of him in waves. Then came his King Force. His grandfather had created Northern Star Force. It was the guiding light of the world, the one thing that seemed capable of holding back the world from destruction. Leonel created King Force. It was a force that broke the laws of the world, giving without seemingly having taken anything at all. Fusing his Dream Force, his Vital Star Force, his lineages, and so many of his comprehensions, he created this shocking force. However, it still wasn't enough. Light Force. It was peculiar. In all of these strong forces, Light Force seemed the most out of place, like it wasn't meant to be here at all. But Leonel knew that it was the final piece to the puzzle. The blueprint was already there. His grandfather had countless years to consider where he had failed, and in the end, he spurred on the creation of a lineage factor that was built on star and light force. Why was that? Well, Leonel smiled, recalling lessons from Earth. This was the beauty of the world. It was why there was no one life more valuable than another, and it was why he would stand by that philosophy for the rest of his life. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, the faster one moved, the slower time was in relation to everything else. Meaning, the only thing in all of existence that had never aged since the beginning of time itself was light force. If one wanted to breathe life into the universe, what other force would you even use? He had always wondered why light, of all things, would have such strong healing properties. What sense did that even make? Who would think that a weak little human with no power at all would forge the theory that would save a society of gods and demons? Leonel's eyes shimmered with a bright light and a sweeping warmth spread across the land. Chapter 3293, A Chance. Chapter 3293, A Chance, you're slowing me down, hurry up. A little boy rushed up a hill, sweat beaded down his brow, locking his bronze-brown hair to his skull as though it were another layer of skill. There was a brightness to his brown eyes that seemed to ignore his fatigue entirely. Diego, I swear to God, if you try and rush me again, I will stick my bow up your ass. The little boy cringed. Can you not speak like that? What? You don't like it? Go talk to Lena then. The little girl huffed. Lena? I told you she just asked for tips on how to thrust. You don't see the innuendo in that. You're overthinking it. She was talking about her spear. No, I am not, you airhead. The two rushed to the top of the mountain. They might have been 13 or 14 years old at most, but they scaled a mountain as tall as 10,000 meters through the harsh weather and managed to be among the first to get here. The air was sparse, the winds were harsh, and there was a thin layer of snow over everything. It should have been the case that a region like this was buried beneath the snow entirely. How could it not be when it was so high in the skies? But the thick layer of billowing steam had something to say about that. This wasn't a mountain at all, it was a volcano. And up ahead, fighting against the harsh elements of the cold, there was an enormous pool of lava in which a man stood. Well, they thought he did anyway. It was impossible to see much of anything, and the youths rushing up here were fighting against their force being constantly drained by this scorching, howling steam. Damn it, Diego cursed. Look at that. Because of you, Quignon got here at the same time. Somehow, Diego saw through the mist as though it wasn't there, his senses landing on another boy who had rushed up the mountain. Because of me? Yes, because of you. We were making good time, and then you wanted to start yelling about girls that don't matter. Do you know how much oxygen we wasted just arguing? Well, if you don't care about what I have to say, just go vent to Lena then. Diego was speechless. Eleanor, please. Don't touch me. I'm not talking to you anymore. I would hate for you to waste your breath on me. Diego didn't even know what to say, but he suddenly found himself feeling angry. Hey, not all of us have a king for a nephew. If I don't grasp this opportunity, I'll never have another one. Diego froze. Eleanor's head had snapped toward him, her golden pigtail bobbing. It had only been an instant, but her emerald irises had already begun to turn red, her eyes brimming with tears. Diego cursed again. This time, he had really stepped in it. But she was really starting to piss him off with this nonsense. He hadn't even spoken with Lena for more than 2 or 3 sentences. What the hell was with this constant pressing? It had been an entire week of this. Ha ha ha! Trouble in paradise? Eat my blade. Diego was almost late to react, a saber striking out for his back. He hurriedly spun, pulling out his spear from his spatial ring and thrusting out. Bang! He took a heavy step back, almost slipping in the snow. The webbing on his thumb broke apart, blood flowing down his palm and making his grip slippery. He didn't even get a chance to steady himself before a second blow was already on the way. On a distant planet, Leonel suppressed the last of his wife's moans, kneeling on top of her and sliding his cock between her lips. He laughed when she almost choked, her sputtering and her slapping at his thighs finally making him roll over. Ina collapsed into his arms, pouting a bit, but the light of lust in her eyes said that she almost wanted to do it again. Just as she was about to say something, though, she paused. Aren't we forgetting something? Leonel blinked and then nodded. True. He pulled his wife into his arms, playing with the soft skin of her waist as he waved a free hand. The scene on the volcano top appeared, and Leonel's gaze softened a bit. It seems things are getting a bit heated. Sending Eleanor there is a bit much, don't you think? She doesn't have the maturity of the others. She's a little pampered, Leonel said with a grin. But she's my aunt, after all. Ina playfully slapped his chest, and the two laughed. Diego coughed up a mouthful of blood, almost falling to a knee. Diego! Eleanor cried out from the side, suddenly feeling terrible. It was her fault he had been distracted. Quignon was strong, but he was firmly half a tick below her boyfriend in power. It shouldn't be like this. Why are you so distracted? A voice Eleanor recognized all too well came from her back. She couldn't even react at all before her back was slashed open to the bone. Oops, Lena said softly, slipping into the shadow. Apologies, princess. I wouldn't want to harm you too badly. If I accidentally kill you, then wouldn't the king slaughter my entire bloodline? Would you like me to go easy on you? What percentage? 40% of my strength, maybe? 30%? Whatever the noble wants? Eleanor stumbled forward. Eleanor, Diego called out, his rage pumping through his veins. Bang! He was sent flying the moment his head turned, barely protecting his chest from being skewered through. H.A. They said you were the best? Quignon roared. According to who? Their voices attracted many over. One after another, the geniuses were quickly making it to the mountain peak, and when they saw Diego suffering so terribly, whether subtly or by instinct, they surrounded the region. They weren't fools. They knew who their strongest competition here was. If Diego fell, all of them would have a chance. Chapter 3294, A Budding Legend. Chapter 3294, A Budding Legend, Aina frowned. This is a bit cruel for children. Maybe, Leonel said after a while. All things considered, he didn't enter this world until he was 17, right on the very edge of his 18th birthday. He was legally considered an adult by Earth standards when his journey began. Here, these kids were certainly not that. More so for Eleanor. His grandmother's last child had taken the name of his mother, and was affectionately known as Little Two by most of them, as her full name was Eleanor Fox II. But because she was so pampered, her state of mind was nowhere near that of the other children in this competition. She was easily poked and prodded at, and she very easily lost her cool. The reason she had been hounding Diego for so long was precisely because Lena had planned it all out. Of course, Leonel knew this. He had been paying attention. It was just that he had no intention of interfering in a child's game. As much as they used his status to degrade Little Two, it was because he didn't interfere that they could do so in the first place. Otherwise, would they even dare to say such words so boldly? But, unfortunately, Eleanor wasn't mature enough to understand and take this in stride. And just as unfortunately, that was precisely why he couldn't interfere even as she suffered like this. His grip on his wife's waist tightened just the slightest bit, but then he exhaled. This was just a rite of passage. If they waited too late to help Little Two change her ways, she never would. Now was the best time. There was a fork in the road, and it would be up to her. Even though these were his thoughts, though, Leonel's gaze seemed far more focused on Diego. His grip loosened on Ina's waist, and he smiled. Show me something special. Blood leaked from Diego's lips, the tip of his blade trembling. Eleanor's form lay in the snow at his back, blood leaking from her body and pooling into a cloud of crimson. Every droplet clung onto the flakes of snow, jumping from one to the next. He felt his heart ripping apart. He couldn't even look back to see if she was all right, as a sea of people led by Quignon settled in before him. Why are you still fighting? Why don't you do us all a favor and jump over the other side? Quignon grinned. There was some blood between his teeth, a reminder of several things that made him feel both humiliated and infuriated. Even in this situation, Diego had managed to get a few licks in. Somehow, he was still standing, and that only made Quignon angrier. Diego's grip on his spear tightened. His sweat was starting to mix in with his blood. With the heavy steam hanging around, it was only getting harder for his weapon to not slip through his fingers. He had been so fatigued coming up the mountain in the first place, and now he was thrust into a battle like this one. When the others realized that Quignon hadn't been able to take him down, they began throwing in attacks from time to time. At some unknown point, he ended up with his back to this sheer cliff. His goal was just ahead of him, shrouded in that mist, but he couldn't even get there. It was supposed to be him. He was supposed to get the chance to spar against the king's son. He was supposed to be able to prove himself against the greatest talent in existence, to prove that he belonged, that his upbringing wouldn't hold him back. A giggle came from the side, and Lena appeared, snaking her arm around Quignon. What? Disappointed? You didn't think that I actually liked you, right? What are you worth exactly? Do you even have a lineage factor? Isn't your ability index also just C grade? Your growth potential is so limited. Diego didn't seem to have heard her, his senses so focused on threats that bullshit was filtered out. But he did hear the next thing. He felt a small pressure on the back of his leg. Diego, Diego, the voice sounded as though it was hyperventilating, struggling to even breathe properly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. I'll never complain about something so stupid. I'm sorry. I'll be the best wife. I promise. Don't die, Diego. Don't die. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Diego felt his heart tremble. His grip on his spear tightened, his back standing straighter. He took deep breaths. Right, no matter what, he couldn't die. His jaw clenched. Lena sneered, and Quinion raised his head to the skies, laughing uproariously. We might not be able to kill the little princess, but you will certainly die today. You'll never get in my way again. Quinion stomped a foot and rushed forward. He didn't like the look in Diego's eyes at all. Diego took a step to meet him. The earth wrapped around his feet as his earth force pulsed out in a subtle ripple. Using the added leverage on the slippery volcano peak, he pierced out. His blade had become frighteningly steady, but what others didn't notice was that its wooden polearm had grown two thick thorns, both of which pierced through his palms. He didn't have the skill of the king or his father before him. Not yet. He couldn't keep his blade steady on his own. But he was Diego. Not Leonel, not Velasco. He was his own man. He would use his own methods. Diego roared as though the pain didn't faze him. He clashed against Quinion's saber, the force of the latter almost sending him flying back, but the earth kept him intact this time. Quinion didn't expect the sudden force from the usually skillful Diego, and his saber almost flew out of his hand. Diego pressed, thrusting out his spear once, then twice, then thrice in quick succession. Recovering quickly, Quinion took a heavy step back, only for a spike of pain to jolt through his heel. A small jet of rock appeared right where he stepped. His expression changed as he yelped, his body reacting on its own. A blade pierced into his ribcage, yanking and twisting right through the opening his own foolishness had created. Diego pulled out his blade, huffing for breath, his eyes glowing with a focused coldness. He didn't have much strength left, but he also didn't have much time left. Before Alienor died, he had to kill all of these people. And he would. He felt a mountain weighing on his shoulders. His spear flashed, sending Quinion's head flying into the air. Blood splattered across his face, but he didn't even react, nor did he care what Quinion's background was. He didn't even consider the competition anymore. It was entirely unimportant. All of these people made Alienor cry. That was enough to sentence them all to death. Lena's eyes opened wide and she shrieked, sheer terror marking her features. Like a wild beast on his last legs, Diego lunged forward, his every strike the pinnacle of efficiency, his brown eyes radiating cold, bloodthirsty intensity. Lena fell to his feet, severed at the neck, the chest, and the legs as though a butchered pig. Leonel held his wife, watching a legend slowly begin to build itself with a smile on his face. Ina smiled as well, her heart at peace. Whenever her husband was happy, she was happy. Leonel's lips slowly parted. It will be a joy watching you two grow. Dad, Mom, his voice was impossibly soft, but Ina heard him anyway, slowly squeezing his palm with a light pressure. You know, Ina said after a while. Leah and Leo are basically little adults now, already 17 years old, and their 18th birthdays are coming up soon. Leonel chuckled when he heard this. They hadn't wanted to become a second Fox Empire, so they put everything into raising their children. Now, the little ones were the mountain peak the other children were chasing, and it filled them with pride. But Ina hadn't given up on her big family just yet. Considering how long a life they had to live ahead of them, how could he disappoint his wife? His grip on his wife's waist tightened, and he lifted her up, pulling her on top of him. I did all the work last time. I think I deserve some service, don't you think? Is that so? Ina leaned over, whispering into his ear with a sultry tone in her voice. Where should I start, my king? She kissed his neck, and then moved to his lips. They fell into one another's embrace, a silent romance hanging in the air.